The events begin to take place in the main hall of the palace of the first Demon King, where a mysterious guy with closed eyes sits on a huge throne. Meanwhile, some girl began to approach the unknown man, as if she wanted to tell him something. The happy girl wanted to turn to the first Demon King and the best monarch Merlin Lucifer because she wanted to tell him something. Because of Merlin's appearance, the girl literally fell in love with him at first sight because he was very cute when he slept. Looking at the sleeping guy, she saw that he had not responded to any calls at all. That's why the clever maid came up with an idea and wanted to do something to wake up the master. Smiling, the girl moved closer and closer to the guy and wanted to do something that he had not allowed her to do before. With every second, the lady's lips were getting closer to Merlin, and she really wanted to kiss him. Merlin's younger brother rarely had such a good night's sleep, so the girl thought it wouldn't hurt to take advantage of the opportunity. Suddenly, on the street nearby, guards shouted at the top of their voices, greeting the goddess of light. Hearing this, the girl immediately became angry, because these scum of the Holy See appeared here at the most inopportune time. Turning around, the stranger wanted to pretend that she had not heard anything and was going to continue her activity. But as it turned out, due to the screams of Merlin's guards, Lucifer woke up and immediately decided to stop the girl. The smart guy smiled and wanted to ask the girl what she was doing here anyway. Embarrassed, the girl wanted to come up with some excuse, but she didn't even know what to say. So she just went and bit the guy who had been sitting on the throne the whole time, right on his finger. The Lord did not particularly like this, and he asked Lilith to be at least a little more serious and asked her if people from the Holy See had arrived. Feeling awkward, Lilith nevertheless admitted that if a little more time had passed, she would still have managed to kiss Merlin Lucifer. Realizing exactly what the girl wanted, Merlin smiled as he finally understood her intentions. So the guy immediately hugged the girl and was about to tell her something. In the opinion of the young man, his interlocutor was still a rather stupid girl. The hero also decided to explain to her that there was no one in this world who could sneak up on him unnoticed just like that. Lilith immediately laughed, as she considered her brother to be the best. But at that very second, the warriors again shouted greetings to the goddess of light, saying that the holy army was invincible. Feeling a strong rage, the girl began to summon her magical weapon to teach the guards a lesson. Listening to the knights, Lilith was simply furious, because she wanted to understand when these scoundrels from the Holy Throne would finish, because they prevented her from enjoying communication with her brother Merlin. Looking at his interlocutor, the young man nevertheless decided to stop her, since he understood that this would end badly. The understanding guy exclaimed that there was no point in wasting your nerves on these cockroaches, and that there was no need to fight them. The hero believes that since these knights are in trouble themselves, it is better for him, because today could be his last day as the Demon King, since he will have to personally bury all the knights. That's why the boy exclaimed that Lilith should go with him, because he would need help anyway. After some time, the main character, together with his subordinate, arrived at the battlefield, where there were many different enemies. Ordinary people fought against previously unseen creatures that were very hostile. The battle was indeed difficult, and Merlin Lucifer, watching everything that was happening, came to the conclusion that his help here would not hurt. Looking at one of the girls, the young man came to the conclusion that she belonged to this generation of heroes. The warrior girl fought with true dignity and tried to do everything possible to ensure that her loved one survived. Although this girl looked rather weak at first glance, she could easily defeat enemies several times her size. Everyone admired the strength of this lady, and the way she decapitated this monster with her sword caused an unimaginable reaction from her allies. People shouted that they were ready to follow the heroine anywhere, because they were ready to enter into any battle with her. But as it turned out, there was a giant monster nearby that literally burst out of the bowels of the earth. This creature caused fear and panic among people who could do nothing to resist such a giant. The lady used her magical abilities and applied the ice spear technique, thanks to which she managed to repel the attack of the terrible creature. The allies were shocked by such a fast and spectacular battle. Watching everything that was happening, they opened their mouths and could not even say anything. Smiling at her allies, the lady exclaimed that they should be more careful if they did not want to die on the battlefield. This statement made the allies start crying, because they were grateful to Mrs. Alice, because she was both strong and gentle, and also beautiful, just a perfect girl. The brave girl exclaimed that she was the 233rd of the generation of heroes, and her name was Alicia Claudia, and she declared war here and now on all the monsters who dare to attack her people. Alicia Claudia has announced that she will begin a holy campaign against the Demon King Merlin Lucifer III. A huge army of people was approaching the Demon King's castle, and his minions were already visible nearby. Looking at the battlefield, the bishop exclaimed that these vanguard warriors were worthless, not from the common people, and they dared to drag the hero's wife away to save him. So this crime deserves severe punishment. The bishop's servant asked him not to be angry, because these outcasts from the vanguard were just useless cannon fodder, because they had not yet used their main trump card, the pride of their holy throne. These peasants are simply expendable. When most of them die, their main holy army will enter the battle and then take all the fruits of victory for themselves. But the servants were still worried about something, namely, whether the heroine could really become a worthy opponent to Lucifer III. The embittered master was sure of this, and asked the servants not to worry about it, because even if Lady Hero could not become a worthy opponent to Lucifer III, he would have another option. After all, their secret weapon was located in heaven. Suddenly, Alicia Claudia saw that the attack was continuing and her team was being attacked. Many monsters surrounded the vanguard team, making the battle much more difficult. The worried girl realized that things were really bad and something needed to be done. Looking up, she noticed something that made her very uneasy. But the bishop himself was glad, because this was a carefully thought-out siege fortress, which the Holy See had been preparing for hundreds of years, and it possessed unprecedented strength. It was the largest fortress on the continent. It is also the most beautiful, the most amazing weapon. The Holy See presents its highest masterpiece. This fortress has collected all the knowledge of countless sages. Absolutely all of the allies and opponents of the vanguard were simply shocked by what was happening. The heroine, looking at everything that was happening, did not understand what kind of terrible monster was in the sky. Therefore, everyone should have rejoiced, because here and now they would witness the triumph of the first most powerful weapon in the history of the Holy See. The terrible monster had a giant jaw and incredibly sharp teeth, so all enemies were afraid of it. Feeling great rage towards his enemies, the bishop exclaimed that all the filthy demons must die today. Watching everything that was happening, Alice realized that this old man had gone crazy, because ordinary people from the vanguard would also be hit. But it was already too late and nothing could be done in this situation, as the giant monster began to attack. Even Merlin Lucifer himself realized that the bishop was a real villain, since he turned his weapons on his own allies. A moment later, there was a powerful blow, causing an explosion of incredible proportions. The bishop began to shout that everyone should tremble under the iron hose of the crown of their Holy See. Then, in the name of the goddess of light, they should send all monsters to hell. Alice was still alive, but she struggled to her feet after the powerful blow. The cloud of smoke gradually cleared, and through it one could see Merlin along with his Lilith. This turn of events surprised the girl very much, because she did not expect that the enemies would be so close. Many enemies died during the impact of the vanguard's most powerful weapon, but some people still managed to survive. Suddenly Merlin exclaimed that of course people don't die after this blow. In the end, only the young master can choose who will die here and who will live. Enraged, the girl began to understand who this guy really was. Looking at her enemy, Alice realized that it was the demon king Merlin Lucifer. According to the bishop, this was simply impossible, since the power of the crown of the Holy See is simply unimaginable. Nothing can block it. The servant began to worry about the bishop because the demon king Lucifer III was too strong, so it was necessary to understand what the prerequisites for retreat would be. The bishop gradually began to lose his mind and shouted that none of his allies should be afraid because they did not know what fear was. The body of this white whale is made of various rare materials, and all the materials have been blessed and soaked in the blood of the goddess of light. It is the most perfect creation of the Holy See. It is the most powerful siege fortress in the entire continent. The white whale saint should have crushed this worthless Lucifer III with his entire body, because even the strongest saint attacks could not damage his body. Based on this, but purely logically, Lucifer III simply cannot withstand the attacks of the white whale. Laughing at what he heard, Merlin Lucifer exclaimed that this Keith was just a weakling, but since they spent so much effort on such similar stories, he would thank them a little. According to the young man, this Keith is indeed very weak. To defeat him, it will be enough to simply draw the blade. Having drawn his blade, the boy began to chop the giant fish into small pieces. Looking at everything that was happening, Lilith was simply glad that the owner was so strong. But the heroine was shocked by this turn of events, because she did not expect that the Demon King would be able to defeat such a powerful enemy. With just one impressive blow from Merlin, Lucifer was able to easily defeat the strongest being in the world. Even the young man's allies were simply shocked, as they did not expect that he possessed such colossal power. The bishop simply could not understand how this was possible, because it took a lot of resources to create this creature, but he managed to defeat it with just one blow. The frightened allies of the vanguard did not understand what to do in this situation, and simply watched what was happening. The giant fish fell with an incredible crash, causing a significant number of injuries. The brave warrior put down his sword because the battle was over and he had no one left to fight. The girl in love was incredibly happy that Brother Merlin really turned out to be the strongest in this world. Experiencing severe stress and despair, Alicia Claudia could not even imagine that this guy was capable of such a thing. All of the Vanguard's allies were still in shock and couldn't believe that they no longer had a chance of victory. Smiling at his enemies, the youth exclaimed that now it was the trash's turn, for he, as the first Demon King Lucifer, would grant them true death in his name. The frightened bishop turned to the hero and asked for help, because if she did not stop him now, they would all die. According to Lady, the bishop was right because she is a hero and only she can stop the Demon King. In the name of those who had fallen on this battlefield, she was going to judge the Demon King here and now. Possessing an incredible gift, Merlin Lucifer sensed his enemy and knew exactly when he would attack. Thanks to incredible agility, the guy managed to react to the enemy's unexpected attack and prepared for battle. But in reality, the Demon King launched a more unexpected attack and attacked the Vanguard's allies. Each of the Vanguard's allies tried to ask for help from the Goddess of Light, but it was completely useless. The Demon King's furious power struck, causing all of the Vanguard's allies to suffer pain and agony. After such a strong blow, the bishop could no longer remain in place, and even his headdress flew into the air. Immediately after this, the bishop's headdress fell completely to the ground, which meant that the battle was over. It seemed that absolutely all the enemies were defeated, and even Alice was unconscious after such an unusual attack. This was the final battle that marked the final reign of the Demon King Merlin, and thus officially begins the story between the unemployed Demon King and the hero. Merlin Lucifer was an infidel who was forcibly summoned to another world. Due to the fact that he possessed a powerful power from birth, Merlin became the third owner of the Demon King's castle, its proud ruler. However, due to the fact that Merlin was born with a heart curse, cardiac atrophy, his life is accompanied by severe chest pain, which becomes stronger and stronger every day. But not everything in this world is bad for him. Merlin has a magic demon blade, nicknamed Wentiao Galo. This sword imbues Merlin with a wondrous magic that extends the lifespan of its owner as long as he kills powerful enemies, thus soothing Merlin's pain from the heart curse. And the stronger the enemy, the better the effect, so Merlin looks forward and hopes that one day he will be able to fight the strongest creatures in this world. But this fat Keith was not worth it. He pulled the sword from its sheath. The pain in his heart subsided for only a couple of seconds. Fortunately, the battle was finally over, and the Demon King's palace no longer needed Merlin Lucifer. Thus, the young man realized that it seemed like the time had come for him to take a look at the outside world. After the great battle, Lilith realized that they would most likely have to say goodbye to their brother. Turning to the girl, the guy decided to ask why she was so sad. Because today was actually his last day as the Demon King, and after he was gone, Lilith would have to fend for herself. This statement caused the girl to panic, because she could not even believe that her beloved brother would leave. But it was really so, and the girl began to literally tremble with anger, experiencing strong discontent. Lilith immediately began to cry after this, as she felt lonely, because she had been with her brother since birth, and begged him not to leave. Even though she's grown up, she still loves to flirt and be capricious, even though she is already a grown-up girl. But if Merlin Lucifer stays in this place, he will die sooner or later from the heart curse, so the young man decided to ask Lilith if she really wants him dead. The girl did not want this, and she immediately threw herself into her brother's arms, saying that she also did not want her brother Merlin to leave her alone. After thinking for a moment, she decided to say that if next time Merlin's brother's heart hurts again, he can kill her, thereby continuing his life. Hearing this, the brother immediately calmed the girl down and hit her right on the forehead. After all, in essence, he could not do anything similar to his successor, who would have to sit on the throne. Lilith seemed not to hear this. She didn't care about herself at all. It was better than if Brother Merlin left her alone. While Brother Merlin was with her, she was ready to do everything for him. And even if he became disabled, she would still take care of him. Knowing that if he stayed here, he would face an extremely difficult future, Merlin Lucifer did not want to become disabled. Smiling at the girl, he said that he loved her too, but in that case he must leave, the only way he can cope with the curse of his heart. Once he copes with it, he only swears that he will come back to her, and then they will be together forever. This caused the girl great confusion, but she was asked to believe, and when that moment came, nothing would separate them, not even death, because they would be together forever. So she realized that Brother Merlin was really shameless. So suddenly he told her such words that he loved her, or something like that. In that case, Lilith certainly could not be capricious. But before Brother Merlin left, Lilith still wanted to give him one piece of advice. The advice was this. The outside world was full of girls who would be attracted to Brother Merlin anyway, and he must not give in to their seduction, otherwise something terrible would happen. No matter how many girls there were, many or few, Lilith was going to kill them all so that not a single one would remain. These words really struck the protagonist, and he realized that his partner had really gone crazy. However, Merlin Lucifer decided to leave and said goodbye to his partner. Suddenly, the young gentleman noticed the girl lying next to him. The girl from the opposing team tried to say that she couldn't take it anymore. The worried young man saw that the enemy had lost consciousness and had not woken up since then. But, it didn't matter anyway, and he decided to take Alice with him. Because of this, Lilith immediately began to get nervous, because she did not understand why Brother Merlin was doing all this, and why he needed a girl next to him. He did all this only to learn more about the outside world, as this journey would require bloody efforts and at the very least, a guide. Although this girl is too weak to be a hero, she has very good physical strength and willpower, which makes her useful. This angered Lilith, as she did not understand why Brother Merlin did not kill the hero, since it was his direct responsibility. It's okay, he didn't have to do that. After all, he's no longer Merlin Lucifer, the Demon King. At this point, the meeting ended, and Merlin said goodbye to Lilith for the last time. The young man also exclaimed that Lilith should not worry because he would definitely never fall in love with a hero in his life. All these events made the girl cry, because she believed that her brother should not leave, but could stay with her. At that moment, she tried to calm down, and thought that she should not be discouraged, and Brother Merlin would definitely return to her someday. And when that happened, he would definitely fulfill his promise. A moment later, Lilith realized that this was a real declaration of love. The Merlin brothers really left and said such beautiful words. Now she was looking forward to this meeting even more. Lilith also realized that this is why she must justify the trust and hopes of the Merlin brothers. It was not for nothing that he confessed to her. But until he returns, she must carefully study how a good future wife should behave. Meanwhile, Merlin Lucifer's path continued, and he pulled the hero to himself to use her as a slave. As it turned out, Alice was thinking about her loss at that time, and about the last battle in which she participated. From the moment she came down the mountain, absolutely nothing good happened. Having heard just a couple of laudatory phrases addressed to her, she foolishly believed these scoundrels from the Holy See. And this stupid girl thought she could defeat the Demon King. But in the end, she was completely unable to do anything to him because the Demon King did not notice her. It turned out that the girl's teacher was right when he said that her spiritual practice was still too weak and she had not reached the necessary level. There are many strong opponents in the outside world, so as she goes down the mountain right now, she will face many difficulties. It was only when Alice had truly disgraced herself that she finally realized that her spiritual practice was truly weak. Walking further along the road, the young man noticed something unusual that surprised him greatly. Before him, he saw many destroyed ships, of which only fragments remained. The smart guy immediately decided to put Alice on the floor to scout out the area. Looking at the wrecked ships, the guy realized that he probably needed to somehow get a whole ship. After some thought, Merlin Lucifer decided to set out to find a boat to travel by. Meanwhile, Alice was still unconscious and didn't know where exactly she was. Suddenly, a threatening howl of some creature was heard nearby. Because of this, the girl immediately woke up and saw that a monster was standing in front of her. Feeling a strong fear, she immediately began to walk away from the villain who was going to eat her. Feeling panicked, the woman realized that a demonic wolf was trying to attack her. The terrible creature had a powerful jaw, with which it could easily finish off the girl. Alicia Claudia realized that the monster was really very close to her, and she definitely wouldn't be able to escape quickly. Fortunately, the main character was nearby and decided to protect the girl from the attacking monster. Smiling, the young man shouted at the monster not to disgrace himself. Although this angered the terrible creature, it understood that this guy was actually much stronger than the wolf itself. Looking at the girl, the boy explained that she belonged to him, so the wolf had no right to eat her. Despite the pain, the wolf still decided to submit to the great master, because he realized that he was not his rival. Feeling awkward, Alice realized that her companion had saved her again. The lady's heart was indeed beating very fast, for she was in a panic because of the terrible enemy that had forced her to wake up. After some time, the young man and the wolf managed to become friends, and he happily stroked the terrible creature. Besides, judging by his cheerful expression, Merlin Lucifer didn't look like a villain at all. Trying to come to her senses, the girl still wanted to think that this guy was the Demon King. He only saved her because of his disgusting and dirty intentions. The boy decided to let the innocent wolf go because he realized that it no longer posed a threat to his partner. Turning to the hero, Merlin, Lucifer decided to find out if her name was really Alice. The worried lady immediately decided to find out what a guy like him needed. Threateningly, the young man asked the girl what her guesses were, because the guy needed him when he came face to face with such a beautiful girl. All this time, Alice thought that she liked this guy, and his appearance attracted him, which is why he was going to desecrate her soul. Drawing her sword, the girl screamed that she would never allow such a demon to defile her soul. As the fight began, Alice tried to strike with her sword while Merlin tried to say something. The lady didn't care at all what exactly the villain wanted to tell her, because she wanted to finish him off. The insulted lady dealt such a strong blow that an ordinary person could not have withstood it. But the Demon King was able to easily parry this blow, because he is much stronger than Alice. Having touched the girl, the young man decided to address her as a sweet lady. After all, from this day on, Alice's body belongs only to Merlin Lucifer. Upon touching the lady, she immediately became embarrassed, as she realized that she was much weaker than the Demon King. But the girl still didn't want to give up, and immediately pushed the bossy guy away. Feeling very angry, she screamed that she was a hero and her name was Alice, so she would never bow her head to such an evil and disgusting creature. Hearing this, the young man felt rather strange, because he realized that he was not a disgusting creature. But everything that actually happened turned out to be simply funny for the young man, because the hero was much weaker. Immediately after this, Merlin Lucifer decided to explain to Miss Alice what exactly he meant, since she did not fully understand him, because it was not a request or a negotiation, and certainly not his plea. It's time for Alice to understand and accept reality, because she was kidnapped. And since the lovely lady had been kidnapped, the kidnapper hoped that she would serve him well. Merlin wished to be as gentle as possible with his companion, and exclaimed that he was very gentle in these matters. These words greatly confused the girl, because she began to understand what her interlocutor meant. I feel very awkward. The girl still decided to talk to the kidnapper, and said that in order for her to be obedient, one condition must be fulfilled, and she needs to know what exactly needs to be done for him. After thinking for a while, the young man decided that he should check Alicia Claudia first. For some time, he will have to use the girl's body to do something very unusual and absurd. For demons, this type of activity is quite normal and familiar, but for her, a human, it may seem inhuman. Not understanding what was happening, the girl just wanted to know what the villain meant. She had previously heard that some demons made human women pregnant and used their bodies as a breeding ground for the next generation of demons. After realizing all this, Alice also realized that she had never fallen in love, and now she was going to be used as a tool to continue the demon race. Grabbing the girl by the hand, the young man exclaimed that she needed to go with him. Unable to bear such behavior, she immediately pushed her interlocutor away and screamed at him not to touch her. Merlin didn't like the girl's behavior, and he realized that he needed to change tactics. Grabbing the girl in his arms, the guy asked her not to blame him for such methods, because she herself forced him to do it. The lady continued to say with all her might that she didn't want to do anything for the Demon King, but it was already too late. The confused girl thought all this time that the demon wanted her to give birth to his child. The angry young man began to twitch his hands and exclaimed that now they could begin. Trying to resist, Alice ordered not to come near her, as she was afraid of the Demon King, and if he took another step towards her, she would immediately jump into the water. Sometime later, they began to sail the sea in a small boat. Sensing danger, Alice grabbed the sword and tried to resist. Although the girl understood that she was much weaker, she still wanted to fight back against this scoundrel. That's why she shouted at Demon not to think that with such power he could do whatever he wanted, and if he took even a step towards her, she would finish him off right on this boat. The observant Demon King looked around and saw that there was in or lying nearby. The guy kicked the weight with all his might to perform an unusual trick. Thanks to this trick, Theor hit the girl right in the face, causing her severe pain. The unusual blow also caused the girl to lose her weapon, leaving her no longer able to resist. Alice clutched her head and kept repeating that it hurt a lot. At the same time, the boy was thinking only about how this stupid girl could become a hero. Looking at the attacker, the lady could not understand why he did this, because if he could not bear the desecration of her body, then he could do without it. With a sigh of relief, Merlin Lucifer exclaimed that he had seen a lot of gorgeous girls in his life, and he was not at all interested in some Alice. These words really hurt the girl, because she didn't understand why the Demon King didn't like her so much. A little embarrassed, the girl exclaimed that she even put on her most elegant armor to look even more beautiful. But in the Demon King's opinion, it was very funny, because he understood that the girl was trying to justify herself in this way. Since he didn't need her to desecrate her body, it was completely unclear why he kidnapped her. The smart guy pointed his finger at the ship and asked if the girl could see it. They will need this ship to cross the Orkney Strait together and reach land. As it turned out, all this time Alice believed that it was impossible to be so stupid, because it was simply impossible. According to the girl, in order to cross the Orkney Strait, the Holy See needed the strength of several hundred sailors rowing at the same time, as well as the magic of the blessing of the wind, and they did it in one day and night. There are many sea monsters in the Orkney Strait. They are invincible creatures throughout the ocean, and even the most powerful saints will have a hard time defeating them. Based on the above facts, even if they rowed in turns, they still would not be able to get out of the Orkney Strait alive. Moreover, when faced with these monsters, their physical strength would be exhausted by rowing. The young man laughed and exclaimed that Miss Hero must have misunderstood him, for he had not said that they would row in turns. Merlin Lucifer said from the very beginning that he was going to use the girl's body for inhuman purposes, so that only she could row. After thinking for a bit, the boy finally decided to say what he would do in this situation. The young man wanted to stand on the ship the whole way and enjoy the sea breeze. This turn of events really surprised Alice, because she did not expect to become a slave. Looking around, she could not believe that such a fate awaited her, because she was a hero, not a servant. 3 days later, the events continued at sea, where there was a strong storm. The brave travelers sailed on the sea, and it was very difficult to row because the waves were gigantic. After such a long journey, Alice did not understand how this was possible. After all, they had been sailing for 3 whole days, but for some reason the sea monsters still did not attack them. The sea is a terrible place, and if one decides to attack prey, one immediately risks death when faced with someone stronger. Surprised, Alice decided to ask Merlin again what he meant. He meant that one big guy had been watching them for a long time, so the other, weaker sea monsters did not dare to come closer. Because of this event, you need to hold on tight. If the boat starts shaking and Alice falls out, Merlin will not be able to save her, since he cannot swim. Looking back at her interlocutor, The girl exclaimed in surprise as she had previously heard that Merlin had torn apart a sea devil with one hand. But as it turned out, everything happened a little differently, because the sea devil himself met his death. Just like that, he wanted to get his supply of fresh canned fish, so he lured himself to the ground. On the ground, it was very easy to deal with him. Suddenly, waves began to rage nearby, and the young man exclaimed that the guy who was chasing them had decided to attack. This enemy was much more terrible than the sea devil, and much larger. The sea monster was truly impressive in size. It could easily knock over a small boat and try to attack travelers. All this time the boat was falling from a great height, and it was unknown whether Merlin Lucifer would be able to get on it, because he could not swim. Fearing the consequences of the flood, the young man came up with a plan on how to survive in this situation. Meanwhile, the frightened lady tried to rush into the boat to get on it. Fortunately, during the fall, the boat was still able to land right on the water. The main character and the girl managed to land on the boat, and they were safe and sound. Enraged, the giant creature began to scream and squeal, making Alice and her owner nervous. According to the girl, this snake was truly huge and resembled the Sea Lord of the Orkney Strait, who swallowed the Imperial fleet and 2 holy magicians. It had no equal in the entire ocean. Although Lucifer III was very strong, it was unknown if he could stand up to the Sea Lord. All this time, the main character just continued to watch the monster, drawing conclusions about its abilities. The evil monster continued to watch his food, and the desire to eat people grew with each passing second. Looking at her master, the girl realized that even Lucifer was shocked by such a monster. Suddenly the young man exclaimed that this serpentine sea dragon did not impress him. Laughing, Lucifer also said that this sea monster was indeed very ugly. Even though he had a long and thick neck, his head was still small, and it was very funny. The monster's mockery made him very angry, and now he wanted to finish off his victims even more. Trying to strike, the giant monster, using its fin, wanted to strike directly at the boat. Using his fin, the villain easily dealt a powerful blow to the small wooden vessel. This caused great fear among the sailors, as they did not expect the blow to be so strong. The worried lady didn't understand how they would fight such a huge monster. The creature became even more angry and was ready to kill its victim right now. The storm gradually began to gain strength, and the waves grew larger each time, making navigation on the ship even more difficult. Grabbing the sword, Merlin Lucifer exclaimed that the monster was indeed forcing him to resort to extreme measures. Having drawn his sword, the young man asked the monster not to blame him for his excessive cruelty. The legendary battle was about to begin, and Alice watched her master with surprise. Compared to the ship, this monster was simply gigantic, and it seemed that Lucifer would not be able to resist it. All this time a guy just smiled and pulled out his sword to strike. Having drawn his sword, the protagonist nevertheless struck a blow, and it was supposed to be the last one for the sea monster. What happened next surprised Alicia Claudia, because she didn't expect to see something like that. The monster gradually began to lose its vitality, and its gaze seemed empty. The sea waves gradually began to subside, and it seemed that the storm was over. After making just one strike, Merlin hid his sword, as the fight was already over. Alicia Claudia couldn't believe what she saw because she didn't expect her partner to be able to easily defeat such a terrible monster. Suddenly, the Demon King pinched the girl's cheek because she had let her guard down. The young man asked the lady not to stand there in a stupor and to react somehow quickly, because there was little time left. The alarmed girl exclaimed that the monster was still close to them and they were in danger. At that very second, the giant began to scream with all his might in pain, as if he was already dying. The giant water dragon's body gradually began to disintegrate, and many cuts could be seen on it. A second later, the monster literally disintegrated into tiny pieces as Merlin Lucifer cut him into sashimi. After thinking for a moment, the guy exclaimed that the blood of this guy would attract a whole school of man-eating sharks, and if they did not leave, they would not refuse to feast on human flesh. With a heavy sigh, the girl continued moving and seemed glad that she was now safe. Looking at her friend, Alice thought that this guy was really strong not only on land, but also at sea. If someone like him were to appear in human form, he would be able to easily do a lot of unimaginable things. Continuing to swim, the lady nevertheless decided to ask Lucifer why he decided to leave the palace of the Demon King. Looking at the sea, the clever young man exclaimed that he could not be called Lucifer because he had left the palace and was no longer the king of demons. Now he just needs to be called Captain Merlin, proud and great. This turn of events really confused Alice, because she didn't expect the Demon King to give up his status. The boy immediately noticed the girl's reaction and did not understand why she reacted that way. Laughing, the Demon King exclaimed that his companion simply did not understand humor, and she was really boring. He had become the strongest in the demon world. There was no one else equal to him in that world, and was it illogical that he wanted to leave the Demon King's palace to find other opponents? In fact, Merlin would be very ashamed if this stupid girl found out that the Demon Council had banished him and he had left due to lack of work. The confused interlocutor still decided to ask her partner if he really possessed saint rank power. But the boy didn't know that his strength couldn't be measured using their standard set of ranking criteria. If you look at it from that perspective, he must have worked incredibly hard to gain the power he now has. Genius is 9% hard work and 1% talent. This statement made the hero smile, because he realized that the interlocutor actually does not understand anything in this life. This stupid statement seemed absurd to the Demon King, and he simply laughed out loud. The girl herself should have guessed that this was pure nonsense. Only mediocre and talentless people like her could believe in such a parable. Personally, the Demon King believed that mediocre people like Alice should live the life they want and do what they can. Worried, Alice still decided to find out how she could become stronger than the Demon King. To show off just a little of his true power, the Demon King drew his sword. Of all the demons, only he can pull out this demon sword. That's why he became the successor of the Demon King. This is what everyone calls natural talent, and no amount of effort can compensate for it. This turn of events made Lady think, because she didn't expect that the Demon King was actually so strong thanks to his natural talent. Alarmed, Alice still wanted to know how the Demon King became so strong. Hearing this question, the guy thought for a moment, and then began to tell his story. His mother is the second royal monarch. She is known as Lucifer II. Merlin Lucifer himself was born a king. Royal blood flowed in his veins. He thought that he could live a quiet life and would only eat and wait for his death, along the way having fun with his younger sister every day. But not everything was so simple, and in the 197th campaign of the Holy See, his mother died during a battle. At that time, she and her sister could only rely on themselves, and the society of demons lives by the principle: the meat of the weak is the food of the strong. The Demon King then decided that he must protect his sister by any means necessary, so he must become stronger than everyone else. Through his fierce desire to become stronger, he killed the king of the ancient trolls in the snowy mountains, and also defeated the head of the minotaurs in the deadly forest. The next target was in the magma, where the fire demon was killed. The boy constantly practiced his ball skills, swung it until it was rusty, and came close to death countless times every day. And when he finally managed to become strong enough, the first thing he did was kill the demons that oppressed him and his sister, and then took the throne of the Demon King, which rightfully belonged to him. At that moment, it dawned on the ordinary guy that he had become an invincible Demon King. That was the end of the story. You could say his past was an epic poem about the prince's revenge. After hearing the whole story, Alice assumed that if this story was to be judged, it could be said with all certainty that Merlin had achieved everything thanks to his own efforts. But it wasn't like that. He didn't make any effort. He just strived for his dream of living a life in which he would only have to eat and wait for his death. It's just that from the very birth he was already the strongest. Feeling very angry, the girl wanted to know what this whole story about the sad past was about, because it seemed to her that they wanted to make fun of her. Laughing, the boy exclaimed that he did not make up this story. His past was indeed quite tragic, and he had great power that he could not use, so he was not much different from trash. But soon Merlin understood how to use the power, and after that, in an instant he became the strongest. It could be compared to the fact that he was sleeping, and when he woke up, he became invincible, something like awakening. Continuing to mock the girl, the former Demon King asked her to row the oars because he was a worthless hero. At the same time, Merlin thought that once he left the Demon King palace, he would immediately encounter a saint-ranked sea serpent, and the pain of his heart's curse would subside, but it would not last long. Leaving the palace was definitely the right decision. The boy also didn't know if it was a false feeling, but when he was next to this foolish hero, the pain from the curse of his heart became much softer. A few days later, the events continued on land, namely on some unknown island. Looking around, Lucifer couldn't tell if this was really the land of Britannia. The island really looked very impressive, as it was quite obvious that it was uninhabited. Surprised by this turn of events, the young man decided to ask Alice where they were, because he had told her that until they reached the lands of Britannia, she should not stop the boat. But all this time, for some reason, Alice did not answer and sat in the boat. Suddenly the girl's hand gradually became visible. It was clear that she was trying to get out of the boat. Feeling very tired, the exhausted lady asked the guy to see for himself where they were, because she could not do it. Due to severe exhaustion, the girl could not move freely and literally crawled on the sand. Looking at her partner, Alice sincerely considered him a scoundrel. After all, he rested the whole way, and she, a girl, had to row the oars alone. To her, Merlin Lucifer was a vile, disgusting, and inhumane villain. She was going to learn the master's secret ice technique and become the strongest saint-rank mage, and then beat his face until he turned into a rotten watermelon. Suddenly Merlin decided to come closer and exclaimed that the miss should behave more politely, since she still did not realize the position of her master. Now Alice is the Demon King's slave, and she doesn't dare say such things about her master. At that very second, the former Demon King began to extend his hand towards the girl, as if he was about to hit her. The frightened girl did not understand what was about to happen and was worried because she was scared. But, as it turned out, Merlin Lucifer just wanted to teach her a lesson, and with all his strength began to pull her by both cheeks. The cunning guy was going to teach the girl good manners so that she would be more obedient. But the guy also really liked this kind of torture because it made him feel much better. Alice began to struggle and shouted for them to stop making fun of her. After all, they had indeed arrived in Britannia, only they were not in some port, but on the northern coast. Hearing this, the young man immediately removed his hands because he calmed down. In fact, Merlin realized that Alice had apparently done very well at rowing alone, and for this he wanted to reward her somehow. Sitting on the floor, the girl screamed that she didn't need any encouragement. Laughing, Lucifer exclaimed that in that case he would not encourage her, because his beloved Miss Alice did not wish to receive any gifts. Moving on, Merlin and Alice said that he was happy to cooperate with her, but the girl was angry at him all this time because she considered him a demon king who needed to be defeated as soon as possible. Suddenly, the main character stopped and thought about the fact that money is needed to live in a human country. But he had lived his entire life in the company of the demon, and now that he had left the demon's world, there was no money left in his pockets. Turning to his partner, Lucifer began to think through a further plan of action that would help him exist in the human world. Alice was shocked by such a strange look, because she did not understand what her role would be next. Meanwhile, the young man remembered that when he carried this hero on his back, he felt what kind of iron armor it was. It was none other than the mithril armor that was passed down from heroes from generation to generation. The inside of this armor should be covered with various runes, which represents magical protection. That is why this armor should be a kind of high-quality armor. In other words, it is very valuable. Now Lucifer just needs to take the mithril armor from this lady, and then he will definitely be able to get a lot of money from her and become rich. All this time Alice watched the villain and did not understand why he was laughing evilly, standing to the side. At that very moment, Merlin turned around and ran towards Alice with incredible speed, intending to carry out his plan. The clever fellow came closer and exclaimed that parting with a charming lady in this way was causing him mental suffering, and he needed her to leave him what was most precious. The confused girl did not understand what exactly this evil demon wanted. Pointing his finger directly at the girl, Merlin Lucifer ordered her to undress. The girl was literally stunned by this turn of events, because she did not expect that the Demon King would ask for exactly this. In great fear, the girl literally fell to the ground and screamed that Merlin had previously told her that he did not intend to desecrate her body, but, as it turned out, he had now changed his mind. "I'm trying to protect myself," the girl screamed. The demon must not dare to approach her. But the villain kept coming closer and closer and saying that Alice should be an obedient girl. Alice was so afraid that she even started crying, but this did not bother Merlin, and he came over. Continuing to cry, the lady begged him to be more gentle with her, because it was her first time. In fact, Lucifer's goal was not to attack the girl, but only to take away her mithril armor. This only caused confusion in the girl, as she did not expect that the boy's true goal was to take possession of the armor. After all, the hero's mithril armor was certainly very expensive and cost literally a fortune. So, thanks to this armor, Merlin no longer needed Alice and wanted to say goodbye to her. But the girl clearly did not expect this, and this greatly confused her, since she thought that this was not at all what Lucifer wanted. The villain only took her thing, but Merlin really turned out to be vile, shameless, disgusting, and dirty. Sitting on the floor, the girl hoped only that she would never see him again in this life. Due to such circumstances, Alice could not even stand up and just continued to cry, hoping that her life would never be in danger again. Meanwhile, Lucifer walked calmly through the forest and thought about how he hoped to meet strong and interesting guys in the near future. Events continued a year later in Britannia, specifically on the outskirts of Wales. A man dressed in ancient metal clothing made his way through the forest as if looking for someone. Suddenly, the wanderer decided to turn to the guy sitting in the tree, calling him the master, and said that the villagers had become smarter and decided not to walk along this road anymore. The boss just asked them not to rush so much and just wait patiently, because they might come across some uncouth, impulsive young man. Literally a few seconds later, the man exclaimed that he felt like there was someone nearby and that he was approaching. But this traveler really did look too shabby, as if he hadn't eaten for several days. Looking at the traveler, the boss immediately realized that he might know this guy. The man sitting in the tree suddenly laughed, but the guardian did not immediately understand why his master was laughing. As it turns out, this guy, although he looks like a beggar, is actually of great value. Merlin continued walking straight ahead and thought only that he was very hungry because he had not eaten for several days. Raising his head up, the young man noticed a piece of paper flying towards him with something written on it. This piece of paper hit the protagonist right in the face, and he was shocked by this turn of events. On this piece of paper was a photograph of the main character, and it was stated that there was a reward of $5,000 for him. And that was a real problem, because after he ate at a restaurant and didn't pay for the food, he immediately became a wanted criminal. The human world was just terrible. If you ran out of money, you couldn't do anything else, and it was unknown why there was no simple job in this world where you could earn a lot of money without putting in much effort. Suddenly someone approached and shouted at Merlin to stop. It was the bandits who shouted that heavenly Lord Guidey who was now standing in front of the guy, and this was his road. Looking at these people, Lucifer even began to worry a little, because he did not understand what to answer them. As it turned out, the main character chose a rather unusual tactic and simply walked past, ignoring the bandits. Lucifer's behavior greatly angered the bandit, and he exclaimed that he would not tolerate anyone who ignored him. As if nothing had happened, the young man turned to the bandit and asked if he had really called him. The second bandit shouted that he had indeed received a call, and now he had to empty his pockets and give him all his most valuable things because this was a robbery. But the boss thought otherwise, because the most valuable thing this guy has is his life, and 5,000 coins for a wanted man is really a gold mine. Thanks to him, they will become rich. The formidable bandit, licking his dagger, exclaimed that he advised the boy to surrender without resistance. But if he was obedient, then this knife, smeared with a dangerous poison, would not be used against him. Merlin sighed heavily and decided to ask the bandits if they were really going to rob him. Taking out his sword, the boy asked them to think twice before doing such a thing. Because if he draws that sword from its sheath, they will both definitely die. Try to intimidate his interlocutor. The gang leader said that in this case, he would show what he was really capable of. The servant threw the apple into the air so that his master could demonstrate his true skill. The bandit leader himself delivered an incredibly fast blow with his blade, demonstrating his skill. Due to the incredible speed and force of the impact, the apple skin was completely peeled off during the flight. This boss's technique was unmatched in this world, as he was able to deal 20 dagger strikes in an instant. But in reality, Lucifer was not impressed by this blow, but by something else. The exhausted and hungry boy just looked at that very apple, because he really wanted to eat it. The bandit leader, very angry, could not tolerate the guy's behavior and shouted that he would kill him now. The red-haired villain was approaching Lucifer, but did not yet know about his true abilities. As if nothing had happened, Merlin watched everything that was happening and thought about how he could fight the villain. Pulling out his blade, the Demon King delivered a blow that was not even visible to an ordinary person. Not understanding what was happening, the red-haired guy just stood there, experiencing severe pain. At the same time, the apple landed right in the hand of Merlin, who was very hungry. The smart young man began to eat the tasty apple in order to at least replenish his vitality a little. But the bandit leader was defeated and fell to the ground. It seemed that he could no longer fight. The frightened servant began to scream and literally beg not to kill him, because he was not guilty of anything. Looking at this loser, the young man only thought that fighting with such weaklings was very boring. Meanwhile, the body of the gang leader began to literally smoke, as if he had been bewitched. When he saw the body, the guy didn't immediately understand what was happening and why it happened. As it turned out, the leader of the bandits was not actually a man, but an evil goblin. The protagonist couldn't even believe that this goblin actually took on human form to commit robberies on the roads, perhaps because he was afraid of becoming a target for the royal army. But overall, the guy didn't care at all because the main thing was that everything was fine with him. He still needed to find a normal job to somehow earn money and buy himself food. Some time later, events continued at the entrance to the cave. From a mysterious dark cave, a terrible goblin began to emerge, holding a weapon in his hands and looking determined. As it turned out, this goblin came out in response to the call of another goblin because he wanted to tell him something. This goblin turned out to be Haz, who was posing as a human robber and asking for a meeting with His Majesty. Fortunately, Goblin still allowed Haz to see His Majesty. He said that if he didn't like something, the consequences would be dire. The Goblin King met the poor bandit, who could not resist the man with incredible strength. The frightened servant told His Majesty that he had failed to get the money and apologized for it. This did not suit the head of the goblins, because he did not understand how his servant could not receive money and even return with nothing, which is why the king wanted to execute him. The worried goblin began to justify himself and said that he would never come to the king empty-handed, but now he needed to convey very important information. The alarmed servant said that his master had been beheaded by a common man. This guy didn't even pull his sword out of its sheath. He just saw a glimpse of light, and the boss was already lying there without a head. This information made the Goblin King laugh, as he was unhappy with this turn of events. Feeling great anger, the king realized that humanity was about to break off relations with the Goblin tribe, and for such a special occasion, a master of such a high level was sent. After some time, events continue to take place in the city, where the main character is trying to find a job. He gave up his last 2 copper coins to enter this city, so it is here that he must find at least some work that will bring him closer to his dream. Just eat and wait for his death. Last year, Merlin robbed Alice and stole her mithril armor to live a happy and rich life. He then bought his own estate and hired high-class butlers and maids. He also hired a chef from a fine restaurant and ate 3 meals a day. Lucifer also often attended horse races, leaving a lot of money, but never winning anything. By the time Merlin realized what he had done, it was too late. He had spent all the money he had earned from selling the mithril armor, and then had run himself into a lot of debt. Merlin, accustomed to a happy and carefree life, often visited fine dining restaurants, even when he had no money. And in the end, Merlin, of course, became the most wanted criminal, for whom a generous reward was appointed, as a result of which his life turned into a wandering life of a restless runner from deaths and guards. Today, the once great Demon King of the Great Demon King's palace found himself in a difficult situation and decided to perform street performances to earn a living. The image of the wandering actor was very popular with the audience, and they were eager to watch his performance. The main character liked it very much, and he realized that it was time to demonstrate his real technique to the public. The first part of the performance was a trick with super fast jumps, thanks to which the young man jumped at incredible speed. Looking at this stranger, all the people were simply shocked and began to applaud the actor because he was doing his job well. In fact, this was only the beginning. An even more interesting performance awaited us ahead. The next trick was that Merlin managed to create several copies of himself, which made the performance even more impressive. Everyone was happy to see such an unusual performance. The enterprising boy immediately realized that he needed to make money from this performance and decided to ask the audience for money because this could please the wandering artist. But people didn't want to give money at all and immediately began to ignore the artist because the performance was good, but they weren't going to pay for it. Suddenly, some old man began to shout that the supreme goddess of light is the embodiment of immortality, greatness, and eternity. The Holy See began to preach, and all the people immediately went there to listen to the priest's speech. Looking at everything that was happening, the young man could not understand why the crowd regretted giving him money, because he wanted to get at least a couple of copper coins. Looking around, the hero noticed one of the city's residents. As it turned out, there was a young guy walking nearby and eating a very sweet candy. Coming closer, Lucifer decided to attract attention to himself and stroke the child on the head. The boy immediately turned around, and Merlin told him that he noticed a talent for martial arts in him. If the boy gives Merlin just 2 copper coins, he will teach him a technique that will make him as strong as his older brother. This proposal frightened the child, and he immediately began to shout that he had no money at all and could not pay for his education. The young man was offended by these words, because by his refusal the child had simply insulted the strongest swordsman this world had ever seen, and if the child dared to refuse again, he might accidentally die. But this statement made the child even more worried, because now he was worried about his life. The main character still decided to find out what exactly the child's name was. As it turned out, his name was Henry. The smart guy decided to take out his sword to show off his skills. Addressing Henry, Lucifer insisted that he listen to him carefully, and although he had insulted him, he was a very merciful man, so he would forgive his ignorance for just a couple of copper coins. The worried young man began to say that he really had no money, but the guy was adamant, and noticed that the guy was dressed quite richly and could bring money from his house. Merlin literally exposed the guy, because he wanted to learn his martial art technique with all his heart. It was really hard to refuse such an offer, because it's not every day that you meet such a great master. The ball's unbeatable technique made the little boy think that he really needed to learn the art of swordsmanship. To the guy, it sounded really cool, and he wanted to know what moves this sword technique specialized in. It was the absolute ball technique. It was the very embodiment of invincibility, and it was capable of destroying the entire world. The basic technique is to draw the sword from its sheath and immediately decapitate the enemy. But this technique made the child feel indignant, because he knew that ordinary warriors neglected to study this technique because it was too ineffective. Henry did not think that the invincible sword technique praised by his interlocutor would disappoint him so much. The Demon King was shocked to hear such a thing from a child. He couldn't believe that the young man was actually an expert in learning sword techniques. Starting to argue, the hero claimed that his technique of quick decapitation was universal and completely different from similar ones. But Henry insisted that his uncle should be ashamed of trying to deceive him, because some low-level technique does not deserve even 2 coppers. After rummaging through his pockets, the child still wanted to give the traveler something as a token of gratitude. The kid extended his hand and exclaimed that he would reward his interlocutor in any case for the excellent performance he had demonstrated in advance. Unfortunately, the reward was only 2 candies, which did not help the situation much. The guy still decided to say goodbye to his uncle and finally told him that he had already reached adulthood, so he shouldn't try to extort money from people, but rather find some kind of job. Merlin was very angry at the child, but he still understood that he was telling the truth, and the job was really needed, although in the past he was the best demon king, and this is not the way to treat a monarch. Having taken out the candy, the young man decided to try it and realized that there was no point in being angry with the child because the problem had not gone away and he needed to earn money somehow. Suddenly, someone nearby began to shout that the goddess of light would protect only those who deeply believed in her and prayed every day. The preacher shouted that a year ago, the Holy See sent a 100,000-strong military flotilla on a campaign to exterminate the Demon King, but Lucifer III used his orb to wipe out every single one of them. People began to talk about how the Demon King used to sit on a throne made of human skulls and was a green monster with yellow teeth. These words offended the young man, because he did not understand why they were talking about him like that, because in fact he was quite handsome, and his teeth were not yellow. The priest, embittered by Lucifer, kept repeating that the enemy was powerful. No wonder he was the most powerful demon king in history, and there were rumors that he was close to reaching Britannia across the sea. It has long been known that demons are very aggressive and overly lustful. But Lucifer is a third separate case. He is simply a tyrant in the flesh. It will not be difficult for him to come and destroy all people at any moment. As the boy listened to this whole story, all he could think was that he would never have sent his troops across the Archean Strait just to attack Britannia, since the demonic threat had made the fat bastards of the Holy See completely stupid in that country. Therefore, all people needed to buy this Bible to deepen their faith in the goddess of light, so that she would protect everyone from the hands of the demon king, Lucifer III. The priest literally ordered the people to believe in the goddess of light. The original price of each book of this limited special edition Bible was 10 gold coins, but only today they can be purchased for 1 gold coin. The main character was very angry at these vain hypocrites who fraudulently took money from the working people and also encroached on their prestigious reputation for the purpose of profit. In order to support himself, sometime later the Demon King continued to look for work and try to get a job as a waiter in a restaurant. The brave guy tried his best to get a job in order to earn at least some money. The owner of the restaurant was simply shocked by the young man's manners and blushed with embarrassment because he was very handsome. Luckily, the good-natured girl decided to hire such a nice guy. In fact, Merlin was very curious as to why this woman was so embarrassed. After thinking for a while, the girl decided to ask Mr. Merlin if he was really a traveler. In other words, she wanted to know if he really lived outside the city before coming to them. The boy admitted that this was indeed the case, so he could work in a restaurant for a maximum of 2 months, but then he would have to continue his journey. Touching his heart, the young man realized that the curse on his heart was still not lifted, so he needed to find a strong opponent to ease the growing pain. Having put on her glasses, the girl immediately got to work, as she realized that the future employee was very promising. Using her skills, the experienced worker began to think of what kind of work to give the young man. Sometime later, the professional exclaimed that, judging by their offers of temporary work, there was one position, accommodation and meals at the employer's expense, payment of 1 gold coin per month. In addition to this, each alcoholic drink sold gives a 20% deduction of a share of the profit in favor of the waiter. For the main character, a gold coin per month was a truly impressive salary. But his employer also warned him that this was a very difficult job. In the evening, this tavern only accepts women, and his job is to sell them alcoholic drinks. The problem is that girls don't drink alcohol just like that, so the girl hoped that Merlin would take special measures to improve the sale of alcoholic beverages. Not understanding what the girl was talking about, the young man nevertheless decided to ask again what she meant by special measures. As it turns out, the special measures involve speaking very pompously and comforting girls who have experienced some kind of emotional hardship, and also encouraging them to enter into deep, emotional relationships with the guests. At this moment, Merlin, who was once the Demon King residing in the Great Demon King Palace, thought of something dissatisfied. One day, he would have to humiliate his honor and dignity by selling alcohol through skin and meat, if it meant trampling on the honor and dignity of the great monarch and the Demon King just to sell a few glasses of alcohol. The boy bowed his head, not understanding whether he should agree to this position. But an experienced employer decided to hire this guy for this position and exclaimed that if he shows himself well and achieves certain successes, then she will pay him some bonuses and a premium when he has to leave the job. But such a proposal made Merlin Lucifer agree, since the Demon King thus decided to put up with such work in order to ensure his existence. The happy boy extended a helping hand to his employer and was grateful that he now had a job. At this time, the main character had only one thought, that no one knew him in this country anyway. In order to avoid tarnishing his reputation as the Demon King, Merlin began his career as a waiter in a tavern. However, in another corner of the country, events developed somewhat differently. Unknown travelers were riding in a cart from afar. This traveler turned out to be Alice, who was reading a note that appeared in her cart. The note had a photo of a very familiar person on it and stated that he was a gigolo who ate for free. Looking at this note, Alice realized that this wanted poster was torn, so that the wanted person's face was not visible at all, but strange feelings did not leave her. A year ago, Alice was robbed by Merlin, and because of him, she lost the mithril armor that heroes inherit with each generation, which caused her to get in a huge debt. And in order to pay off a bunch of debts, Alice only had to register in a guild as an adventurer. Since Alice was a hero in the past, she was appointed as a gold rank adventurer, and in order to pay off her debts, Alice took on the most difficult and dangerous missions for a year. And although her debts were enormous, they were still a radical contrast to those of the spendthrift Merlin. Through her hard work at a very difficult and dangerous job, Alice was able to acquire a decent home and could occasionally afford to buy a few modest dresses. That same day, Alice learned that she could earn 5,000 gold coins by catching a guy who was overeating at a restaurant and not paying. The happy girl realized that thanks to her skills, it would not be difficult for her to catch this gigolo who ate for free, and she wanted to take on this task herself. Catching some greedy gigolo for a freebie was easy, This was the easiest money in her life. She was going to become a rich woman. The first thing she would do would be buy herself a bunch of beautiful clothes, and she wouldn't have to worry about rent at all. Poor Alice doesn't yet know that the one she is about to catch is Merlin, whom she hated with all her heart and never wanted to see all her life. Meanwhile, events continue to take place at the Moonlight Tavern. At night, a large number of different girls would constantly come to this tavern to have fun, and the smart young man happily danced with them to earn more money. When a main character asked the girls if they were ready to have a glass of wine with him after the dance, each of them agreed and was even ready to die for him. Every girl wanted to dance with such a handsome young man because he also hugged and pitied them. Thus, thanks to his entrepreneurial spirit, the guy was quite popular in the establishment. All the girls present were going to invite the handsome guy to have a drink with them. The owner of the establishment hoped that Mr. Merlin would really please the customers. Suddenly, little Henry came and told his mother that he was home. The child was covered in bruises, and it was clear that someone had beaten him badly. Meanwhile, Merlin heard Henry starting a fight with the neighborhood boys again. This turn of events surprised Merlin very much, because he did not expect that this was the son of the owner of the establishment. The whole house heard the scream, which outraged the child, because it was completely unclear what the uncle was doing in his house. After a few minutes, the atmosphere in the house began to improve, and the young man was offered tea. Henry didn't like all this very much, because he saw how well his mother treated this guy. In the child's opinion, this worthless guy only knows how to brag, and he should not be allowed to work and live in this restaurant. Embarrassed, the lady apologized for her child's behavior, as Henry must have caused her a lot of trouble earlier. The young man laughed and said that everything was fine, and in general, in life he loved little children the most. But at the same time, Merlin Lucifer thought that this scoundrel really was the tavern owner's own son. The little boy shouted that he had never caused trouble for anyone in his life. This boy begged his mother to fire Merlin from his job and not hire anyone like him. The boy literally insisted that it was all because this bad guy would definitely tarnish his mother's already bad reputation, and everyone would continue to say that the tavern owner was a bad woman. Of course, such a young and beautiful girl is a single mother, and such people are very often subject to suffering from unfounded rumors. This boy's clothes were torn to shreds because he fought with other children because they spoke badly of his mother. The main character still decided to help the boy and said that if there is someone he wants to protect, then he must become stronger. Now Henry isn't strong enough to silence anyone. If he wants to protect his mother, he shouldn't fire Merlin. Instead, he should get stronger and let those nasty guys know he's not someone to be provoked. Unable to bear these words, the boy exclaimed, "This is what the one who seduces women and tricks them into buying alcohol tells him." The boy believed that he would rather die on the street than listen to a person who was engaged in the same activities as the main character. Running out of the house, he shouted after him that he would never follow such advice and teaching about the useless technique of quick decapitation. The boy's worried mother immediately ran after him and wanted to stop him, as she was afraid that he might get hurt at such a late hour. After listening to the child, the young man came to the conclusion that he was a fool and not worthy of being taught. Sometime later, Merlin was counting the money he had earned, and not far from him sat travelers talking about travels. One of the men decided to find out if there really were goblins in the city. His interlocutors began to convince him that a group of goblins lived on a hill not far from here, and that the body of a decapitated goblin had been found nearby, which meant that goblins really did live near the city. The brave traveler was able to easily drink a whole glass of the drink that Merlin had poured for him beforehand. Feeling the pleasant aftertaste of the drink, the stranger asked the bartender to pour him some more of the swill. The good-natured young man happily agreed to help his guest and was about to pour him another drink. With a deft movement of his hand, the guy managed to easily pour some red drink into the glass. Thanks to the skill of the bartender, he easily mixed this unusual drink using shaker. Every move the protagonist made looked professional, as if he had been working in this position for many years. Thus, the drink became much tastier due to the fact that the bartender mixed it professionally. And when you stir the drink, it would begin to glow a bright scarlet light, meaning it was ready to drink. In a few seconds the drink was ready, and now you could safely drink it. The guests were amazed by Merlin's skill. They did not expect a professional bartender in such a place, and asked for more drinks. Delighted by this turn of events, the young man exclaimed that it would be a great honor for him to serve them. Sometime later, the travelers started talking about the reward that could be received upon completion of the mission. Roger was to receive 2,000 gold coins. For Roger, such a large number of gold coins was impressive, and he did not understand why he would get so many of them. His partner, a little embarrassed, did not know what to answer to this and decided to think a little before giving an answer. The embarrassed girl also wanted to tell why Roger was entitled to such a large reward, but she did not dare. As it turned out, the former allies were going to get married. This was their last mission, and once they completed it, they would return to their home village and live a peaceful life. This turn of events clearly did not please Roger, as he did not expect his allies to abandon him in such a way. For the protagonist, this also came as alarming news, as his regular customers were planning to leave the city. However, due to such unexpected news, Roger decided to congratulate the newlyweds, saying that he always knew that priestesses end their careers as adventurers and immediately marry swordsmen. But Merlin was worried about the newlyweds because he thought that after this mission, the two might not return. That's why the boy decided to come closer and find out a little more about the task. The smart young man was worried about the couple and wanted to know the details of their mission. As it turned out, they had to kill 100 goblins and then cut off each one's left ear. The protagonist immediately realized that this was a rookie mistake, and the smell of blood attracted even more goblins. They would be lucky if they survived, and Roger immediately thought that the bartender was also an adventurer. The brave warrior shouted that there was no need to worry about them, since all three of them were silver-ranked adventurers, so this simple task would not be difficult for them, and they would definitely protect this city from the goblins. After thinking for a bit, Merlin Lucifer finally realized that this was actually just a regular raid on the goblins. The good-natured guy decided to smile at his guests and wish them good luck in this difficult battle. Sometime later, the events continued, and in the evening a battle with the goblins began. Roger fought bravely with his giant axe and killed many goblins with one blow. The fight was really tough for the goblins, but they tried their best to attack the strong man. As it turned out, these scoundrels were too weak for an adventurer like Roger. There are only 37 goblins left, and once they are dealt with, they will immediately begin to slowly retreat so that help does not arrive. They thought that they would be fighting ordinary goblins and that a stronger enemy would not come to their aid. But this was a fatal mistake because Roger heard someone's footsteps, and he was clearly larger than the usual goblins. The Goblin King leapt with all his might to attack the ambushed travelers. Thanks to the unexpected landing on the ground, the Goblin King was able to easily defeat his first enemy, namely Roger. The spectacle was truly horrific as the newlyweds' ally died in battle, literally from one blow. A terrible tragedy made it impossible to continue the fight, and Roger died fighting for his dignity and honor. Looking at the giant goblin, the boy shouted that he would definitely avenge his comrade, because it was not in vain that he died in this battle. But according to the giant, it was quite funny, since it was obvious that the guy could do nothing to such a strong opponent. The evil villain turned to the lower creatures and said that they were now in the kingdom of the goblins. The frightened people did not expect such a strong enemy, and they understood that this could be their last battle. There was also another enemy nearby. It was the highest nobleman of the kingdom, namely a goblin magician of the highest rank, whose name was Gargamel. Seeing another enemy, the young man could not understand how this was possible, because how could a goblin mage of the highest level appear in such a small cave? Meanwhile, the girl simply cried and said that she did not want to die. As it turned out, the goblin had other plans, and the beautiful human woman did not have to die, because she had the honor of becoming the concubine of his imperial majesty. But the boy's teaching is completely different, because he cannot be useful to the emperor. The goblin mage used a fireball to finish off the last enemy. The swordsman immediately ordered his comrade to use the attack boost buff to finish off those bastards. The brave girl took action and, with the help of her magical abilities, gave her partner the opportunity to act. Thanks to the spell cast, the guy became much stronger, and it seemed that now he would be able to compete with such strong enemies. Feeling intense rage and fear, the young man took action and tried to hit the enemy. The guy's sword literally sparkled due to magical abilities. Fire was visible around it, which increased the damage from the blow. With the help of the priestess's magical abilities, the swordsman was able to repel the goblin's attack. The excited boy admitted that they had to run anyway, since they were much weaker than their enemies. The enraged goblin began to attack, and shouted at the top of his voice that he would now finish off his opponent. As he was about to strike, the goblin began to swing his huge bat, and it ended up right next to his opponent. The strike was completed, and the giant goblin easily managed to make the young man suffer in pain. Due to the incredibly strong blow, the guy bounced back several dozen meters to the side and began to fall to the ground. The worried girl began to cry, as she was worried about her future husband and thought that he would not be able to survive such a blow. The evil sorcerer ordered his servant to tie up the woman in order to deliver her to the emperor. The vile goblins began to approach the crying girl, and she screamed with all her might for at least someone to save her and help her in such a difficult situation. The lover was still alive and ordered the goblins to take their hands off his girl, for whom he could give his life, and ordered them to let her go. Looking at the guy, the magician decided to give him a chance to save his girlfriend, but for this he would have to make a small deal. Meanwhile, events continued to take place at the Moonlight Tavern. Alice came to the tavern and was surprised that this tavern turned out to be the best hotel in the city. Entering the tavern, the girl was shocked by the number of guests. Many girls tried to decorate the stage so that their favorite actor could perform on it. According to Alice, the pub was very lively and she even felt a little awkward. The owner of the establishment decided to approach the guest and noticed that she had come here for the first time. If you look closely at how she is dressed, you can assume that she is not from here. The brave girl decided to admit that she was an adventurer and wanted to ask if there was a free room in this pub, as she wanted to stay the night. To see a girl adventurer, and even alone, was a rare occurrence. Of course, there were rooms in the pub, and the landlord invited the girl to come with him. The room where they could spend the night was on the second floor, and they began to climb up there together to get to the room. The door to the room was already very close, and Alice had to spend the night in room number 206. The good-natured pub owner exclaimed that it was quite a nice room in which the guest would be comfortable. And if the girl is bored, she can go downstairs, because today one very popular actor in a restaurant will dance a hot dance, and don't worry, for the adventurer it will be free. The guest thought it was very indecent and said she didn't want to see it. The host thought the girl was modest, but if she was curious she could join in. The girl also decided to find out if the owner of the establishment had seen the guy pictured on the arrest warrant. Looking at the warrant, the owner could not understand who could be a gigolo drinking for free. On this sheet the man's face was cut off, and she could not help in the search. Since the conversation didn't go well, the bar owner wished the traveler a good rest. The girl sighed heavily and entered the room. She was very tired and really wanted to rest. Alice entered the room, and immediately Merlin Lucifer, whom she had been looking for so long, came out of another room. Looking at the room where the stranger entered, the guy began to think that he had a feeling that the girl's voice was already familiar to him. Scratching his head, he just assumed that perhaps he had imagined it and that it was time to get to work. Lying on her bed, Alicia Claudia was very happy that finally, after so many stressful days, she would be able to get a good night's sleep. The girl also thought that she really wanted to meet the swordsman Elgin. Last year, Alice found herself in quite a troublesome situation, as she was known to take on many quests to pay off the debt for the mithril armor, and one day, during an adventure in the port of Elgino, she was captured by pirates. The evil villains tied up the girl, and it is unknown what they are going to do with her. From the very beginning of the operation, they were planning to capture the young daughters and ducal families, but they did not expect at all that they would be able to capture a fearless, hot adventurer. These little girls were really very beautiful, and the pirates are going to do terrible things to them. But the hero was not going to tolerate this and shouted that he would not allow the villains to do this to the girls. Hearing the girl scream, the villains were not at all worried, and in this case decided that they would start with Alice. Suddenly, the unknown traveler exclaimed that the pirates should wait. Looking at the stranger, the pirates could not understand who he was and what he was doing on their ship. As it turned out, the traveler came here because he felt that people were in trouble. The Duke's daughters were very glad that someone came to their aid, but unfortunately, they saw nothing because they were in a cage. A giant metal cage prevented the girls from seeing their savior. The pirates did not expect resistance when they detained the girls and believed that they could easily defeat just one enemy. According to the young man, the pirates were much weaker than him, so he was going to fight with them. In fact, the pirates were brothers, and their nickname was Redbeards, and not both of them are in the rank of saints, and they're also the best pirates of all the seas, and no one can compare with them. Their 17 warships are considered invincible under their command. Even if this flotilla meets the Britannian Imperial fleet, they will still win. The Redbeard brothers have taken a bunch of girls captive for a little fun, and if the traveler thinks he can take them away from them, he is very much mistaken. At this time, the boy began to think that on the way to collect debts, he might actually encounter 2 saint-ranked warriors, and they must be strong. But the young man still thought that he could ease the pain of his heart curse. Today, the guy is lucky, because during the fight, he can easily influence his heart curse and at least get rid of the pain a little. The pirates were already eager to fight and wanted to do everything possible to defeat the villain. A fight broke out, and both brothers immediately rushed to attack, in order to finish off their enemy with a few blows. Grabbing his sword, the brave warrior wanted to strike just one blow, which would finish off 2 enemies. The powerful blow was delivered in a split second, causing the enemies to scream in pain. With one blow, he could easily defeat 2 incredibly strong enemies. After such a strong blow, even the ship was shattered into pieces, and now the girls were safe. Looking around, Merlin Lucifer wanted to understand if everything was really safe now. Watching this guy, Alice was simply shocked because she did not expect that an ordinary person could be so strong. The girl believed that this guy was a swordsman named Elgin, and to her he was incredibly brave and courageous. Even though she didn't even see his face, she was still sure that he was the strongest and bravest man in this world, and also a handsome guy. After thinking for a while, the girl finally decided to take action and write a letter to the teacher. Taking a pen, the girl began to write a letter to her teacher, whom she had not seen for a long time. In letter A, she wrote that she was now living very well. She had a lot of money. She no longer owed anything to the Holy See, so she no longer had to worry about paying for the subscription. But she also fell in love with the legendary swordsman Elgin. But unlike her teacher, she has a bright future and will not end up in the same situation because she is not a flighty girl. That is why she asked the teacher not to worry about her, but just to take good care of herself and wait for the moment when she reaches the pinnacle of life and returns to him. After writing the letter, the girl decided to pray to God, because she did this every day. The girl asked God that she never meet Merlin Lucifer again in her life. After all, Alice considered him a dirty wretch and a lustful freak who needed to be punished for his evil deeds. She wanted him to become poor and destitute, so that he would live in the alleys and eat garbage for the rest of his days. Alice's words even made the young man sneeze, because they reminded him of him at the moment he spoke. It was a shocking phenomenon for the guy. He sneezed every day at the same time, and maybe someone was cursing behind his back, but it was completely unclear who could hate him so much. After a while, there was a break in the show, and a large number of girls were waiting for the guy they affectionately called Chick. Feeling very curious, Alice nevertheless went down to the floor below, as she wanted to know who this guy was, whom the woman called a Chick. There was another guy sitting nearby, who was very unhappy with this whole performance. The young man is angry because they have invited dissolute women again. They are all so poor and do not suspect that today their wallets are empty. According to Alice, this kind of communication from the baby was quite rude. Just because they're dressed very nicely does not mean that these women are slutty. But in fact, that's not why the guy called these girls so, because most of these women had husbands and their own families, but even that didn't stop them from coming to such places. That's why they should be ashamed. Because his mother is in this business, there are some unpleasant rumors about her, and there are restaurants circulating around town. Thus, Alice realized that this boy was the son of the tavern owner. Henry looked at Alice and was immediately glad, because he was not delighted. She was like a breath of fresh air against the background of these dissolute women, and she came here not for some kind of performance, but just for a place to stay overnight. The girl really liked these statements, and she was glad that the young man liked her. Looking closely at the girl, the boy saw that she had a rather unusual belt. This belt started with her being a gold-level adventurer. Polite Alice nodded to the guy and told him that it was indeed so. For the guy, this was a truly amazing phenomenon, because his older sister had already reached the highest level and became the strongest, and for the first time in his life, he saw such an outstanding person in front of him. Continuing to watch the heroine, the boy asked her to teach him the techniques of swordsmanship, because he wanted to learn to fight like the greatest warriors. This request surprised the girl a little, because she did not expect that she would be teaching a little boy to fight with swords. The worried lady realized that her sword technique was an ice strike, a technique that was passed down through generations and could not be learned. As Alice continued to think, she finally decided how she would react in this situation. First, the girl touched Henry's head and praised him for his interest. She then said that of course she could teach him sword techniques, but he needed special training for that, and he should drink as much milk as possible so that his body would become much stronger. These words made the young man very happy, because in this way he realized that he still had a chance to master such a special technique. Grabbing a glass of milk, Henry immediately began to drink the milk he poured. According to the girl, this spectacle was really very funny, since in this way the young man really became stronger by drinking milk. The boy admitted that Alice really deserves the title of a warrior of the highest order because she has a completely different approach to training, not like others, for example, some poor guy who just takes out a sword and quickly, stealthily decapitates the enemy. When Alice heard about this, she immediately wanted to know who the guy was who used the quick decapitation technique. Meanwhile, the medicine man began to come out and apologize for keeping all the women waiting. The protagonist exclaimed that the show had officially begun, and he was now ready to present his new act. For Alice, this guy was quite strange because it was unusual for beautiful women to call this ordinary guy Chick. The boy also said that this is the guy who mastered the technique of quick decapitation. This uncle, although he is by nature a complete zero in the art of the sword and does not really know how to do anything, but he has a very well-developed art of sucking money out of women. He is an ordinary scoundrel who hunts married women, and also a gigolo who drinks for free. When Alice heard about the gigolo who drinks for free, she immediately knew that this was the guy pictured on the warrant. Having taken out the blade, the girl began to act decisively, because she wanted to catch this scoundrel. Angry, the lady was about to take action and asked Henry not to go on stage, because she was going to catch a wanted criminal. The main character immediately felt that someone was approaching him, and gradually began to turn around. Alice came on stage and addressed the scoundrel, calling him a gigolo who drinks for free and saying that he should be ashamed, because he owes people a large sum of money. Looking at the girl, the guy realized that this was the same fool he abandoned on the beach a year ago. The brave heroine shouted at the enemy not to resist and surrender, but to follow her straight to prison. When the girl walked onto the stage, her hand began to shake, and she was ready to attack. Feeling very angry, Alice tried her best to hit her opponent, swinging her sword repeatedly to do so. All the spectators gradually began to disperse, as the spectacle was not for the faint of heart, and sitting near the stage and watching what was happening was dangerous. Merlin decided to ask Alice to calm down, because someone might get hurt while she was fighting. The embarrassed girl screamed that she would not stop until she punished the scoundrel who dared to commit such disgusting acts. During another blow, the guy decided to jump to show his advantage in the fight. Using his agility, he climbed right onto the sword the girl was trying to strike with. This blocking of the blow was indeed very effective, as Alice did not expect such a move. The main character also decided to stop the girl and touched her head so that she would not attack again. Looking down at the girl, he said that Alice should stop. After all, they had not seen each other for only a year, and she had already become so hot-tempered. The girl shouldn't have met her old acquaintances like that, because Merlin Lucifer hoped that she would at least hug him, but instead of hugging, she took out her sword and tried to fight. For the sake of the beautiful lady, Lucifer decided to open his face to show who he really is. When a mask was removed, The girl immediately blushed because she realized who exactly she had fought with. To Alice's surprise, her opponent turned out to be Merlin, whom she hated so fiercely and never wanted to see again in her life. Alicia Claudia was simply shocked by this turn of events and did not even know what to answer because she understood that Lucifer was much stronger than her. The girl started screaming from the intense shock, and this scream even scared the cats walking near the pub. The hero decided to remind her who he was and said that his name was Merlin. To his surprise, it seemed that Alice had forgotten those wonderful evenings that they spent together, crossing the sea strait and riding a yacht. These words made Alice even more angry, and she wondered what to answer. After all, in the girl's opinion, it was Merlin who was to blame for the fact that she had lived a humiliating life for the last year. Approaching Lucifer, she shouted that she wished him dead and would now finish him off. But it was obvious that Lucifer was much stronger than the girl, and he was easily able to stop her attack. Addressing the girl, the guy told her to calm down, because this was not the way to communicate with a partner with whom she had crossed a dangerous sea strait, and it was clearly not worth arguing here. Tears immediately appeared on the girl's face, as she was very offended by the position in which Merlin had placed her. Watching the girl, the young man did not understand what was going on because he did not know how bad she had been this year. In despair, the lady fell to her knees and began to cry, screaming that Merlin Lucifer had taken away the most precious thing she had and then simply left. In connection with this robbery, the girl worked tirelessly and risked her life, all in order to pay off the debt she got into, and if he dares to call himself a man, then he must take responsibility for this. Even the girls nearby started saying that they never expected this chick to ever do something like this, and maybe he was a real male. Henry was also shocked by Uncle Merlin, because it was completely incomprehensible what he managed to do to his older sister. The worried young man began to insist that they were all wrong and that he was not really a bad person. In the opinion of the young man, the hero was really very disgusting, because how dare he take advantage of his older sister's feelings to benefit from her? He used her and is not ready to take responsibility for his actions, and this is disgusting. This is why the little boy despised Merlin Lucifer more than anything in the world, because he was a terrible person. Because of this whole situation, Merlin realized that this stupid hero was speaking so incoherently that the people around him had misunderstood everything. If this continued, the reputation he had earned would be ruined, and in the future, he would never be able to sell alcohol again. The determined boy realized that he urgently needed to restore his image as a gentleman. That's why he decided that he needed to act, and he bowed to the girl, after which he hugged her. This turn of events really confused Alice, as she did not expect anything like this. Turning to Miss Alice, the young man wanted her to calm down and forget the grievances. After all, they could drink a couple of glasses of cold drink and discuss everything that had happened earlier. After some time, the events in the bar continued. Looking at Alice, the young man turned to her and said that all the guests had left, and now they could talk. Meanwhile, Alice was drinking cold milk and said it was simply delicious and wanted to have another glass too. Unable to bear such impudence, Merlin grabbed the glass and began to say that girls should not try to drink everything that is poured for them as quickly as possible, because no self-respecting lady does that, and if she does not stop doing this, she will not be able to find a boyfriend. Despite all her good qualities, Swordsman Elgin is truly stupid to decide to date such a fool. Suddenly, the owner of the establishment thought that Mr. Merlin was really popular with the girls, because he even managed to hook up with a gold-level adventurer. These two disgruntled people looked very much like a couple who had just had a fight. That's why the owner of the establishment decided to leave for a while to put Henry to bed, and while she was gone, they could talk to Miss Alice alone. The smart lady also winked at the protagonist because she wanted him to restore good relations with Miss Alice. The slightly alarmed guy immediately understood what exactly the owner of the establishment wanted from him. Alice was full of determination, and she realized that her enemy had not returned to her what he had taken, so that her anger at him could not be removed by any words. Looking at the girl, the young man decided to ask her what exactly he needed to give her. The embarrassed lady began to remember the incident when her most valuable thing was stolen. This thing was quite expensive because it was a mithril breastplate that the guy brazenly took off Alice and left behind. According to the hero, it was a regular mithril breastplate, and he should have gone to the market and bought another one, since it was unclear why Alice was so interested in getting this particular breastplate. The profusely sweating young man finally admitted that he had indeed sold the mithril breastplate. In addition, he spent all the money he received from the sale on bets on horse races, and naturally, absolutely nothing was won from these bets. According to Alice, this breastplate was worth tens of millions of gold coins, and he simply physically could not spend them so quickly. But as it turned out, Merlin sold this breastplate for 10 times cheaper. This made Alice even more angry at the scoundrel who dared to do this to her. Because of this whole situation, the girl screamed that if Merlin did not return her mithril armor, she would never forgive him. But as it turned out, according to the rules of his demonic tribe, the thing he took from her, from the moment it came into his possession, immediately became his, and even if he asked her to return it now, it was simply impossible. The guy had no money, so he had nothing to offer but his life. The guy also asked to note that he was no longer the Demon King and they should not have any hostile relations. But if Alice decides to take his life, then their relationship has every chance of becoming hostile. This was dangerous for the girl, because she understood that she simply would not be able to compete with such a strong opponent. The brave warrior nevertheless decided that he would not fight here, since Miss March cared very much about him. That's why the young man asked Alice not to cause chaos in this restaurant, so they could just sit quietly and have a drink, and then come to a compromise, because there is no point in destroying such a restaurant with your sharp sword, because resolving disputes with words is much more effective and smarter than resorting to violence. After thinking for a while, the girl decided to ask why Merlin couldn't use his superpower to get the mithril armor back. In fact, demons, unlike humans, have a deep understanding and respect for rules and justice, so they do not use such radical methods. The rules of trade are sacred to them, so if there was a deal, then it was no one will dare to take back the soul goods. The smart girl immediately noticed that Lucifer said that he was no longer the Demon King, but now pays attention to such rules. The young man only said that even if he was not the Demon King, he was a former magnificent monarch and could not afford to lose the reputation he had earned by robbing the things he had sold to the merchant. Bowing her head, the girl admitted that she, too, was no longer a hero. All this happened because the girl did not have mithril armor, and she got into huge debts and paid the Holy See a debt of 10 million gold coins. This made Alice feel desperate because in order to have any chance of paying off her debts, she had to work on the quest from the level. For such missions, they give several tens of thousands of gold coins, but they are very dangerous, and she did not know when she would be able to take the quest of this level. Hearing this, the boy immediately began to tremble, as he realized that for one mission, they give several tens of thousands of gold coins. Smiling, Lucifer decided to ask if this was really true about the missions. And that is true, but S-rank missions are usually very dangerous, and some monsters in such missions are even stronger than a top-rank mage of the Holy See. If the adventurers make even the slightest mistake, they will die immediately. That is why they give such a high risk for such a high reward. But even so, she had to reach the highest S rank to successfully complete such missions alone, and it was all Merlin's fault. Continuing to laugh, the young man realized that he knew what his next job would be. For the protagonist, this job was simply wonderful, as it was possible to easily kill the strongest opponents, thereby easing the pain of the heart curse. As a bonus to this, he will be able to earn a lot of gold coins and get closer to his ideal life. Just eat, sleep, and wait for his death. In other words, this job was just perfect for Merlin Lucifer. The cheerful young man decided to turn to Miss Alice and tell her something. The boy decided to find out if there were any criteria for becoming an adventurer. After thinking for a bit, the girl replied that in order to become an adventurer, you need to have an aura or have mana. Unfortunately, the hero understood that he belonged to another tribe, so his aura and mana were radically different from those of humans, so it was necessary to find out if there was another way. There was another way. If some adventurer vouched for the young man and recommended him to the guild, that might work too. Hearing this, the boy immediately realized that he needed to act and decided to ask Miss Alice for something. They are both on good terms, so they can call themselves true friends, and on top of that, in a friendly way, Merlin would like to be recommended to the guild because he really wanted to become an adventurer. The girl was not satisfied with this request, as she did not understand why her interlocutor wanted to become an adventurer and why she should recommend him at all. The girl didn't even want to hear about it. She would rather die than recommend such a scoundrel to the guild. That night, they had a big fight and couldn't find a compromise in the situation. The events continued a few days later in the tavern where the protagonist and Alice met for the last time. Continuing to work as a waiter, the young man wiped glasses and waited for new guests to meet them. This work was not easy for him, because he understood that if he worked as an adventurer, he would earn much more money. The owner of the establishment decided to ask the guy if he had seen Henry, but the young man exclaimed that he had not seen him today. As it turned out, this little devil had left early in the morning without any warning, and where exactly he had gone was unknown, so the woman was going to go to the city and look for him. But before that, the woman noticed that Merlin looked more lethargic than usual today. The embarrassed guy still decided to ask his sister if she knew anything about the profession of an adventurer. The woman began to remember that, according to the adventurers she had met, this profession was very dangerous, and in it one could not only get seriously injured, but even die. However, she could not say with particular precision, since her knowledge was superficial. After all, there are people who strive for freedom. That is, they become adventurers in order, for example, to reduce their sentence. The smart woman immediately guessed that Mr. Merlin was planning to do something like this in the future, and perhaps he wanted to become an adventurer to carry out tasks with Miss Alice. Although this was indeed true, unfortunately, the young man had neither aura nor mana, and Alice was unwilling to offer him to the guild. Martha began to encourage the protagonist, and told him that he should not say that, and most likely he just did not ask very well, that he should try again, but with even more respect, and she would look forward to their joint work with Miss Alice on completing tasks. However, something still bothered the owner of the establishment, because she understood that she would lose such a good employee. Forcing herself to suppress her fears, Martha asked Mr. Merlin that if he became an adventurer, they would not go on dangerous expeditions. Even though Merlin always carries the sword and is very skilled with it, he has no aura or mana at all, so his attacks will be weak and he can be easily killed. Meanwhile, it started raining heavily outside, and lightning struck not far from the establishment. Although the weather suddenly turned bad, the woman still went to look for her son and asked Merlin to look after the store. Looking up at the sky, the young man remembered the adventures and began to wonder what exactly had happened to the 3 silver-ranked adventurers who had been drinking in this tavern not long ago. At the same time, someone gradually began to approach the city. This guy's gait was awkward and slow. The wounded young man screamed in a hoarse voice that he needed help and tried to call someone for help. One of the guards immediately heard that some guy was calling for help and decided to see who it was. The drunk man looked out the window and shouted that it was already late evening and the gates were closed, so the stranger needed to get out of there. In great pain, the young man exclaimed that he was an adventurer who had recently left this city, and his teammates had died. That's all. He was left alone and had many wounds, so he needed help. As soon as the guards heard that this guy was wounded, they immediately ordered the gates to be opened. Thanks to the humanity of the people who lived in this city, it was possible to save a seriously wounded boy. As soon as the gates opened, the boy immediately fell to his knees, and the man asked him why he froze, because he had to go beyond the city gates. The trembling adventurer began to apologize to the stranger because he felt guilty. Starting to cry, the guy screamed that he was very sorry because he just wanted to save his bride, and this was the only way to do it. No one knew why he said this, and it turned out to be a trap, as the goblin was already approaching the gate. The giant scoundrel exclaimed that it was indeed easier than he had expected. The frightened guards immediately shouted that goblins were attacking, and that it was necessary to strengthen the defense to resist these creatures. A large number of goblins were about to attack the castle, and the goblin mage was controlling them all. The magician shouted that the city ahead was their prey, and they must kill all the men they saw. They did not need them, and the beautiful women must be captured. The warriors were ordered to go forward and collect as many beautiful girls as possible for their great emperor. Immediately after the goblin mage's command, the goblin invasion began, and now the humans found themselves in a difficult situation. The wounded boy decided to turn to the goblin and said that he had helped them as they had agreed, fulfilled his part of the deal, so now it was their turn to return the bride. The evil wizard looked at the boy and said that he was very grateful that he had kept his end of the bargain. But one should not think that they will return the beauty to him, because she has already become a slave of his imperial majesty. The girl gave her body, soul, and innocence. She forgot about the guy, and he should forget about her. The impudent goblin was about to strike to finish off the guy who was suffering so much from separation from his girlfriend. All this time, the warrior only hoped that he would somehow manage to get his bride back. The evil goblin did not want to recognize any agreements, because he wanted to capture the city and began to attack all the people living in the area. Due to the alarm being raised in the city, people began to ring bells to warn others of the approaching danger. The whole city began to burn, and the fire gradually spread to the houses. People were very scared because no one understood what was happening and what exactly had happened in the city. Looking out the window, the man assumed that the authorities had mobilized troops. But this was not the case because the real alarm was that the city was being attacked by goblins. The evil villains could easily kill any resident, as they were much stronger and more prepared than ordinary people. All the women were scared of these terrible monsters because no one knew what to do in this situation. The creatures continued to advance, and the paupers only screamed, trying to escape from the city. Due to the significant destruction in the city, panic began, and every resident tried to somehow save his life. At this time, Alice was eating apples and did not understand why people were shouting so loudly. After some time, the girl noticed that a column of smoke and fire were visible not far from her. The worried lady still wanted to know what was happening in the city now. The worried girl ran to the place where the fire started to help people. The frightened residents continued to shout for everyone to run because they were coming. Looking at everything that was happening, Alice could not understand what had happened. The old man came up to Alice and said that she needed to run as quickly as possible. The girl immediately decided to find out what was going on and whether it was really all about the fire, since she had ice magic so she could help. At the same time, someone fired an arrow, intending to kill one of the city's residents. This arrow hit the grandfather, who was standing not far from Alice. A murder took place before the lady's eyes, and she could not believe that someone was capable of such a thing. The villain who dared to do this turned out to be the goblin archer, who laughed at the fact that he had killed another man. As he was about to shoot, the villain began shooting at other residents, and they wanted to take the girl away into slavery. Suddenly, one of the goblin's hands began to freeze gradually because Alice was using her magical abilities. As the ice magic gradually spread throughout the goblin's body, he began to scream in pain as he could not feel his arms or legs. Soon after the goblin was completely frozen, his body literally exploded due to the extreme temperature difference. The evil monsters became worried because they saw that they had finally found a worthy opponent. Feeling fury, The girl wanted to destroy literally all the goblins who dared to attack this innocent city. Looking at their opponent, the goblins began to attack using their weapons. They wanted to do everything possible to finish off the hero. Alice drew her sword and expected the goblins to attack and was about to repel their attack. According to the girl, none of the goblins will have time to blink before they die. The inglorious scoundrels did not care at all and continued to attack using their small daggers. The brave warrior tried to repel their attack and used her sword to destroy every goblin. The lady's magical abilities were impressive because thanks to them, she was able to easily destroy all the goblins who tried to attack her. On one of the roofs sat a goblin archer, about to fire a crossbow. The villain shot an arrow, and it looks like Alice is now in danger. But fortunately, thanks to her icy count, the girl was able to reflect the very arrow that was flying to her death. These events immediately caused concern in the goblin, because he did not expect the enemy to be so strong. Thanks to magic, Alice gained ice wings that protected her back. Alicia Claudia, using her magical abilities, she flew into the air because the wings could not only protect her. Now the girl had only one mission left, to restore justice, which could only be done if she sent all the monsters back to hell. Sensing danger, the monsters realized that the enemy was much stronger than they thought, so they had to change their plan. But the little goblin commander shouted that the girl must be killed immediately, and all the goblins immediately began to fire their weapons. Trying to dodge the many arrows, the lady, using her magical abilities, struck several blows. All attacking monsters were frozen, and now they could no longer cause trouble for anyone. At the same time, events continued to take place in the Moonlight Tavern. The women listened to their favorite chick because he told them stories about how he captured a pirate ship. Suddenly, the young man heard someone nearby start shouting that the city was being attacked. Feeling the danger, the boy apologized to the girls, as it seemed to him that it was too noisy outside, and he would leave them for a while as he needed to sort out the situation. At that very second, someone broke down the door of the tavern and immediately wanted to go inside. This immediately caused concern in the protagonist, as he did not understand what was happening. As it turned out, there was a goblin attack, and one of the villains entered the room. In fact, Goblin was not alone. 3 goblins immediately began to inspect the room in order to grab all the girls and finish off all the men. The frightened girls began to scream in horror and fear when they saw the attacking goblins. The evil creatures were going to capture the girls because they had a mission that the magician himself had assigned to them. Thus, the young man realized that it was these green misunderstandings that were the culprits of the noise outside. Panic continued to spread throughout the city, and all the inhabitants gradually fled, trying to escape from the goblins. An excited Martha tried to find her son, but did not understand where he was. As it turned out, at that time the guy was busy with something else and did not even know about the invasion of the city. The young man was playing with toys and said that his adventurous sister would teach him the most powerful sword technique in the future. The friends were impressed by this because they also wanted to learn to be real adventurers. Suddenly, one of Henry's friends noticed that it was too noisy outside. The children decided to look out the window and see what was happening in the city. So, thanks to his good hearing, one of the friends learned that the city was under invasion. At that very second, the baby heard his mother calling him, who was walking down the street nearby. Martha continued walking in the rain and tried to find her son, because it was dangerous outside now. The worried young man looked at his mother and immediately began calling her, saying that he was okay. Suddenly the child saw something terrible that he could not expect. It turned out that there were several goblins near his mother who were about to attack. The evil creatures smiled evilly, and it seemed as if they were about to finish off the woman. Out of fear, the lady even broke her flashlight, as she did not expect to meet goblins on the street. The goblins immediately pounced on the innocent woman and immediately began to tie her up so that she could not run away. All this happened right in front of her son. He immediately began to cry because he realized that his mother was in danger. The determined guy decided to go down to save his mother. But his friends began to stop him because if he becomes a goblin, they will kill him, and his friends need Henry alive because they only need girls, and they kill all men. All this time the boy tried to kick because he wanted to save his mother. Feeling great fear for his beloved mother, the young man continued to scream because he wanted to help her with all his might. The woman also began to cry, as she realized that she was in a hopeless situation and would not be able to resist such a number of goblins. In the place where Martha had been, only her umbrella remained, lying alone on the ground. Meanwhile, events continued to take place in the bar. One of the goblins flew out the window, breaking the glass in the process. It turned out that it was the main character who decided to fight the impudent goblins who dared to break into the bar. These goblins were truly deservedly called green, underdeveloped creatures because they did not even allow him to spend time with their precious guests. That's why Merlin Lucifer wanted to destroy absolutely all goblins, because they were ignorant. The frightened creature began to scream at the top of its lungs because it understood that it was about to die. The young man didn't care and beat the scoundrel with a stool, making him suffer. Thanks to his physical strength, the guy managed to defeat absolutely all the goblins that attacked the bar. In fact, there were many more goblins than he thought. A large number of the creatures began to approach them. Thus, the protagonist realized that the battle was still going on and all these goblins wanted to die. The green creatures still didn't know the power of this guy and didn't understand who he really was. The goblin leader shouted that this guy had to be killed. At that very moment, a large number of villains began to attack, and the protagonist stood unwavering and watched everything that was happening. Smiling at the goblins, the boy only thought about whether these weaklings really thought they could handle him. To defeat these scoundrels, he only had to draw his sword a little and strike. This unusual attack was truly impressive, as it allowed the young man to destroy several dozen goblins with just one blow. All the goblins were shocked by these abilities, as no one had ever seen anything like it. As soon as the sword was in the sheath, the blow should have taken effect. The villains had a strange feeling, as if they were starting to swell up from the inside. Each of the goblins felt like they were getting fatter and were about to explode. Because such an unusual skill was used on the villains, they simply exploded and created a giant fireworks display. In another part of the city, people continued to run away and scream in fear, as they could do nothing to resist the villains. The magician found this spectacle amusing, since he considered people to be pathetic creatures, incapable of anything. Suddenly, one of the goblins came to the owner and reported that their army in the western part of the city was completely destroyed. Leshy clearly did not expect this, and wanted to know how he was completely destroyed, because only a bearer of the highest spiritual rank was capable of this. The alarmed goblin exclaimed that he didn't feel any magic, no aura, no mana. This killer looked like an ordinary person with blonde hair and red eyes, and he was also handsome. Hearing this, the magician could not believe these words, since the servant called the enemy handsome. They, the goblins, only need human women, and they can only consider human women beautiful, not men. The alarmed goblin fell to his knees and began to say that the great mage was indeed right, and only women could be beautiful. The experienced fighter understood that in reality everything was not so simple. An ordinary person without mana and aura was able to destroy their army in the western part of the city. It was a truly strange phenomenon, hardly possible for an ordinary person. The goblin also only saw this guy pull out his sword, and in an instant or a few seconds, their entire western army was destroyed in an instant. Furthermore, the army in the central part of the city was also completely annihilated, and their bodies were hung very high and impaled on ice peaks. This is a tragedy, and the one who did this is a bearer of the highest saint rank ice sword. Feeling a strong rage, the mage realized that their entire offensive was not going according to plan. The losses of their army were too great, and they needed to retreat as soon as possible. Thus, thanks to the efforts of Alice and Merlin, the magician shouted that the entire goblin army should retreat. But with the number of human women they captured today, the number of losses could be replenished in a shorter period of time. The remaining goblins gradually began to retreat, taking with them the slaves they had managed to capture. Among the slaves was Martha, who thought only about her son and that everything would be fine with him. For Alice, the battle was still going on, and she was flying over the city to destroy absolutely all enemies. Suddenly the girl noticed that absolutely all the goblins began to retreat, and heavy rain washed away their tracks, making it difficult to track exactly where they were heading. The girl did not want to let the goblins go with the kidnapped women. Suddenly, one of the giant goblins began to attack the girl and swung a giant weapon at her. In an attempt to protect herself, Alice used her magical abilities and created an ice shield. But it was quite difficult to resist such a strong enemy, as he could easily destroy the shield. Due to such a strong blow, Alice was left defenseless and could no longer use her magical abilities. The giant goblin was indeed much stronger than her, as he could easily destroy magical shields. Feeling very angry, the girl shouted that the goblin needed to step aside, otherwise she would definitely not spare him and would kill him with all cruelty. But for the creature, these were just ordinary threats that would not affect it in any way. The villain realized that he was much stronger than this girl and continued to attack. Meanwhile, Alice's magic was restored, and she decided to attack with ice arrows again. The attack was quite painful for the creature, but the giant goblin still easily defended itself from the ice arrows. Although the creature was in great pain, it was still able to withstand such attacks with ease. Realizing that it was necessary to end this fight as quickly as possible, the girl continued to attack again. Thanks to her invincible strength, Alice was able to defeat the giant and literally pierce him through and through. The villain's body gradually began to freeze, leaving the goblin unable to fight any longer. Alicia Claudia defeated one of the toughest opponents of her life, putting an end to the fight. But the battle itself was not yet won, as the captive was still in the possession of the goblins. Looking around, the lady realized that the enemies had already retreated. Feeling guilty, the girl realized that she had allowed the goblins to escape along with all the women. This battle was truly horrific as it resulted in the death of a large number of innocent civilians. The goblins have captured the inhabitants of this city, so in the near future they will have no one to rely on, which means that Alice will have to stay in this city for a while longer. The bell continued to ring, alerting all residents to the need to gather in the city center. The worried and injured people wanted to understand what was happening and what they should do. Many people began to gather in the church to heal their wounds after the battle with the goblins. The mayor began his speech by saying that many people had been captured and taken to the mountains, so he wanted to know what people thought about this and how best to deal with this situation. Even he, as the mayor of the city, does not intend to make decisions and put forward his ideas alone in such a critical situation. One of the men said that it was better to just forget about the situation because there was nothing they could do. These goblins were simply terrible. There was a whole horde of them, 5 or 10 times more than them. If they had taken the women to their lair, then most likely they would not have been able to save them. Suddenly Henry screamed, telling everyone that those ugly goblins had taken his mother. And for the boy, it was really strange that all the men refused to fight because their relatives were also kidnapped, and he could not believe that no one was ready to come to the aid of women. The child believed that all women needed to be saved. After all, they simply had to do it because risking their lives for the sake of those closest to them was normal, and if women weren't helped, everyone would go to hell. Suddenly a man interrupted the child's speech and told him not to talk nonsense. It turned out that it was a priest, and he was against what the child was saying. In fact, the priest was happy about everything that was happening and said that all those present would not go to hell because the great goddess of light and mercy was on their side. The frightened mayor decided to ask the Holy Father if he had a way to solve this problem. Everyone began to pray and ask the Holy Father if he knew what to do in this situation. After thinking for a while, the priest began to calm everyone down and said that he could solve this problem and suggested that they forget about the kidnapped girls and pray to the goddess of light, and she, in turn, would forgive them this sin. The cowardly scoundrels immediately began to pray to the goddess of light because they did not want to save the women. The priest insisted that they all knew perfectly well how many opponents they had, and fighting so many people in their lair was stupid, as if death was inevitable. So they had no choice but to abandon the women, and they could stay here and pray to the goddess of light. Right now, they can pray piously to the goddess of light, and she in turn will help them save and bless their souls so that they do not go to hell. So the men realized that if they bought a Bible and prayed every day, their wives would come home. One of the men behind said that he too had once been captured by goblins, and many captives had prayed to the goddess of light to get out of the goblin's lair. All the people were simply shocked by such a statement and really wanted to know if this man was in the goblin lair. Once everyone present was convinced that the man was indeed a prisoner in the goblin's lair, everyone immediately wanted to buy the Bible. But in reality, all this was just part of a plan to make big money. The priest and the man were in cahoots with each other, and through this story, they wanted to sell as many books as possible. The scoundrel shouted for the guys not to worry, because he was carrying dozens of blessed books with him. Only 100 gold per book, the quantity was limited, and they needed to be bought urgently. The men were possessed and began to approach the priest to buy books, and only Henry realized that all these scoundrels were just cowards. And by listening to this scoundrel, they only lose precious time, because with every minute the situation of the prisoners worsens, and the holy charlatan will definitely go to hell after death. Trembling with anger, the child realized that this was just self-deception and that ultimately no one would be saved. Suddenly a girl came up to the boy and said that he had done a great job. As it turned out, it was Alice who ordered the hypocrite to throw his worthless tricks aside and not dare to deceive these people, because they were in a hopeless situation. The angry priest began to shout that this girl was a heretic and should not be listened to. The man also wanted her not to slander their sacred religion and called her a witch, for which he wanted to burn her. But the villain didn't yet know that the person standing before him was Alicia Claudia, the golden adventurer and former heroine of the 233rd generation of heroes of the Holy Throne. People really didn't expect it because they didn't know they had a hero in their city. All this frightened the priest very much, as he did not understand how to proceed further. In fact, the priest began to mock the girl. Since the 233rd generation of heroes became the worst generation of heroes in history, she brought only shame to the Holy See. Not only was she defeated during the crusade against the Demon King, but she also entered into a good relationship with Lucifer. Alice didn't really plan to talk about the past here. She was only here to get the priest to stop deceiving people who were already in a very difficult situation. If His Holiness had known that the priest was calling on those present to remain neutral and abandon their relatives to their fate, he would most likely have been very disappointed. That's why Alice wanted to do everything she could to make the priest make people think differently. The brave girl began to threaten the scoundrel with her blade so that he would finally come to his senses and stop profiting from people. If a person thinks that prayer is the way out, then he needs to start praying now, and then it will be seen whether he will die by the sword or not, and whether he will dare to use his life as an argument that prayer is really the way out. All this time, the villain remained silent, and only after Alice finished speaking did he immediately fall to his knees. The impudent man began to bow to the girl and apologize, because he was a lying charlatan. Alice knew that all people were afraid of death, and even if their loved ones were kidnapped by goblins, they still did not want to do rash things, But they must realize that prayer was a useless spiritual consolation, and they were just comforting themselves with useless hopes. But simply doing nothing and abandoning women in trouble is the act of a coward. All people must understand that the goddess of light will not help cowards, and they will all definitely go to hell. The heroine knew that there are many impossible things in this world that may seem impossible at first glance, but when relatives, close friends, and neighbors are waiting for salvation, then all men must do at least something. Henry was really impressed with how his little sister performed and realized that she was really cool. That is why all the residents had only two options: how exactly to act. The first option was that a person could live until the pangs of conscience became unbearable and death occurred. And the second option was that you could take up a sword and rise up against these goblins. Turning to the mayor, the girl wanted to know if he could tell him exactly where the lair was. The man would have gladly told the girl exactly where this lair was, but he knew that the Goblin Emperor had already reached Saint rank. In fact, the lady was not frightened by this, and she asked to tell about the location of the goblin's lair. Meanwhile, events continued to take place at the Moonlight Tavern. The protagonist tried to console all the women who were still in the tavern. The boy also tried to calm the beautiful ladies, because if he was next to them, then they were completely safe. Each of the girls present literally begged the chick to protect them. One of the visitors said that Sister Martha went outside to look for her beloved baby, but she still hasn't returned. Suddenly, someone entered the tavern again, but it was a man. Gendry was angry at Merlin because he stayed in the tavern the whole time and did absolutely nothing. The young man immediately decided to ask the child where he had run away and where his mother was now. But the kid was not going to answer the scoundrel and immediately entered his room. Feeling a strong rage towards the goblins, the young man wanted to do everything possible to finish them off. In the child's mind, Uncle Merlin didn't need to know what he would do next, because now Henry was going to save his mother. Hearing this, the boy could not believe that it really happened, and those green misunderstandings grabbed Sister Martha. The determined child ran and ordered Uncle Merlin not to interfere, because he was already running to save his mother. The hero decided to stop the boy and asked why he was in such a hurry, because now he was going to certain death, and first he needed to prepare. An angry Henry started screaming to be let go because he wanted to save his mother. Merlin wanted to talk to the child honestly, since now he was not able to help his mother alone, and it was better to tell him about the whole situation in more detail. The child began to cry and claimed that it was all his fault, and that it was his fault that his mother had been captured by the goblins who had attacked their city, and that he must save her and kill the goblins with his father's sword. Trying to help in this situation, the guy wanted to stop the child because he was still weak and would not be able to cope with the horde of goblins. Stepping aside, the child began to repeat that he had once promised something to his father. He was promised that when his father passed away, he would become the boss, so now Henry must protect his mother. These words really shocked the protagonist, because he did not expect that the child would be so loyal and brave. Merlin immediately remembered his childhood, because he, too, was once a child. These memories were very good, because the boy lay carefree near his mother and thought about how much he loved her. Little Merlin decided to turn to his mother to tell her something. The brave boy exclaimed that when he grows up, he will definitely protect his mother. For the mother, these words were truly very pleasant, because she understood that she had raised a worthy son. There was a smile on the protagonist's face, because the memories were indeed pleasant. But looking at Henry, Merlin realized that he was still very weak and unable to fight. Because of this, the hero became angry, because this inspired fool had caused him a lot of trouble. The frightened women saw the young man so angry for the first time and did not understand why he was behaving this way. The smart guy tried to calm the women down and asked them to stay in this tavern until dawn and leave only in the morning. After all, even Lucifer felt like he needed to be a hero sometimes, and that wasn't such a bad thing. The fortifications around Hallottimer were still burning, and residents gradually began to gather to join the fight. Alice was already moving towards the goblin camp to try to save the innocent women. Suddenly, the girl heard someone trying to talk to her. It turned out that it was the same wounded soldier who brought the goblins here. When Alice saw this guy, she wanted to know if he was okay and asked her to save her strength, because she was going to go after the city's residents to cure him. Trembling with helplessness, the young man nevertheless decided to look at the girl who was talking to him. Thus, he realized that this girl was a gold-level adventurer named Alice. Grabbing the girl by the hand, the young man asked her to promise him something. He really wanted Alice to save his bride, who was with the goblins. The young man was very remorseful, as he could not save his bride alone. Unable to stand such behavior from a guy, Alice shouted for him to raise his head, because adventurers must always maintain their honor and dignity. The determined lady nevertheless realized that it was necessary to deprive the poor man of his title of adventurer. The heroine also decided to find out the name of this poor young man's bride. Her name was Avra. Therefore, Alice promised that tomorrow Aura would personally return the adventurer's badge to the young man. While talking to the adventurer, the guy couldn't believe that it was really true, since he didn't expect the lady to help him. After that, he shouted to the girl that the Goblin Emperor was a very powerful being. He had already reached the saint rank, and he should be more careful. The saint rank was indeed dangerous, and the girls had already said so many times, but it couldn't make her change her mind. These words will not influence her decision in any way, because after hearing them, she will not change her decision and will not give up. Even if Alicia Claudia falls into despair, she will still continue to fight until the end. This girl always hopes for the best, because she is a hero. Meanwhile, events continued to occur inside the underground Goblin Mausoleum. A large number of girls were tied up, and goblins were on duty around them to prevent the captives from escaping. Among the girls was Marta, who was constantly thinking about her son and what fate awaited him. The Goblin Emperor was very happy that he now had a huge number of concubines, and he wanted to know how to thank the magician. Gargamel said that he did not need any reward, and that it was his greatest honor to serve the king. The party of girls was really good, and the king ordered them to be taken to the far prison to wait for him to take water procedures, and then he would have a lot of fun with them. The magician also made sure that people did not make surprise attacks on his fortifications. That's why Gargamel ordered the goblins to stand guard at the entrance to the cave. The evil goblin understood that people were very emotional creatures and would want their women back in the city. In connection with this, goblins began to be on duty around the clock in order to identify violators. Suddenly, one of the goblins noticed someone using a telescope. The soldier immediately decided to report to the magician that something white was moving in their direction. This white creature didn't look like a demonic beast, and it seemed like it was an opponent. All the soldiers were shocked by this turn of events, as they did not expect that revenge would overtake them so quickly. That same unfamiliar beast turned out to be a female swordsman who wielded ice magic. Boiling with anger, the magician ordered the giant goblins to be called here so that they would teach the impudent girl a lesson. But it was too late, as the girl attacked and killed many goblins. Alice had no trouble finishing off the goblins standing at the entrance to the castle. The brave girl began to move deeper into the cave and exclaimed that, apparently, the goblins were gone. Determined, Alice wanted to do everything she could to save all the women. This made the magician very angry, and he realized that now he would make every effort to finish off this hero. Using fire magic, the villain was about to launch a powerful attack to prevent Alice from entering the cave. The heroine did not want to tolerate such treatment and shouted at the scoundrel to get out. The lady kicked the scoundrel in the face with all her might, causing his teeth to fall out. The force of the blow literally sent the goblin crashing into the wall, making it impossible for him to continue the fight. The frightened goblins did not know what to do in this situation, as they had not seen Gargamel suffer from the attacks of a normal person. All this time, Alice carefully watched the goblins approaching her. Realizing that she needed to move on, the girl froze the villains and began to make her way deeper into the cave. Looking around, the lady did not understand why there was not a single enemy around her. Suddenly, the wall gradually began to crack, and it was heard that someone was approaching. The girl immediately sensed something was wrong and realized that her life would soon be in danger. And indeed it is. Two giant goblins broke down the wall and decided it would be a good idea to attack together. The first villain began to swing a giant sledgehammer to strike. Luckily, the goblin's first attack missed, and the agile girl dodged it. The goblins didn't yet know how strong Alice was, because they had only seen her defeat the little goblins. Using her magical attack, the girl was able to freeze the goblins' limbs, making them unable to continue fighting. The magic sword helped her in battle and froze enemies with one touch. Thus, Alice realized that these goblins were the last stronghold guarding the entrance to their lair. If they valued their lives, then they had to get out of here. Meanwhile, events continued to develop on the street, where a large number of people gathered to take revenge. Many people grabbed all their weapons and headed towards the goblin lair, where their wives and relatives were. Unfortunately, the impudent goblins were already waiting for the people, because they understood that the men would still want their wives back. The impudent scoundrels began to attack people to prevent them from going further. At the same time, Lord Gargamel began to slowly regain consciousness after Alice kicked him hard. The worried goblins told the magician that their situation was very bad, as they were being attacked by the city's inhabitants. The goblin clearly didn't expect this, because he didn't understand whether the villagers had really decided to attack the goblin hideout. But it was true, and all the men of the city headed to the cave to avenge the attack. This turn of events made the magician incredibly angry, which made him want to kill absolutely everyone with his magic. The mayor also took part in the attack and addressed the inhabitants. Since they were now almost at the entrance to the goblin's lair, if they suddenly broke through, they would wait here for Miss Alice to join, and then they would inflict a crushing defeat on the goblins. According to the magician, people are not his rivals, since they are simple peasants armed with pitchforks and chair legs, so they cannot compare with their noble warriors. A fire broke out near one of the city's residents and gradually began to spread throughout the area. I don't understand what's going on. The man looked at this fire and thought it was harmless. In fact, it turned out to be the demonic magic of a goblin who attacked the human army. The frightened people began to understand, and their fighting spirit disappeared when they saw that magic was being used against them. Looking at everything that was happening, Merlin Lucifer couldn't believe that someone could use such a large wall of fire. I approached one of the residents. The young man wanted to know if he had seen a jerk named Henry, who is the son of the owner of the Moonlight Inn. But as it turns out, children are not allowed to go camping, so he does not belong here. Thus, the young man realized that this young prankster had arrived on the mountain alone long before the main troops of the city. The frightened mayor began to turn towards the youth and shout that inside the lair was a goblin who had already reached the rank of saint, and he should be given to the swordsman with silver hair and ice malt. Turning to the man, Lucifer realized he was talking about Alice, but she was just an opponent he had defeated in the past, and she alone had no merits other than being a little pretty and blushing very cutely when she was embarrassed. This really shocked the man, as he didn't expect that this guy was Alice's opponent in the past. Full of determination, Lucifer took out his sword and wanted to use his magical powers to end this battle. Raising his sword, the boy literally deactivated fire magic, causing the wall of fire to collapse. Seeing this, all the city's residents were simply shocked, as they did not expect that a simple guy was capable of such a thing. Thanks to his skills, Merlin was able to break through the wall of fire. After this, the passage was closed and all the inhabitants remained behind a wall of fire. The alarmed man began to remember that he had once seen the silhouette of this guy. His aura was exactly the same as that of the great swordsman who had destroyed the dangerous gang of red-bearded pirates in the port of Elgin half a year ago. Many people simultaneously admired the strength of this guy. After all, he single-handedly kept the entire imperial army of Britannia in fear and apprehension. The townspeople simultaneously despised him, as he made his living through prostitution, comforting girls with his speeches and getting them drunk. Thus, the city's residents realized that it was probably the same person. The goblin knew that the crowd of lowbacks outside would not be able to overcome his wall of fire, so now they had one more important thing to do. The scoundrel ordered the goblin to take the guard and quickly bring the girl with silver hair to him, because they should not disturb his majesty. But the goblin didn't understand how this was possible, and how they could neutralize this girl, because only the Goblin King was capable of this. The angry magician shouted that he himself could defeat this scoundrel who had made his way into the cave. Suddenly, someone nearby decided to turn to the magician and say that the night had been truly wonderful. The frightened scoundrel looked around and could not understand how the guy managed to get through his fiery curtain and without getting burned. Merlin smirked and continued to approach the villain. And he said that he was an amazing talent, and that he made everyone fall in love with him just by looking at him, and that he was the best worker at the Moonlight Tavern. Looking at this guy, the goblin couldn't believe that he was really strong and ordered to show him real strength. But in reality, this stranger had no mana or aura, making him seem like trash. Because of this, the magician began to mock the guy, as he considered him a weakling and a loser. Feeling a strong rage towards the protagonist, the magician wanted to strike to finish off the stranger. But when the fireball hit the young man, he simply shook it off as if he didn't care. This turn of events made the goblin nervous, as he had never seen anyone react to his blow like that in his life. The young man was indeed very strong, but he had not yet shown his true strength. The magician could not understand how this happened, and what technique could cope with his fire, because it was the demonic power of the flame that was not easy to overcome. The villain was about to strike again and use his magical abilities to gather all the fire together. This fire was collected into a giant fire tornado in order for Merlin Lucifer to sense the true power of the goblin. The evil enemy continued to laugh and shouted that the fire tornadoes should turn this arrogant bastard into ashes. But even this blow was easily prevented by the hero, since it turned out to be much stronger than the goblin himself thought. Feeling confused, the magician cannot understand how this is possible. As Lucifer continued to fight, he exclaimed that he couldn't help but praise the goblin for sending 2 different types of magic at him on his own, but even so, his attacks were too weak. Besides, Merlin really liked it when a small, weak bug jumped in front of him and tried with all his might to cling to life, especially if such a bug imagined itself to be God knows who, because the magician overestimated his strength. That's why the main character shouted that now the weakling needs to sleep forever. The young man drew his sword and delivered a blow that was impossible to track. At that very moment, the goblin began to experience severe pain, which he had never experienced before. With the last of his strength, the goblin shouted that the guy would not be able to kill him because he was a strong opponent. But, in the opinion of the main character, this magician is too weak and not worthy of drawing the sword from its sheath. And with immunity to any type of magic and invulnerability in close combat, it will be very difficult to find a worthy opponent. That is why the main character was going to go further into the lair, because the next goal was right here. Some time later, events continued in the fortress where the goblins were serving. All the women were imprisoned and kept in a giant cage. Suddenly, someone pushed Goblin to the floor, and he started screaming in pain. Immediately after this, the Wanderer cut down the prison lock, and all the girls were freed. It turned out that it was Alice who came to the rescue to save all the slaves. The alarmed girls immediately began to run away, as they were afraid that they would be captured again and made slaves. Miss Martha came up to Alice and wanted to ask her if everything was all right with her son Henry. The girl decided to calm her worried mother and said that Henry was fine. He was in the city and waiting for her return. The woman was very happy that her son was okay and even started to cry, but they had to hurry because if they didn't hurry, more enemies might come here. The women started shouting at the top of their lungs that everyone needed to get out of here because they were now free. Trying to find another slave, Alice began to scream about whether the girls had seen her. Luckily, the girl who had been captured earlier was nearby, and she called out her name. Alice was very glad that she managed to find this girl, because in this way, she could fulfill her promise. The girl, who did not expect such a turn of events, was shocked, as she thought that her fiancé was already dead. In fact, the girl was still in shock because the enemy was right behind Alice. The smart hero immediately pushed the innocent girl away because the battle was about to begin. At that very moment, the giant monster struck Alice with all his might with his sword. Because of this, the girl flew several dozen meters to the side and hit the wall. The lady experienced incredible pain from such a strong blow, because she had never met such a strong opponent. The ladies were very alarmed that the scoundrel had harmed Mrs. Alice. As it turned out, it was the Demon King who had to deal with this misunderstanding himself. The king kept all the girls in fear, as they were now slaves again. Now the villain shouted that the girls would not escape from here, and they still had a lot of fun ahead, and he would definitely catch them, and if anyone else tried to escape, he would destroy them. The worried ladies began to worry that they might get hurt during their escape. Suddenly, Alice used a magical technique, thanks to which she imprisoned the Goblin King in a magical prison. She used her last bit of magic just to allow the girls to escape, because as long as her heart was beating, she would not allow the goblin to harm anyone. Determined, Alice wanted to do everything she could to save the slaves. But for the king, it was a weak trap, and a rat of the highest order could not imprison him in a cage of ice. Using her magical abilities, Dama once again dealt the villain an icy blow. Due to the ice magic, the king was trapped and seemed unable to escape. Alice also decided to call a girl named Saihyo to give her something. It was the very same adventurer's badge that was intended especially for this lady, because now the girls need to take this badge to their fiancé. Feeling great pain from the blow, Alice exclaimed that Saihyo should take heart because her fiancé was still waiting for her outside. Once they escape from here, this nightmare will end and they can all return to their peaceful lives. Holding the adventurer badge in her hands, the girl began to cry because she missed her boyfriend so much. But Alice believed that Saihyo would be able to reunite with her beloved and marry him. They could have children, so the girls needed to gather courage and take everyone away from here. Immediately after this, the heroine began to create a magical ice barrier to protect the girls from the villain. The alarmed lady saw that the heroine wanted to sacrifice herself to protect the others. The Goblin King turned out to be a demonic creature, his eyes glowing with a bright scarlet light. The villain noticed that Alice had indeed decided to sacrifice herself to stop him, but she didn't even know these girls, and he, as the Goblin King, had never seen a person like her before. That's why the king decided to give the girl a choice, and she had only two options. The first option was that she would have to give up her sword and become his princess or fight him to the last drop of blood. But Alice did not listen to this goblin and exclaimed that she would choose the second option in any case. Because of this, the king began to laugh, because he realized that the girl was refusing a wonderful offer. Alicia Claudia didn't want to listen to this loser's chatter and was going to use her magical powers to finish him off. These abilities only made the king laugh, because in his opinion, these were desperate efforts, and he thought that she would attack him with some kind of huge ice stake. But in the end, all that he got was a cold drizzle. Blowing a kiss, the girl said that she would give this big guy the opportunity to die by her blade. As soon as the girl said these words, memories from her childhood immediately began to pop up in her head. Alice remembered what it was like when she was learning the art of sword fighting as a child. Earlier, her teacher told her that she must master this skill because it would be the key to a desperate attack when she found herself in a hopeless situation. Thus, Alice realized that she would have to rely on just a normal attack, and she didn't believe that she would be able to hit any saint rank holder with it. To this, the experienced sage replied that Alice should understand that most of the saint rank holders were members of human society, but if she still managed to strike that blow straight to the heart, then there was a very high probability of striking a fatal blow. In addition, they are a tribe of snowy mountains. They have magic and martial arts, relying on spiritual energy, so if Alice attacks with this blow to any part of the body, pouring enough spiritual energy into it, then even if the enemy does not die, he will receive a very serious injury. The weak point of the bearer of the Holy Order depended on his intelligence and wisdom, as well as the effect of a sudden attack. You can add poison mixed with spiritual energy, you can threaten and then take hostage. If nothing works, then you can use feminine charm, seduce, and hit. Taking the advice of the great master, Alice took action and was about to deliver that very blow. Using her sword, the girl swung it with all her might to hit the villain's weak spot. Meanwhile, events continued to take place in the dungeon, where Henry fell to the floor along with his sword. The giant orc mocked the boy because he thought he was a small rat that had snuck into their lair. But as soon as the villain learned that the boy had come for his mother, he immediately decided to kill him, since he was still a child. Henry cried because of this, because he realized that now he could die. But fortunately, after a few seconds the orc did not strike back. It seemed that there was no danger now. Opening his eyes, Henry saw Merlin bravely fighting the enemy. With one blow the evil monster was defeated and the boy was no longer in danger. It was a truly unexpected sight for the young man, as he had not expected Uncle Merlin to help him. Thus, the boy realized that his uncle was very strong. He did not conduct any combat operations, and with just one technique he instantly destroyed the enemy. Looking at Henry, Merlin said that he tried very hard and almost defeated that goblin. So he gave him 99 points out of 100, but since he ran away to such a dangerous place alone, he deducted the required 99 points. As a result, the hero discovered that the boy's score during the fight was 0 points out of 100. At this time, Henry was still in shock, as he didn't expect Uncle Merlin's sword technique to be so powerful. So, from the very beginning, Uncle Merlin did not lie to him when he praised his technique of quick decapitation, but the boy turned out to be stupid because he considered the hero an impudent liar. After looking around, the guy decided to ask the child if everything was okay. Suddenly, Henry grabbed the protagonist by the leg and shouted that he was okay, after which he literally begged to teach him the technique of quick decapitation. Merlin began to refuse because he had already offered to learn this technique, and the child had refused all this time, and it was somehow rude since it was already quite late to learn. Suddenly, someone nearby saw Henry and Merlin with surprise. It turned out that these were women who had already escaped from the dungeon and were located near the exit. Marta was very happy to meet her beloved son and immediately went to hug him. The worried woman also asked the guy to run and help Alice, as she was in danger. The girl fought the Goblin Emperor alone. She sacrificed herself to save them, and Martha was afraid that he was too strong for her. Meanwhile, the battle with the king continued, and Alice was defeated. The evil villain laughed evilly because he had the advantage on the battlefield. Even Alice herself began to panic, because she understood that the enemy was much stronger. The Goblin King realized that the blizzard created by his enemy was just a trick to distract him, and eventually caught her. But in fact, the king was surprised because the girl jumped so quickly, managed to anger him so much in such a short time, and since she was ready to fall in battle, he wanted to know why she decided to retreat. Alice remained silent, but the king could not bear it any longer, and in order to make her speak, he squeezed her with all his strength in his fist. The girl began to scream in pain, and this piercing scream could be heard literally throughout the entire dungeon. Martha continued to beg the protagonist to help Lady Alice as she fought the Goblin Emperor alone. After thinking for a while, the boy finally realized that if he saved Alice, the chances that she would vouch for him so that he could become an adventurer would increase. The tavern owner also exclaimed that if the young man would help Alice, she would increase his salary by half a month. But such a proposal already offended the main character, since he did not understand who they took him for, as if they considered him greedy and a person ready to do anything for money. The woman didn't even try to justify herself, since she truly believed that the young man was very greedy. After thinking for a while, the boy still said that no amount of money could destroy his feelings and sympathy for Miss Alice. Everyone was happy that the hero was heading to help Alice, and wanted him to return alive and teach Henry his tricks. These words of support made the guy very happy, because he realized that at least someone really needed him. He even agreed to teach Henry, but only on the condition that he would take care of his mother and take her to a safe place, and he, in turn, would go to the stupid girl and help her. The battle continued, and the impudent king tortured Alice with all his might in order to inflict as much injury on her as possible. According to the scoundrel, the girl had a beautiful expression on her face, and her moans were good. With every second, he became more and more interested in her. Trying to resist, Alice came up with a plan that would help her get out of here. Having made a surprise attack, the girl was about to break free from the villain's clutches. The attack was indeed unexpected, as the king did not expect a block of ice to fall on him. As it turned out, there was a huge number of ice blocks on the ceiling, which were supposed to hit the enemy directly. Many fragments began to fall directly on the king, causing him to scream in pain. Having taken damage, the impudent man released the girl from his hands, thanks to which she was now free. Looking at his opponent, the king could not understand why the girl allowed herself to treat him like that. In fact, it was a result of her disdain for the Goblin King, and now she would allow him to thoroughly test the Snow Mountain sword technique. Having decided to strike, Alice rushed into battle and ran with all her might straight towards the enemy. This unexpected attack confused the ogre, and he realized that he still needed to continue to resist the blows. The first blow dealt the giant quite a severe wound, causing him to cry out in pain. The second blow landed on the villain's head, and it seemed that the Orc King was defeated. The third strike was caused by a huge ice spike, which was supposed to finish Alice off this fight. The villain began to scream in anger and pain because he did not expect that an ordinary person could defeat him. The wounded girl watched her opponent and wanted to understand if he was really dead. After observing the enemy for some time, she finally realized that the battle was finally over. Suddenly, magical rays began to appear behind the girl and approach the enemy. Looking around, the lady still wanted to understand what was going on because this glow looked very strange. It turned out that the enemy began to recover, and thanks to this magical light, his wounds healed. This left Alice in shock, as she had never seen anything like this before. Thus, after a few seconds, the king was able to fight again and was ready for battle. The giant began to laugh evilly because he saw that the girl was disappointed, because she thought she had won this battle. Frightened Alice wanted to understand why her enemy was not dying, because she had pierced his heart, and even those who held holy orders were not able to withstand this blow. These words only made the scoundrel laugh, because he wanted to say something. The king talked about goblins having their hearts on the right side, not the left, and Alice apparently had never read any books about goblins. This is what knowledge means, which changes destiny. But Alice was right. Because of his contempt, the king underestimated her, and in the future he will not be so favorable, so the girl should not expect mercy. Realizing that it was necessary to continue the fight, the girl decided to take action. At that very moment, the evil giant began to attack and drew his giant sword to strike again. I tried to resist. The girl used a magical ice wall attack. As the battle continued, the king realized that the insignificant ice barrier would not be able to stop the Goblin King's attack. And it didn't help at all, because Alice was attacked by a giant sword. After such a strong blow, the girl lost consciousness and fell to the floor. The king mocked Alice and shouted that she would now be his slave for the rest of her life. This did not suit the heroine, and she wanted to do everything possible to destroy the villain, but her strength left her. Suddenly, the king noticed that another enemy was approaching him and wanted to fight. This stranger was so impudent that he began to take the girl away without engaging in a fight with the king. It was a real insult to the giant, as another rat had entered his domain. Looking at his hand, the villain noticed that it was completely missing. As it turned out, Merlin had made such a quick attack that the king had not even noticed it. Continuing to carry Alice in his arms, the guy did not understand why she did this for the sake of strangers. It's as if the girl doesn't have an awareness of the value of her own life, and that's why she's frivolous. Having placed the girl in a safe place, the young man realized that they had met only recently after such a long separation, so he could not allow her to die. The brave warrior was not going to judge Alice and wanted her to have a good rest, because now he had to finish off the big guy who had previously fought with her. Opening her eyes, the lady saw her hero coming to her aid. Alice even thought that this guy was so strong and determined. Even from the back, he looked powerful, and did he really come here to save her like when she was in a dangerous situation? With her eyes closed, the girl kept thinking that Mr. Swordsman Elgin had come to her aid. With her last bit of strength, Alice exclaimed that she loved her hero very much. Turning around, the young man began to think that these words were addressed specifically to him. Meanwhile, the king was approaching and was about to attack the uninvited guest. The king mocked the boy and shouted that he had come here to fight, not to talk, and that they should continue this game of Mortal Kombat. The protagonist immediately looked into the eyes of his enemy to understand how strong he really was. All this time, the emperor thought that only one rat had entered the palace, but as it turned out, another one had appeared. The villain also noted that the young man managed to cut off his right hand before he could react, and, apparently, he possessed extraordinary skill. But the absence of a limb did not prevent the king from restoring it, since he had such a gift. When the giant became enraged, he could instantly heal from any wound. Looking at the young man, the king couldn't understand what he was thinking when he challenged the great Goblin King. It was like going to certain death. Merlin Lucifer laughed and exclaimed that no matter what opponent stood before him, he could easily kill him if he drew his sword, and if the king thought he could defeat him, he was greatly mistaken. This was a real challenge for the Goblin King, and he smirked because he wanted to test how strong his opponent was. As he prepared to attack, the giant took action and swung his giant sword. The blow was aimed straight at Merlin, and it seemed like he had been hit by such a powerful weapon. In fact, the protagonist managed to easily avoid this attack and stop the sword with his bare hands. Looking at his opponent, the king could not believe that he had actually managed to hit him so hard, so he wanted to know the guy's name. Throwing aside the scoundrel's sword, Merlin asked the king what his rank was, and it was a very low rank, so he had no right to know his name. That's why the king was going to introduce himself first. He is one of the 13 emperors of the Goblin clan. I dare to call myself the most talented among them all. After some time, he will launch a larger attack. He needs these girls to gather a huge army. Extending his hand, the goblin offered the protagonist cooperation and said that he could make him his deputy and would give him a huge army under his care. Not every goblin is awarded such an honor. This proposal only made the young man laugh, since the king was trying to win him over to his side as if he were afraid of him. In this world, no one can defeat Lucifer, so no one is worthy of taking him as their pawn, and even if the goddess of light herself asks him to become her deputy, he will still refuse. With his proposal, the king insulted the protagonist's status, and he felt very insulted, so he will turn his enemy into fertilizer for the garden. These words made the emperor truly furious, so he was going to launch a new attack. With all his might, the impudent fellow jumped several dozen meters into the air and exclaimed that since his opponent did not want to cooperate, he was destined to die. According to the young man, Such a jump was really impressive, since the opponent was as fat as a pig, so he was able to jump so high. Even more enraged, the villain realized that he had to teach his enemy a lesson and send him straight to hell. At this point, the great Goblin King used his most powerful move, the Thunder Club. This attack was truly impressive in its power, as it resulted in the destruction of half of the castle. The king was proud of this attack, because it was his pride. Even the owner of the highest rank is not able to resist it. After its impact, even the enemy's body does not remain. But, as it turned out, the young man was still alive and standing right on his opponent's weapon. Laughing at this attack, Merlin Lucifer exclaimed that it was now his turn to attack. This blow was much stronger than the Goblin King's strongest attack, and now, with just one attack, the giant monster was defeated. Looking back, the king acknowledged his defeat and realized that his enemy had not only managed to evade his strongest blow, but had also struck back, and this was admirable. Feeling intense pain, the goblin also realized that the damage had exceeded the limit of possible restoration, but it was completely unclear how this was possible. After the blow, the young man said that he was curious who could have caused such a mess, perhaps some powerful king, but it turned out to be this loser, a miserable pig, and he was very disappointed. Before his death, the king wanted to know who his opponent was, because the alien could not be so powerful, and he must be a celebrity. Putting the sword back into its sheath, Merlin Lucifer said that the king was wrong, and he was not very strong, just the enemy was too weak, so weak that he was not worthy of bearing the title of king, and also not worthy of being called a worthy enemy. Looking at the body of the villain, the young man realized that he was finally defeated. Although this battle didn't last long, and was over quickly as always, he was, after all, a bearer of the highest saint rank, so the pain from his heart curse subsided for a while. Meanwhile, the wall nearby began to collapse from another powerful blow. And behind the wall there was a huge amount of gold coins, which the goblins carefully hid. Just when the guy thought it was time to bring the stupid girl back, he still decided to turn around to see what was behind the wall. And as soon as he looked at the place where the wall stood, he was pleasantly surprised, because he saw the goblin's treasury. Such a huge amount of coins attracted him, and he felt great. After this amount, his dream was supposed to come true, and all he had to do was eat and wait for the day of his death. But, unfortunately, the dream was suddenly interrupted. A brick fell right on the hero's head. Looking up, he noticed that the building was gradually beginning to collapse. Thus, the boy realized that their battle, as well as his fat belly, were the reason why the dungeon began to collapse. If he tried really hard, his nimble hands and feet could carry away more than half of all these treasures from here. But it would take some time, so he definitely wouldn't have time to save this stupid girl. Merlin himself would be fine, but if she were in his place, she would most likely be buried alive under all that rubble and would undoubtedly die. That is why the main character faced a difficult choice, and he began to choose between wealth and Alicia Claudia. The building began to collapse, and the guy ran with the last of his strength. The brave man decided to save the girl, who at that moment was unconscious and could not move on her own. Alice was a burden to him, and now she owed him hundreds of millions of gold coins, and when they returned, if she did not introduce him to the Adventurers Guild, he would take revenge for this. Meanwhile, the men had already reached the cave and saw their women coming out of it. The girls were incredibly happy that they managed to get out of this hell. Thus, thanks to Alice's efforts, many girls managed to escape. Suddenly, the mayor discovered that something terrible was happening in the cave and asked everyone to take a look at it. As it turned out, the man noticed that the cave literally exploded, and probably no one survived the explosion. The alarmed people began to realize that the mountain had collapsed and that Alice was in the cave with Merlin. A worried Henry also knew that Uncle Merlin and his older sister were in danger. Luckily, Martha decided to calm the boy down and said that they shouldn't worry about them, since Merlin is a very strong person. Like him, he won't die from some kind of collapse. The boy immediately listened to his mother and believed her words, because he knew that Merlin was really very strong. Suddenly, someone started to emerge from the smoke that formed after the mountain collapsed. Merlin and Miss Alice, who was still unconscious, emerged from the entrance of the collapsed cave. People could not believe that the heroes and the girl were saved, and were very glad that they survived. But the main character was upset, because he understood that he would no longer be able to return those same gold coins from the treasury. Sometime later, the events continued at the Moonlight Tavern. The wounded Alice lay on the bed and regained her strength, as she felt very bad. Looking at the girl, the young man understood that she was really stupid and very seriously injured, and if she was not treated, she could die. Smiling wickedly, the guy also understood that Alice usually treated him badly, without any respect, and now she was lying unconscious right in front of him, and he could do whatever he wanted with her. However, he never thought that her body could ever be of interest. The boy came to his senses and realized that he would not use this opportunity any longer, since in such a situation the girl simply needed treatment, and if she did not show the injury to the doctor, she would not be able to recover on her own. After a few hours, Alice finally came to her senses and seemed to be feeling better. As soon as the girl woke up, she immediately noticed that she had changed. After thinking for a while, Alice realized that she didn't remember anything at all, and didn't even know what happened. The last thing she remembered was being attacked by the Goblin Emperor's mace, and then the legendary swordsman Elgin appeared. Meanwhile, Mrs. Martha came in and was glad that Alice had finally woken up. The tavern owner had been up all night worrying, but now that she saw that the girl was okay, she could breathe a sigh of relief. The wounded girl felt very sorry, but she still understood that she would not be able to heal herself. The woman also reported that Alice was brought here from the Goblin Palace last night and had serious injuries. If Mr. Merlin had not intervened, the girl might have simply died, which left her deeply shaken. The tavern owner also hinted to the girl that she should finally forgive the young man, since he saved her life. While she understood Alice's situation, she was a young girl and she needed to find a boyfriend too, and Merlin was perfect for that. These words made Alice literally cry, because she hated Merlin and did not believe that he saved her. The hero had been saved by the Demon King, and for her, it was a disgrace. But one could not help but notice that she was now in his debt, an indisputable fact. At the same time, the young man decided to go up to the second floor to visit Alice. Suddenly, the boy heard that the girl had already come to her senses and was feeling well. The slightly disconcerted girl stated that her interlocutors should not be so polite, and that now they were both safe, and the most important thing was to be close to each other. It turned out that it was the same couple who died due to the goblin attack, and now they were indebted to Alice, and were going to pray for her for the rest of their lives. Several young children remembered Alice's kindness forever and decided to keep it in their hearts and pass it on to their children. All these statements were really impressive, and Lucifer began to understand that Alice was just a stupid girl and the stupidest hero in the world. But even despite this, people are grateful to her, and maybe being a hero is not so bad. This is what it takes to win the hearts of ordinary people, an incomprehensible zeal to do good deeds and move forward without fear of difficulties. The protagonist still decided to enter the room and see if Miss Alice had really gotten better. The young man decided to ask why Martha told him that Alice had called him and wanted to find out what was going on. The embarrassed woman said that since he had consciously come to her aid and saved her when she was in a difficult situation, she could not help but thank him now. I continue to feel embarrassed. The girl started repeating that she didn't want to be misunderstood. Because of what he did, she now hates him, but that doesn't mean she has forgiven him. So the guy realized that for some reason what happened was completely different from what he imagined. If she was not going to give her soul and body or become a wife, then at least she would have to cry in his arms. Laughing at this statement, Merlin said that he would not accept it because he needed Alice, and after all, he saved her for a reason, and she should pay. Coming closer, the young man said that he would not languish for long, and wanted to become an adventurer, and the girls would need to be introduced to the guild. This statement made the lady furious, and she shouted that it was simply impossible. Throwing up his hands, the hero was disappointed and surprised that Alice treated her savior this way. Alice exclaimed that if he had helped her to pay off the debt she had gotten into, by the way, because of him, then she would have thought about it. Even if he had saved her, then she should not think that he owed her anything. After threatening the girl, Merlin agreed with her and said that tomorrow he would tell the bards that Alice, the hero of the 233rd generation, was not seeking to thank her savior, and that this was a very low act. But even because of these threats, the girl still did not want to agree to such conditions, and shouted that she would never receive forgiveness and a recommendation to the guild. Having heard such an answer, the guy immediately began to get ready and felt that he did not deserve such a refusal. And since she is so cruel and does not want to thank him, tomorrow the whole city will find out that the once valiant heroine Alice turned out to be a low, immoral person. But the hero really didn't want this, and she immediately began to stop the young man so that he couldn't tell the others what kind of person she was. This is exactly what the young man was waiting for, because he understood that a stupid girl named Alice would not be able to resist external pressure for long. The cutie must be obedient and become a stepping stone into the world of high society. Sometime later, the events continued in the evening at the site of the collapse of the goblin nest. The fallen rocks in the cave gradually began to move, and suddenly there was a powerful explosion. The culprit of this explosion turned out to be a mysterious girl dressed in military gear. The lady was glad that it had finally happened, because if it had not been for the main news of the day, she would never have known that this group of goblins was still hiding underground in Wales. All this time, the mysterious stranger was looking for a certain column, which after a couple of hours of searching, she finally found. Thanks to her magical abilities, the stranger managed to lift the giant stone vessel. While examining the unusual object, she wanted to understand what its true form was. The stone structure gradually began to transform, and what happened next was simply inexplicable. The building gradually began to transform into separate blocks that literally hovered in the air. And as it turned out, in a mysterious stone structure, there was a strange key that had an unusual shape. In fact, this key was intended to open the Legion of Hell, and the girl was incredibly happy that it was finally in her hands. The stranger had indeed gone through many difficulties to find this key, and yet it was very easy to obtain. Suddenly, a strange black hole appeared nearby, from which someone chose a girl named Caroline. Bowing her head, The girl called the mysterious voice His Majesty. Caroline said that she received this key, and apparently the rumors that the key was in the Soga's branch were true, and it was no wonder that they did not migrate to the south, and, refusing to join the kingdom, these goblins guarded the key. So the girl realized that this was the problem, but she didn't think that the goblins would hide so well in the cave. The Lord was pleased and believed that the plan to restore the former state was ready for execution, since as long as they had the forces of the Hell Squad, overthrowing Britannia would be an easy task. The possessed lady was literally ready to give her soul for the sake of the revival of the state. At the same time, the main character and Alice decided to leave the city. Many residents began to say goodbye to them, and some women did not want to let go of their chick. As he said goodbye to all the residents, the young man exclaimed that Henry must take care of his mother. Henry shouted that he would make sure to take care of his mother, and when he had Aura, he would go to Wrexham to find Merlin. But Lady March wanted Merlin to marry Lady Alice, and then she wanted them to live happily ever after. In fact, such a desire was truly terrible, like some kind of curse. For Alice, it was also the worst wish, as she considered it a curse for life. The partners did not even talk about it among themselves, as they believed that marriage between them was simply impossible. Literally within a few minutes, they had already started to quarrel and argue about who was stronger. The former Demon King showed that he was much stronger than Alice, as he was able to easily defeat the Goblin Emperor. The girl believed that the strongest warrior would not be able to steal the mithril armor that Merlin had previously stolen. These words made the protagonist laugh, because he realized that he used to sell mithril armor for a lot of money and lived well for a whole year. Because of the young man's behavior, Alice literally kicked him out of the cart. The angry girl wanted the young man to get out of here, because she no longer wanted to communicate with him, but the guy continued to insist that he respected Alice and wanted to become a real adventurer, like her. The quarrel between the two partners caused even the cart itself to jump, and it seemed that it would soon overturn. But looking at everything that was happening, Martha believed that this couple really got along well with each other. The trip to Wrexham will really not be boring, as Merlin and Alice will be able to entertain each other. Alice and Merlin spent the entire journey either arguing or making fun of each other. A whole week passed in this way, and finally they stopped not far from the city. The lady was very happy that she had finally returned to this city, and could quickly come to the guild and send this demon to hell. But the young man thought that he would soon become a top-ranked adventurer and earn huge amounts of money. As soon as the partners arrived in the city, they immediately headed to the Adventurers Guild. The brave warrior instantly opened the guild door and rushed inside like a true hero. But what the partners saw next shocked them, as they did not expect to see anything like this. The mysterious man touched the magic ball to demonstrate his skills and rank. This man was protected by armor, and it seemed that he was truly the strongest warrior. Thanks to an unusual test, people realized that the man in knight's armor was a warrior of holy rank. Even the protagonist was surprised that this guy was a saint-ranked warrior like that Goblin Emperor. But there was a difference between them. There were only 3 saint-rank people in this guild, including the old guild master, and Alice didn't think that another one would appear today. It was quite boring for Lucifer, since when he was the Demon King, he had a bunch of saint-rank subordinates, and their guild was really pathetic. Suddenly someone came up to Alice and was surprised that she had returned her old love. A drunk man named Arnold was very surprised that Alice had finally found herself a boyfriend. The embarrassed man even asked the young man for advice, as he wanted to know how he tamed this wild horse. Hearing these words, the girl immediately began to deny their serious relationship, since they were just partners and nothing more. In fact, it turned out that Arnold was just joking, and you shouldn't take his words seriously, because a girl won't be popular with guys if she constantly gets into fights. Meanwhile, another girl noticed that Alice had arrived in town and immediately called her to her. The mysterious girl with cat ears was named Lygia, and she was very happy about the heroine's arrival. Lygia immediately decided to find out what Alice was doing in the city and thought that she came for new tasks. But the sad girl replied that she came to recommend one person to the guild. This man was Merlin, and he really wanted to become an adventurer. Looking at this guy, Lygia couldn't believe that Alice managed to get herself a boyfriend, and she wasn't going to accept it because she couldn't accept the fact that she would get married early. Luckily for the worried girl, Alice replied that she had nothing to worry about since she and Merlin were not dating. Alice also decided to say that for some reason this guy needed her recommendation. He had previously been put on the wanted list by the restaurant owners and was now a fugitive from justice. And that was great, because the young man was in the right place. When he joined the guild, all his misdeeds would be annulled, and he would be able to pay off his debts while he worked. At first, the girl wanted to test Merlin's strength and give him the initial rank of adventurer. In addition, the monthly allowance and privileges for each rank are different. But don't worry about the initial rank. Even if the guy is not too strong, he can always increase his rank by gaining experience. Suddenly, Lygia remembered something else and decided to tell about it immediately. The girl remembered that there was an old man who worked hard here, who was 102 years old and became a silver-ranked adventurer after completing 999 low-level quests. Naturally, there's a faster way to increase your rank, namely, becoming stronger, your rank will also increase. In the end, Merlin realized that in the end, the most important thing is his own strength, and this old man is wasting his life. The Adventurers Guild was very fair. Even an amethyst-ranked adventurer could be promoted, but if he had been out of work for a long time or had a bad influence on society, then the rule stated that he could be demoted to iron-ranked. So, to check his rank, Mr. Merlin needs to raise his hand to the crystal ball, which will glow with a color corresponding to his power. Reaching out his hand to the crystal ball, the boy exclaimed that he would now kindly show everyone the omnipotent power of the great Merlin. Everyone present was simply in shock, as they did not know what to expect from the stranger, because no one knew his strength. But as soon as the young man touched the ball, there was absolutely no reaction. This caused great disappointment to the protagonist, as he did not understand why this happened. Seeing that the crystal ball did not react, Logia revealed that Mr. Merlin had no abilities, meaning he could not be an adventurer. All over the guild, people started laughing because they realized that the guy who came here was a weakling. None of the warriors could believe that this loser could become an adventurer with such strength, because he couldn't even defeat the goblin. Coming closer, Alice decided to ask the guy what happened to him. The worried hero said that Alice saw him fight, and he never used his mana or aura since he doesn't have those skills at all. With a heavy sigh, the young man realized that perhaps due to the level of his rapid decapitation technique being too strong, he didn't need any mana or aura to fight. After thinking for a while, Alice couldn't understand how it was possible to use a technique that didn't require anything. The young man did not know what to answer to this, and simply asked the girl to treat him as an unusual person, because she herself said that he could become an adventurer if someone recommended him. However, Alice was keen to help her partner and asked Lujib if she could recommend him. The hero literally assured that this guy would easily complete any task given to adventurers. As it turned out, a few years ago, the headquarters disbanded the Wooden Rank Adventurers, which were formed from ordinary people. The rules clearly state that the guild does not accept people who do not have at least a weak level of strength. Suddenly the guy stood up on a chair and exclaimed that if they all wanted to believe in an ordinary crystal ball, then everything was obvious. Merlin shouted at the people to tell the strongest person in their guild to come out and fight him, because all problems would be solved if he won anyway. For the first time, everyone saw that some guy decided to challenge the strongest person in the guild to a duel. And it was clear from a main character that he was not joking and would even fight with everyone in this room if they attacked him together. Someone came up from behind and exclaimed that he really agreed with the young man. The old man said he could test the strength of the mysterious stranger. The older man turned out to be Taylor, the old guild master, and this master was about to test the confident newcomer. It turned out that it was Lugia's grandfather. He was a saint-ranked master who, at the age of 17, was able to kill a giant with one blow. This man was also a great master of martial arts in Bretonnia and the best fighter in Vels. The technique he invented was invisible to the human eye. The old man had indeed seen his share of fools who had too much ambition, and if he had not moved his old body, people would have thought that there was no one left in the Wrexham Guild. The confident young man exclaimed that this was exactly what he needed now, and they could fight. So the fight was about to begin, but the old man knew that this place would be too cramped for them to spar. There was a training hall in the backyard of the guild. There was enough space there, and they could fight there. The old man also warned everyone not to follow them, as it was a duel between him and the young man. In fact, it was really strange because everyone was surprised that the old guild master didn't allow the others to watch the battle. Lugia understood that grandfather was worried that there would be a huge gap in strength between them, and if the blonde lost, the observers would simply hurt his pride. Every year he was challenged by a saint-ranked adventurer, but they all returned with a crushing defeat. Even for Alice, this was surprising, as she didn't expect this old man to be able to compete with saint-ranked warriors. In addition, Lugia's father told him that his grandfather never lost even once, having reached the rank of saint. On the battlefield, the old man started laughing because he saw an ordinary person in front of him, and he was a saint-ranked fighter, so he gave Lucifer the opportunity to attack him with all his strength, and if he could force him to take a step back, then he would lose. Hearing this, the young man realized that he was now given the opportunity to fight at full strength, and he was glad about it. After drawing his sword, Merlin asked the old man not to blink because his decapitation technique was quite fast. The old man did not react to these statements in any way, but only said that the guy needed to show his strength. Soon after, the protagonist began swinging his sword, and the old man was simply shocked by this turn of events. The force of the blow was simply impressive, and it seemed that the great master was about to die from such a serious injury. Half of the city was illuminated with a bright scarlet light, as the impact was visible to literally everyone in the surrounding area. The young master's blow destroyed the wall that was behind the old man, and as it turned out, the guy didn't even hit the master, but simply brought the sword to his face. The frightened old man immediately fell to the floor, as he could not believe that the guy had such skills. The excited old man wanted to know how this was possible, to which Merlin only replied that it was just a blow from the blunt end of a sword. If the boy had attacked with a blade, the great old master would already be dead. After thinking for a while, the old man realized that even if he attacked using his strength, he would still be killed. No one could understand who this young man really was because everyone thought he was just an ordinary person. Sometime later, the elder and the guild workers began to say goodbye to the main character and Alice. With a heavy sigh, the girl told her grandfather that this guy was too arrogant for an ordinary person and did not understand why the elders gave him special recommendation. As it turned out, everyone was very lucky that they escaped without injuries, but they still needed to somehow compensate for the large sum of money to restore the damaged houses. Everyone was shocked because they didn't understand how an ordinary guy could anger the guild leader. The master became angry and shouted that everyone should remain silent, as he had his own thoughts on the matter and there was no need to talk about it any further. After the impact, the destruction of the city was impressive, and a giant hole literally formed in the asphalt, which left residents simply shocked. Looking at the huge hole, Alice did not understand what was happening and who exactly dared to do something like that. But the main character was amused by all this because this way he understood that he was the strongest in this world. Previously, the Grand Master had told Merlin that mana and aura were the only stats the management used to test people. But this time, he made an exception. On the back of the adventurer's badge was the town of Wrexham. The owner's name was Merlin Lucifer, his occupation was peasant, and his adventurer's rank was iron. The iron rank didn't make much of an impression on the guy, because he didn't think that he would be worse than Alice with her gold rank. The girl nevertheless decided to find out how Merlin managed to defeat the master of their guild. But it wasn't a victory. Murder was the only victory for him, but the fact that he did it only showed a part of his true strength. The guild master is indeed quite strong, but overall, he is slightly stronger than the 7 generals that Merlin fought before. Although there were some problems, the guy still managed to become an adventurer, and now he can live anywhere, as well as kill monsters and earn money without straining his brain. The self-confident girl exclaimed that they shouldn't be so naive, because Merlin was still the weakest adventurer and it was time for him to stop dreaming. After realizing his rank, Lucifer truly understood that he was an iron rank adventurer, and this was the worst situation. The boy immediately understood that Alice's attitude towards him was due to the fact that she was higher in rank, and tomorrow he would have to take on a big job and earn as much as she would not be able to collect as a reward even in 10 years. Soon after, the girl began to leave, as she no longer wanted to communicate with such a weakling. The young man went in the other direction, wanting to finally get rid of Alice. But still, something was bothering him a lot, because he needed somewhere to spend the night. But the guy had no money in his pockets, only tickets to the racetrack. Realizing that he was poor, Merlin began to feel depressed because he had nowhere to sleep. After some time, the main character began selling matches in rainy weather and offered them to all passers-by. These matches were waterproof, and Merlin tried to sell them to anyone to earn money for a living. It was quite cold because of the rain, and the guy tried to warm himself up somehow by lighting matches. He was poor and couldn't believe that he would be sleeping on the streets, so he began to think that he wouldn't have spent money on traveling with a donkey if he had known that would happen. But the boy had an idea and realized that having money was not a problem because he could get food from Alice for free. Sometime later, the events continued in Alicia Claudia's house. While taking a bath, the girl thought that no one would be able to give Merlin a job since he was an iron rank. It was important to the girl that Lucifer slept on the street like a beggar, and the ideal option would be for him to suffer from hunger and cold, and for no one to pay attention to the matches he sells. Suddenly, Alice heard someone ringing the doorbell. Quickly getting ready, the girl immediately ran to the door, as she thought that the owner of the apartment had arrived. The polite girl approached the owner and asked her not to come into the house at night. But when she opened her eyes, the girl noticed that it was not the hostess. As it turned out, it was Merlin Lucifer who greeted the girl and said that they could spend this wonderful night together. In this situation, the lady did not know how to react at all, and simply continued to silently look at the scoundrel. Unable to bear such impudence, Alice kicked the poor fellow right in the face with all her might. She was too hostile towards him. From such a strong blow, the guy flew several dozen meters to the side and was incredibly humiliated. Closing the door, the girl shouted that she did not know how Merlin found this house, but ordered him not to come near her again. Humiliated, the boy only thought that Alice shouldn't have behaved like that towards him. Suddenly someone came up and asked what the stranger would be doing near his house. The doorbell rang again, and the girl became very angry at the person who came to her again. Taking the sword, Alice waited for Merlin to arrive and wanted to teach him a lesson. The evil girl screamed that she couldn't do it anymore and ordered Merlin not to tempt fate. In fact, it was the mistress of the house who came late at night. The evil aunt had a displeased face, and she apparently wanted to know what kind of guy was lying near her house. The landlord also approached Ms. Alice and said that the lease clearly stated that she could not use a gun in the house. Even more enraged, the woman shouted that some kind of performance was being staged in her house, and no one would dare wave a weapon in someone else's house. As it turned out, the main character influenced what happened, because it was he who told the woman about what happened. Alice was incredibly angry at this guy, because he ruined her good evening. Suddenly the woman told Alice that she needed to watch her behavior. Even though the woman was a stranger, she had to scold Alice, because how could she live their days together if she started such quarrels right after the wedding? These words surprised the girl greatly, as she did not expect that the mistress of the house would think that they were a married couple. Frightened, Alice began to scream that they had no wedding and that she had nothing to do with this guy. Meanwhile, the young man began to ask for pity, made a sweet face, and then asked his beloved not to be angry, since he could not believe that she was saying that they were not married. After thinking for a moment, the mistress of the house exclaimed that she was afraid that she could no longer continue to rent this house to Alice, as she was very afraid that she might destroy this house just because she was in a bad mood. Concerned, Alice began to make excuses and say that she was fine and that she didn't usually swing a sword around the house. In this regard, the aunt said that the girls should put away the sword and allow the husband to enter the house, and also asked them not to look stupid in front of the neighbors in the middle of the night. The young man also decided to address the girl and said that she clearly did not want to be kicked out. So, thanks to this situation, Merlin hugged Alice, and they apologized for the inconvenience caused. The angry bride stepped on the main character's foot with all her might. The aunt also remembered that the tenants had to pay rent for this month, and Alice went to get the money. The old woman also told the young man that Alice really had a bad temper, but she was a good girl, so she needed to be taken care of because she looked so unhappy when she was looking everywhere for a place to live. Merlin found it hard to believe these words, as he had not expected that Alice would actually have such a hard time because of him. The woman also decided to give the key to the young man, but there's a chance that Alice will decide to kick him out again. After some time, the owner of the house left, and the boy was very happy that he was finally provided with housing. The impudent man exclaimed that now he would do whatever he wanted in this house. The angry lady could not tolerate such behavior and pointed her sword at the guy, saying that he would not leave here alive. At that very second, the hero decided to remind the girl that they were now a married couple, and they were not allowed to quarrel in the house. This turn of events greatly confused the girl, because she wanted to know what it all meant. According to the guy, this house will instantly turn into splinters if he gets the ball, but she makes up for it, so it's worth thinking before you fight. That damn Merlin really made a fatal mistake, and the girl thought that sooner or later she would beat him every day and he would not be able to resist. In fact, the boy began to calm his interlocutor and asked her not to get excited, because they had a winning situation. After she listened to him, she would not throw him out. Thus, Alice realized that the young man would clearly not leave here until he said what he wanted. The smart guy said he would like to pay the rent on the house together. Looking at this poor man, Alice understood that he had no money at all, but it would still be much easier for her if they could share the rent. And all the hardships had to be forgotten because life started with a clean slate. The insulted girl knew she would never be able to start her life over, but he was right, and she could save a lot of money if they split the rent between them. Alice finally agreed, but exclaimed that they would pay together, and Merlin would have to sleep on the sofa and also pay the rent now. The guy gave a banana peel as payment because he had no money at all. In fact, he had a plan, and the boy was going to give the money back as soon as he started working and doing difficult tasks that would be completely easy for him. After thinking for a moment, he also remembered that he had tickets to the racetrack in his pockets, which he could also use to pay. The next morning, events continued in the guild building. Sitting in the tavern early in the morning, people watched the races and did not understand why the horses they were betting on were so slow. One of the people who bet on the horse's victory was the main character, and he tried his best to make the horse win. All this time the girl watched this strange guy and did not understand why he became an adventurer. Yesterday, her grandfather even compensated for the damage, and she did not understand at all why the old owner did this. And as it turned out, Miss Alice had a boyfriend who decided to give her beautiful flowers because her beauty outshone his. But Alice didn't like this guy at all, and she said that she didn't want to accept these flowers. This guy's name was Arnold, and he started hitting on Alice again because he was really in love with her. Coming closer, the girl's old acquaintance exclaimed that Arnold was clearly depressed because of the waste of time. Because this blonde guy named Merlin replaced Arnold and successfully won the love of his dreams. These words made the guy nervous, because he could not believe that some scoundrel had captured Alice's heart. Arnold immediately approached the main character and wanted to know where he came from and what was going on between him and Alice. The guy in love immediately began to take out his sword to find out what was going on between them. The self-confident young man exclaimed that Merlin must be threatening Alice, and if so, then he, as the eldest son of Count Austen, challenged him to a duel. Merlin didn't want to duel this guy at all, and he said that he had nothing to do with Alice. But her old friend exclaimed that they still had some kind of relationship since they lived together. The fact that the main character lived with Alice shocked Arnold, because he did not expect that the love of his life found a guy with whom he does not date, but lives with. The girl immediately began to convince her friend that they did not live together, and that this freak had burst into her place last night. Arnold, coming to his senses, exclaimed that strength is not the only characteristic that measures not only a person's charisma, but also his abilities. In order to make Missolis change his mind and show his charm, he wanted to do something. Because of this, the guy handed over a paper that contained information about a recent mission that was quite difficult, and for its completion a reward of 1,000 to 1,500 gold coins was assigned. So, Arnold wanted to find out who exactly was more suitable for Alice, him or Merlin. The one who wins the mission will date the girl, because he will be a hero for completing the most difficult task. Arnold was very eager to compete with Merlin and use his power to prove himself and find out who was right for Alice. I watched everything that was happening. Even the girl couldn't understand what was happening and wanted to ask Lugia what they were talking about. As it turned out, it was a mission from Den Beggars, and they had recently started recruiting adventurers. The girl heard that some tomb robbers had entered the dungeon and activated a trap there, after which the undead began to appear and attack civilians. This is a terrible situation, and the active army is short of people. Approaching the girl, Arnold admitted that he had hired a saint rank for this mission at a huge cost, so it would be easy to get the full reward, and he would be grateful if Alice joined his team. The person they hired who had the rank of a saint was Mr. Claude, who joined their guild yesterday. When talking to Arnold, Alice immediately realized that Claude was interested in the undead, and he was also given money to join someone else's team, so victory with a holy rank was guaranteed. A few minutes later, Arnold approached Luigi to have her stamp that they were the ones taking on this mission, and Alice decided to join the team of the guy in love. Arnold was very happy with this turn of events, because he was in love with the girl and hoped that in this way he would meet her in the future. Meanwhile, Alice had already begun to leave the guild, and Arnold rushed after her while the main character began to read out the mission conditions. After reading the terms of the mission, the young man turned to the miss and said that he also wanted to begin this task. Unfortunately, the girl was forced to refuse since there had to be at least 2 people on the team. After all, those were the rules. This made the guy think, because he didn't know who exactly could join the team. Looking at the people nearby, the boy gave his comrade the opportunity to go along so that they could begin the task. Hearing this, the girl immediately hesitated, as she considered it impossible, but the elder said that they should be given permission to carry out the mission. According to the elderly man, everything was fine and no violations were found. Looking back, Merlin sincerely thanked the guildmaster, as he realized that this man had truly helped him in the situation. Meanwhile, events continued to take place in the elite chariot. Arnold contacted Mr. Claude and introduced him to Alice, a gold rank adventurer. Now, they were a team and could shake hands to begin their partnership. Suddenly, Claude said that they could forget about cooperation, and he would finish off all the strong opponents. They would deal with the small and weak ones that were left behind. In the end, he would go to the lower level of the dungeon, and they did not have to go together. The boy was happy because he thought Mr. Claude was concerned about their safety. Arnold insisted that they would be very careful and could even help. Suddenly, Claude was surprised by such a statement, and he was sure that no one could help him, and he wanted to be honest, that if he was restrained, he would ruthlessly abandon his allies. These words began to cause fear in Alice, because she did not understand why a saint-rank knight was behaving in this way, because they were on the same team, and this was unprofessional. After thinking for a moment, the girl realized that her insight had increased after she saw Merlin kill others with one blow. If Alice had known in advance that this would happen, she would have been better off doing the task alone. Meanwhile, the main character thought that he was in trouble again and did not know where to get a cart. But the guy had an idea and realized that he could borrow Alice's cart. The drunk man was also glad that they were finally going on a trip and was ready to act. However, the man's mood changed dramatically when the events continued the next morning after they had left. Because all this time, Merlin Lucifer was resting while the man was working and controlling the horse. Not understanding how this happened, the red-haired man wanted to know if he really agreed to go on this dangerous mission yesterday. According to the frightened guy, it was a mistake, and he wanted to go back to continue living his life in peace. The royal palace soon had to send experts there to carry out this mission, so the protagonist's partner did not want them to go to certain death. Although the mission was issued by the government and also had a high reward, it is not easy to complete. There was an outbreak of the undead, and even the active army was useless, so there are definitely a lot of undead. The iron ranks like them will not be able to do anything, and will be bait at best. The self-confident guy exclaimed that his partner had nothing to fear and should not be timid. When danger arose, he would simply hide behind Merlin. All this time the man did not understand who this guy was, because he spoke like a feeble-minded person. The man didn't understand how he could believe in Merlin, because he was a simple pyromancer, and his partner was just a brat who knew little about martial arts. They would be a useless team. The young man was confident that they would be able to complete this mission since Alice and her team were ahead, and it would be nice if they could earn some experience with them and get 1,000 gold coins. Thus, partner began to think that they would kill a few monsters and leave, and the saint rank with them. That way, they would most likely be safe. Meanwhile, horses began to approach not far from the main character. As it turned out, it was a small army that was also heading towards the city along with the undead. These people turned out to be servants of Duke Rose, and they had to carry out this mission. The Duke turned out to be the lord of a Welsh city. There were not many guards around the cart, which meant that someone from his family was riding. Gradually, the guards of the Duke's family began to catch up with the main character and his partner. The self-confident man decided to ask the travelers if they knew of a shorter route to Denbighshire. The red-haired man replied that if they wanted to save time, they could take the road over Morosa Hill, but it was a bit narrow, so a large coach wouldn't fit through it, and they would get to Denbighshire after traveling some distance. The scoundrel thought that his interlocutor was making fun of him, because in this carriage there was a man who was not going to drive on bad and dirty roads. But, According to the man, there is nothing wrong with walking a little if he has legs. On hearing this, the knight immediately became angry and began to wave his whip, for he thought that his mistress had been insulted and said that she was unwell. The protagonist immediately stood up for his partner and stopped the whip so that the villain could not hit the good man. Even more angry, the stranger exclaimed that the boy must let go of the whip, because if he did not, he would be punished. The young man was not at all bothered by this, because he understood that knights should not act like that. Using his physical strength, the boy pulled the whip to throw the villain off his horse. Thanks to his good physical training, Merlin was able to easily knock the unprincipled knight off his feet, and he fell to the floor. The guy sincerely didn't understand what kind of bad attitude he had towards them, because they were answering a question about what the shortest route around the city would be, and instead of thanking them, he showed his dirty attitude, and it was funny. Lying on the floor, the knight raised his head and looked straight at Merlin, and at that moment he literally hated him. Fearing the consequences, the man exclaimed that they should not behave like this, because these knights were the property of Duke Rose. This duke has the highest voting rights in the city of Wales, although he is under pressure from the royal family, but nevertheless, every duke is a local emperor in his territory, so he can do as he pleases. At the same time, the young man was sure that he did not care whether it was the Duke of Radishes or the Duke of Cabbage, because no one should in any way insult innocent travelers. The formidable knight was covered in dirt and did not understand how an iron-rank adventurer could contradict him and act like this. Looking at this scoundrel, the young man said that he would gladly fight with him and take part in the duel if the knight so wished. Suddenly, a girl started getting out of the cart and ordered Kyle to stop. The mysterious girl couldn't believe that her knight was talking to such weaklings about a duel. Bowing his head, the knight named Kyle exclaimed that he was sorry, but these travelers had insulted the lady, so he stood up for her. The smart girl understood that these commoners had never seen her, and therefore she had no right to accuse them of insults. The impudent lady also believed that they should not stop, since these people were just ants following orders. The woman decided to apologize to the travelers and said that the knight would not dare to disturb them anymore. As it turned out, the main character was much more cunning than expected and exclaimed that simple words are not an apology, and if a woman wants to apologize, she must repay in another way. The knight could not stand the insults addressed to the lady and immediately began to attack Merlin, wanting to finish him off. The wise lady stopped her knight and said that he should not do this. The mysterious girl sincerely believed that these scoundrels should be left behind, and there was no point in wasting time on them, because it was necessary to get to the city as soon as possible. Although the knight was angry, he knew that he could not act without orders, so he decided to leave the weak and not fight them. I watched everything that was happening. The red-haired man was simply in shock, as he did not expect Merlin to remain alive after such statements. So Korea, the mysterious lady, left, and the young man and his partner watched her go. The brave guy only thought that these scoundrels were very annoying, and if he ran into them on the road again, they simply wouldn't get off without a fight. Meanwhile, Alice's carriage and team continued moving towards the city. One of Alice's team members shared that his family's house was so big that he got lost in it almost every day, and overall he was tired of living an easy life without putting in any effort. Listening to all this, Miss Alice realized that poverty limited her imagination, and she wanted to live like her partner. Having bowed to the girl, the young man said that this was precisely why she should become his wife, because then he would be able to provide her with a rich life. Suddenly, the boy remembered a story when he once went to the city of Elgin to visit his uncle instead of his father. Looking out the carriage window, the young man saw a warrior fighting a crowd of enemies. This warrior turned out to be Alice. 6 months ago, she also went to the city of Elgin and helped local residents cope with giant wild boars that were raging in the agricultural fields. Seeing the valor combined with the magnificent appearance, the guy understood what the expression meant. You can't escape fate. The stranger rushed to propose to the heroine, but Alice immediately refused. After this incident, he joined the guild and, in fact, frantically pursues poor Alice. It was God who arranged the birth of the legendary swordsman Elgin, but not only that, he brought them together so that they could do many great things. So the guy asked Miss Alice to work together, and the first request in which she could help was to fall in love with him. Unfortunately for the young man, the girl could not help him with this, because she simply did not love him. Suddenly, the brave knight decided to ask a question and asked who this legendary swordsman Elgin was. Hearing this question, the young man was amazed that Mr. Claude did not know who it was, because, as it turned out, he had been practicing deep in the mountains all this time and had never left there. Claude had already heard something about the swordsman Elgin, because people talked about him and always praised his skill with a sword, so he wanted to know more about this character. Alice was a true admirer of Elgin, and when she heard that Claude was training far away in the mountains, she was not surprised that he did not know of the greatness of her future husband. There used to be a group of red-bearded brothers. They were the leaders of gangs of famous sea piracy. Not only were these two in the rank of saints, but also their subordinates were very talented. They raged for many years in the North Sea, and no one could defeat them. This group of guys was so strong and ferocious that even the royal family couldn't stand up to them, and in the blink of an eye, they were all killed by the swordsman Elgin. According to Claude, the fact that this guy killed 2 Saint Rankers in a second means nothing. These words made Alice and the boy think. After all, they don't understand why such an act means nothing to Claude. In the knight's opinion, even if the red-bearded brothers had holy titles, it doesn't mean anything. Even holy titles have their strengths and weaknesses, so they can be divided into higher and lower. Miss Alice is also a saint rank, but she is a top-tier one, so if she were to face a saint rank, she would definitely be considered very strong. This is because saint ranks are not equal to each other. So Claude could say with certainty that in the eyes of their holy rank bearers, these pirates were nothing. They were just an example of the gap between the holy ranks. The era of the strongest was coming to an end, so there were fewer and fewer strong ones. And the people had no choice but to place their hopes on a man whose identity they did not even know. That was what the helplessness of the royal family meant. Trying to calm the situation, the guy began to say that since the legendary swordsman Elgin did not deserve the title of a great hero, then it was very interesting who exactly deserved to be called a true hero of Britannia. Claude finally decided to admit that real heroes exist and decided to tell about the 4 heroes of the former kingdom. After thinking for a while, Alice realized that she had never heard of these heroes in her life. And as it turned out, these warriors really existed. One of them was a thief who controlled dragons named Carol. Carol was able to kill 7 of the Empire's saint rank bearers in one night. If she laid eyes on someone, then he automatically becomes a corpse. No one can escape from Kara's dagger. Also present were the 2 twin swordsmen, Zoe and Joey. Their swordsmanship was rightfully considered the best in the entire kingdom. The giant king, known for his excellent defense, was killed by the swords of these brothers. And finally, the stormtrooper Bernard, nicknamed Meat Grinder. He has taken part in countless military battles and was also once able to defeat a saint-ranked dragon in a one-on-one fight. In addition to this, he is the strongest among these 4 heroes. Everyone knew that there was no opponent in the entire world that he could not defeat. These 4 heroes deserve to be called real heroes, and the rest are just clowns who do not deserve even a grain of this magnificent title. Now Alice remembered that these 4 were known as heroes, and it was they who founded the former kingdom. Suddenly the carriage stopped, and the driver told Mr. Arnold that they had been on the road for quite a long time, and the horses needed a rest. Hearing this, the young man immediately realized that the horses really needed to be given the opportunity to rest, and invited the girl to go outside and breathe some fresh air. Suddenly the girl decided to turn to Mr. Claude and tell him something. Alice admitted that each of the 4 heroes he told them about was amazing, but it is worth considering that they have been dead for a long time. But she also believes that comparing the present with the past is pointless. These words surprised Claude because he didn't think so, but he didn't want to talk about it. The young gentleman began to pursue the girl because he wanted to be with her while Claude sat in the carriage. The lone knight continued to wonder if the great 4 heroes were truly dead. Sometime later, Alice sat down on the slope and began to think about what Merlin was doing now, and whether he would destroy the guild because he could not give a percentage of the commission. Suddenly Arnold came closer and started trying to get closer to Alice again because he was in love with her. The guy used clever tricks to make the girl fall in love with him and gave her many compliments. In fact, it didn't work out because Alice didn't like Arnold at all. Realizing that she needed to move on, the girl decided to get up and look for Claude because he had disappeared somewhere. While walking through the forest in search of Claude, Dame heard someone quietly whispering that it was necessary to give up one's soul for the sake of the revival of the former kingdom. Fearing an attack, Alice immediately hid in the bushes and began looking for the person who said this. What happened next simply stunned the girl because she did not expect it. The huge knight suddenly began to swing his huge sword straight at Alice. The frightened girl could not make a sound and simply stood there, waiting for her death. Fortunately, the knight still managed to stop right in front of the girl's face and not strike her with his sword. As it turned out, Claude thought that some thief had broken in to get to him. Having put away the sword, the man immediately apologized to Alice for frightening her and asked what she was doing there. The frightened lady exclaimed that she had come here to say that they were already leaving. The knight immediately got ready to leave and thanked the miss for warning him. Turning around, Claude also wanted to know if Alice had heard any conversations earlier. Laughing, the girl said that she heard absolutely nothing, since they were in the forest and there was no one else there. This answer satisfied Claude, and he said that they might then set out, and with luck might reach Denbighshire that evening. Thus, people realized that this Claude was somehow suspicious, and it was unclear what he meant by the revival of the former kingdom. Meanwhile, another cart began to approach Arnold's cart. It turned out that there was a lady riding in this cart who did not at all expect to meet Arnold here. The guy was very happy to meet Cecilia and was surprised that she was here too. The young man assumed that Cecilia was on leave from the theological academy because he wanted to understand where she had decided to go instead of enjoying her time at home. In fact, Cecilia goes to Denbighshire in her father's place to resolve the crisis in that town. Arnold immediately realized that this was indeed a good idea, since this was the very purpose for which he had come to the city, and his companions were holders of the highest saint rank. These words surprised the girl greatly, as she did not expect to meet two holders of the rank of bishop in one carriage. Suddenly, the driver began to shout at the young gentleman to turn away because things were going badly for them. The frightened man pointed in the direction where the event that had frightened him greatly had taken place. A strange glow was visible in the distance, and everyone wanted to understand what it was. As it turned out, their opponents were fire rhinoceroses, medium-sized herd animals that migrated south every autumn. A large number of flaming rhinos began to move towards the people as they wanted to destroy their enemies. A frightened Albert began to scream that he was being attacked by flaming rhinoceroses and did not understand what to do in this situation. But Cecilia thought that it was not in vain that she had met earlier two losers who turned out to be harbingers of death. The horses began to panic from fear and did not want to move in any direction. One of the experienced knights exclaimed that it was necessary to immediately carry out his order and protect the young lady. The warrior exclaimed that if the animals were far away, then long-range weapons should be used, but if they were close, then swords, axes, and spears should be used. All this time, the frightened gentleman did not understand where his partners had gone, because they were saint-rank warriors and could withstand such strong opponents. Cecilia immediately began preparing for an attack and began to summon the all-encompassing divine light. Absolutely all the knights were ready for battle and were ready to defend their mistress, since she was more precious than their lives. The chief warrior ordered all the guards not to allow these monsters to harm the woman under any circumstances. Suddenly Claude began to walk forward, and the knights did not immediately notice him because he looked like the other warriors. The great warrior was ready to fight alone and exclaimed that he would destroy all the monsters with his own strength. Claude swung his sword with all his might to show his true strength. The length of the sword was simply gigantic, and it seemed that with one blow the great knight could destroy all the monsters. Cecilia was simply shocked by this turn of events, because she did not expect that one warrior would be able to fight an entire army of monsters. The friendly troops also did not dare to come closer, because they saw that the strongest knight continued to fight. With just one blow, many monsters that fell under the blow of Claude's sword were destroyed. What she saw shocked Alice because she didn't expect Claude to be so strong. Albert approached the lady and decided to imagine a warrior who could deal with an entire army with one blow. That warrior was Claude, his teammate on the expedition, and also a holder of the highest saint rank. Cecilia started shouting to Albert that she needed such an ally for her team and gave 2,000 gold coins for him. And no matter how much that stupid son of a duke offered, the woman was going to double the amount to get Claude to join her team. Suddenly, the great warrior exclaimed that he refused to change the team. The agitated woman did not understand what was happening because she could smell a faint scent of black magic coming from the man. The worried lady shouted to Kyle that they needed to hurry, and the sooner they got to the city, the better. After some thought, the squad came to the conclusion that they simply had to get there before everyone else, and she had to personally eradicate all the undead, because this task was a good opportunity to show everyone what she was capable of. That is why the knight agreed to move on, although he understood that they would have to travel at night. After some time, events continued to take place in the city of Denbighshire, namely in the location of a military corps. The warriors drank together, but fate brought them together on this mission. Absolutely all the men were glad that they had accepted this task and wanted to be fed and watered that night, so that tomorrow they would be strong and eradicate all the undead. Alice was not far from the warriors, as they also arrived at the military building. Claude exclaimed that his team could go and have some fun, and he decided to take a little rest. The great warrior began to disperse to his tents to get at least a little sleep before the upcoming battle. As Alice began to think about Claude, she wondered if he was perhaps the greatest criminal in the kingdom. If so, being on a team with someone like him was dangerous. Adventurers' guilds are quite free, and if you can pass their test, you will be accepted. This led to the vast majority of adventurers in the guild having a dark past, even a simpleton like Merlin who left a restaurant without paying. Nothing compared to a dark adventurer. All this time, Albert continued to seduce Alice and said that today was a wonderful evening to spend time together. But the girl insisted that they had not yet gathered intelligence and had come here to fight with her, not for travel and entertainment. These words upset the young man very much, because he expected that Alice would fall in love with him during this journey. After thinking for a moment, the girl realized that it would be nice if Hobbs was here, even though the old bastard was annoying. At least he knew his business. Suddenly, Lady discovered that Hobbs and Merlin were right next door, drinking with other men. So Alice realized that her sworn enemy and Hobbs had arrived here much earlier than them, and that was surprising. Suddenly the girl decided to bring Albert to his senses and exclaimed that she and Merlin had nothing and that they were not a couple. Meanwhile, the protagonist talked to the girls about how his peasant rank only hides his true past, and that he has already accomplished incredibly great deeds, and also possesses the technique of quick decapitation. Such bragging on the part of the young man irritated the girl very much, as she saw that he was simply a tail catcher. Coming closer, Alice decided to turn to the crowd and say something. The self-confident girl exclaimed that all the girls should leave here because she and the main character need to talk about serious things. Because of this behavior, the girls began to think that Alice, who had the rank of a saint, was allowing herself too much, and Merlin was very happy to see his former partner. As it turned out, the heroine's previous team stopped too often during the trip, and there were too many turns, so they were a little delayed, and she wanted to know which road the young man's team was traveling on. The boy nevertheless admitted that it was all thanks to Hobbs. He was so good at navigating the area that he even gave him a nickname and called him a walking map. The protagonist's behavior greatly irritated Alice, because she considered him an outsider whose rank was much lower than hers. Meanwhile, someone else came up and exclaimed that he knew Merlin would come here. It turned out that it was Albert, who wanted to fight for Alice in a fair fight and believed that he would never lose to such an unlucky player as Merlin. This guy's love for Alice was simply boundless, and he was ready to do everything possible to win her love. Looking at this young man, everyone understood that he simply had problems with his head and that he was abnormal. I turned to Albert. Lucifer said that he will not fall in love with Alice, and only some crazy fanatic can do this. But this had already made the girl very angry, and if Merlin had said another word, she would certainly have found a way to kill him. At that very moment, Albert exclaimed that he was glad that Merlin was here, because in the future they would definitely fight in battle. All this greatly confused Alice, because she saw that Merlin also wanted to fight for her love. The worried girl approached Albert and said that she would now go gather intelligence, and he, unfortunately, could not help her in any way, so he would need to go to the camp and rest. Albert was pleasantly shocked because he realized that Miss was worried about him, so he considered her tender and attentive, and therefore began to love her even more. Hobbs was watching everything that was happening at this time and could not understand why the son of a rich duke was talking to Alice like some kind of madman. Upon hearing Hobbs' insult, Alice immediately hit him, as she was offended that even he considered her unworthy of love. Suddenly, the lady realized that her old acquaintance knew about the situation that had occurred in Denbighshire and decided to ask about it in more detail. But for this, the smart man immediately demanded money, and the heroine decided to give him a few gold coins in return. Soon after, her interlocutor nevertheless told her that in the north of the forest there is a cemetery of the prime minister of the former kingdom, which is a 3-story underground labyrinth. This minister was a necromancer in the past, so all the undead and skeletons were most likely created by him. And the purpose of the military corps consisting of adventurers is to hold back the undead in the forest until the king sends qualified people. But if you look closely at the composition of the military corps, even the holder of the highest saint rank came here directly from the king, which means things are not so bad and things are going well. This immediately made Alice think, because she remembered her partner, with whom she was on the same team. She remembered the strongest knight who was meditating in his tent at that time. Claude did all this just to revive the former kingdom. Sometime later, Claude woke up in the middle of the night and started moving somewhere while everyone was sleeping. The knight walked towards the gate and began to open it, as if he was going to go somewhere. Alice also decided not to sleep that night and follow the mysterious knight. The girl did not understand why he was doing this, as his behavior was quite strange. Watching her ally, Dama noticed that he was heading somewhere, namely outside the camp. Continuing to keep an eye on her ally, she realized that Claude suspected something, and today she was going to make a confession to him. Meanwhile, Hobbs stood near the bushes, relieving himself and simultaneously watching everything that was happening. Turning his head, the man noticed a girl running out of the camp. The blushing ally noticed that it was Alice who was walking near their fortification. Shivering from the cold, Hobbs began to think that night had fallen, and perhaps she had just dreamed. Some time later, the events continued near the strange ruins. Claude continued to move deeper into the ruins and gradually entered an unknown building. Not understanding what was happening, Alice continued to watch the warrior to understand what prompted him to go there. The girl even began to think that this Claude was a vagabond, and he decided to deal with all the evil spirits on his own. The place he entered looked very much like an underground labyrinth. A few hours later, the events continued into the early morning hours, and all the warriors began to wake up. Somehow, Albert found himself in the protagonist's tent and was watching him. What the guy saw next shocked him, because it seemed to him that his beloved was not in the tent. The excited young man watched as Merlin slept with someone under the blanket, and he thought it was Alice. The scoundrel was the first to cry, woke up Merlin, and exclaimed that he did not dare sleep with Alice. But, as it turned out, the boy was actually sleeping with a pillow in his hands and did not understand why Albert thought he was sleeping with Alice. Feeling very awkward, Albert realized that he had made a mistake and continued to stand there silently. Very angry, Merlin yelled at Arnold and said that if he did it again, he would be in trouble and would be punished. In fact, the worried guy did it only because he was worried about Miss Alice, as she had disappeared somewhere. The scoundrel burst into tears and explained that Mr. Claude had also disappeared, as if he had stolen Alice and run away. After thinking for a moment, Hobbs exclaimed that he had seen Alice last night. She had gone alone to the tomb in the forest and perhaps wanted to make money by killing evil spirits. Thus, the main character thought that Alice dared to play against the rules and did it behind his back. Having changed his clothes in just a second, the young man shouted that he would not let her just leave. The determined boy also wanted to go to the tomb to complete this task. The worried man asked him not to do that, since he was only an iron rank, and their presence would be more of a hindrance than a help, so they could just go with all the allies and get their 1,000 gold coins. In fact, the boy's goal was not 1,000 gold coins, but much more. This time, the opponents are the undead, so he can use them to extend his life, so he is bound to get the highest reward. Albert saw at once that Merlin was in earnest about Miss Alice, and his stately manner as a rival in love won him approval. Meanwhile, events continued to take place in the underground labyrinth, namely on the second level. I continued to watch my ally. Alice saw that this maze was so confusing and she couldn't get out of here unless she followed Claude, but it was strange why he knew this place so well. The girl even thought that her ally was already here, or perhaps he had a map of this underground labyrinth, and it was probably somehow connected with the head of the previous kingdom. There were also traces of a battle nearby, and it looked like someone had already been there. Suddenly, Claude saw 2 guards in front of him, who were skeletons. The enraged warriors tried to kill the intruder and were very angry with him, as they considered him an enemy. Claude immediately reached for his sword and wanted to pull it out just to finish off the 2 enemies. Drawing his sword, the knight in black armor struck back and destroyed all the enemies with one blow. The skeletons began to scream in pain because they could not believe that their enemy could be so strong. Using his magic sword, the man was able to easily penetrate the gate through which he wanted to get to the next level of the labyrinth. Pushing the door open, Claude moved on, because his goal was not to complete this mission, but something completely different. As soon as the gates opened, the great warrior found himself in a mysterious hall. In the throne room, as it turned out, there was the dead king, who was a skeleton. Looking at the king, Claude greeted him and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. The king became angry and wanted to know who this warrior was and why he had disturbed his eternal peace. Looking straight into the skeleton's eyes, Claude said that it had been 400 years since they last saw each other. These words made the skeleton king even more angry, and he wanted to know who was standing in front of him now. Putting away his sword, Claude bowed his head and said that the king had aged greatly because he did not recognize the Imperial Stormtrooper. Upon hearing about the Imperial Stormtrooper, the king was simply shocked because he realized that Bernard was standing in front of him, and it seemed to him that he had died long ago. As it turns out, these are 4 heroes who were resurrected by the prince using dark magic, and now they act as undead. The principle itself had a lucky escape when the previous kingdom was destroyed. Since then, it has used dark magic to suck the blood of elves and prolong their lives so that they can see the light again. After thinking for a while, the king finally decided to ask what the great heroes were going to do next. Pointing his finger at the king, the knight exclaimed that they needed a greater force to overthrow the government and restore the old kingdom. That is why Claude asked the king to give him the key that he guards so carefully. Thus the king realized that his former servant had come for this very key. Starting to get angry, the skeleton shouted that if the former king had not signed a pact with the devil, the kingdom would not have collapsed, and hell cannot be trusted, so it was completely unclear why Claude began to follow the wrong path. The brave knight shouted that he had to sacrifice something for the sake of strength, and he did not want to fight the king since they knew each other. So he asked again to give the key. Grabbing his weapon, the skeleton king refused to give up the key because he wanted to protect it with all his might. Alice's former ally was about to fight the king and apologize to him for his rudeness. Before the battle began, the king remembered how Bernard had previously said that it was a great honor for a warrior to die on the battlefield. But, as it turned out, the most important thing for Bernard now is to revive the kingdom. Having started the fight, the villain rushed at his former leader and was going to finish him off for the sake of the key. Using his immortality, the Skeleton King wanted to protect the key, as it was his only chance to exist in this world. During the battle, 2 immortal warriors had clashed in mortal combat. Watching everything that was happening, Alice was simply shocked, as she did not expect that events would develop in this way. Meanwhile, events continued to take place in the underground labyrinth, namely on the second level, where Merlin Lucifer was moving in search of Alice. Looking around, the young man suddenly realized that he was lost after all. After thinking for a while, the boy realized that it would be bad if someone else received the top award before him, and then he would have wasted his time. Suddenly, he finally remembered that Hobbs had told him earlier that it was a maze with several levels. It was all a bit reckless, but there was no other choice as he wanted to catch up with Alice. Having started waving his fist, the main character decided that he would penetrate the second level in a different way. Penetration into the second level of the labyrinth will be carried out using physical force. The skeletons clearly did not expect this turn of events, as they thought that in this way nobody would be able to get to the next level of the labyrinth. There was a powerful explosion, which destroyed many enemies. A brave warrior could easily punch a hole in the floor, which would take him to the next level of the labyrinth. This decision made the young man extremely happy because he realized that he had saved himself a lot of time. Meanwhile, events took place in the underground labyrinth, namely on the second level, where Cecilia was already fighting enemies. One of the strongest warriors used the divine light technique to drive out all evil. This magical ability blinded many of the skeletons and they could no longer fight. The knights also came to the rescue and began to attack in order to destroy absolutely all the villains. Looking around, the lady realized that they were still lost, and her informant had not even told her about the strength of the local monsters. If this continued, they were literally doomed to die. Cecilia's warriors were very tired, as it was extremely difficult for them to fight against such strong opponents. In fact, the girl only needed her father's recognition, and it is completely unclear why this recognition is so difficult. Feeling the difficulties during the battle, Kyle even shouted to his mistress that they should move away, but the girl did not want to listen to him. The worried man realized that they had been returning the same way they had come for a long time, but there was still no way out. Using her magical abilities, All Might exclaimed that they needed to push harder to get out of this labyrinth. Cecilia was confident that they could get out if they understood the structure of the maze. But the girl also understood that although the divine light was able to banish and burn these dark creatures, her mana was not infinite, and she literally begged the goddess of light Maria to protect them. Suddenly, the girl accidentally stepped on a crack in the floor. This strange phenomenon made her uneasy, as she realized that the floor might collapse. At that very second, a skeleton crawled out from under the floor and began to pull the girl into the hole. One of the warriors noticed that the divine light had disappeared and the monsters were starting to approach. Now it was completely unclear what to do in this situation. The frightened lady shouted at the skeleton not to come close and try to call at least someone for help. The evil skeleton with red eyes continued to approach the girl, and in his hands he had a small blade with which he wanted to finish her off. Luckily, some warrior noticed that her mistress was being attacked and decided to help. Thus, thanks to the efforts of the soldiers, Cecilia was saved and was no longer in danger. The girl was fine, but she really wanted to know where her staff was, because without it she could not use her magical abilities. The staff lay very close, and the lady immediately wanted to put it away in order to use the divine light again. The warriors tried to dissuade her and wanted to give her the staff themselves, but Cecilia did not listen to them. Suddenly, not far from the pit, a giant monster emerged from the pit, which had several heads, 6 arms, and in them he held blades with which he could fight. This turn of events began to worry the girl, because she did not know what to do in this situation, because she could not use her magic without a staff. The evil creature was getting closer and closer to the lady's allies, and wanted to destroy everyone without exception. The strongest warrior stood up to protect the woman and repelled the blow of the giant monster with his spear. It was very difficult for the guy to resist such a strong opponent. Because of this he fell to his knees. Experiencing great difficulty, the young man shouted at the woman to leave, as he wanted to deal with the monster himself. Meanwhile, the allied forces were gradually losing their advantage, as many skeletons were much stronger than a few warriors. Looking at everything that was happening, Cecilia fell to the floor and did not understand why everything turned out this way. Most of the allies were killed, and now it was literally impossible to continue the fight. At this time, the woman experienced great fear and remembered her home, from which she had recently arrived here. Cecilia's father had previously said that it was the strongest who survived, and the weak were useless, and the weak had no business here. The man insisted that the girl was the weakest of all his children. Any other child could easily defeat Cicely, and this made her very angry. Absolutely all the kids laughed at her, because every time she lost in a fight, other girls could easily beat her, even though she trained a lot. The brothers and sisters did not even want to acknowledge Cecilia, as they believed that she was too weak to be considered their relative. Realizing her weakness, the girl could only cry and continue training to become the strongest. At this time, a guy approached the girl and wanted to know how she fell. It was Kyle, who was also a child, and he extended his hand to Cecilia because he wanted to help her up from the floor. The woman happily accepted this help and realized that this guy would help her for the rest of her life. Together, they continued training at the recruit training ground, and each training session was very difficult for them. Kyle also found the training incredibly difficult, and the coach would beat him up as students who couldn't pass the training had to be beaten. Cecilia began to beg the teacher to spare Kyle for her sake. And after some time, Kyle still managed to become a knight, so he turned to Cecilia and swore to give his life for her. The girl clearly did not expect such treatment, since she had previously been insulted and humiliated, and now they wanted to worship her. This made Lady think, as she wanted to become stronger and realized that an ally could help her with this. After some thought, Cecilia finally allowed Kyle to become her knight. Even though she was as weak as Kyle, they were just two pathetic creatures who reached out to each other for warmth and to move on. Training continued during the winter as well, as Cecilia and Kyle were still weak. The brave knight tried to hone his skills during training, and to do this, he spent 10 hours a day trying to become stronger. Looking at this guy's training, Cecilia didn't understand why he continued to train, since he had already reached a high rank. But the guy continued to tirelessly repeat that he was training in order to protect his lover, because that way he could become much stronger. This shocked the girl, because no one had ever treated her like that before. Omnipotence understood that this fool loved her, and in this family, she was considered useless trash, Even her father decided to extract at least some benefit from her and married her off to a foreigner. Thanks to diligent training, Kyle continued to protect his owner with his life. Using all his physical strength, the young man shouted that he would hold off all the monsters while Cecilia ran away. The girl didn't like the fact that she had to run, and she screamed that she would only leave with Kyle. Meanwhile, the monsters continued to advance and could have easily finished off the lady if the bravest knight had not continued to stand up for her. It was an honor for Kyle to fight to the end for someone he cared about, and that person was Lady Cecilia. The three-headed skeleton was much stronger than normal opponents and had many arms, which made resisting such an opponent extremely difficult. There was nothing reprehensible in the young man's devotion, and that is why he wanted to give his life for the life of his mistress. The knight made lightning-fast attacks thanks to diligent training and years spent on preparation. One of the monster's heads was destroyed by a well-aimed blow from the tip of a spear. So the boy was happy because he thought that in this way he would be able to defeat this monster. But the mutant had 2 more heads, with the help of which he continued to see his target for attack. Suddenly the young man felt severe pain and did not understand what had happened to him. At that moment, Cecilia began to cry, realizing that she had lost the man she loved so much. The enemies were getting closer with every second, and that same Kyle was destroyed in battle, as he turned out to be weaker than the enemy army. The impudent monster decided to lift his opponent to show his superiority. Using his swords, the villain pushed Kyle back with all his might, causing him to fall. The exhausted youth fell to the ground, and it was obvious that he could no longer fight. The worried girl came closer and bowed to the warrior, trying to wake him up so that he would wake up and continue to protect her. Continuing to cry, Cecilia insisted that Kyle had a vow to keep. It seemed like Kyle couldn't hear her anymore, as he was badly damaged by that ill-fated blow. The strongest skeleton began to attack the woman because he saw that she was defenseless. So the lady realized that her life would end in this labyrinth. Closing her eyes, the girl began to think that everything was fine. Her empty, bitter, and petty life could finally end. Meanwhile, the ceiling nearby began to crack, as if it was about to collapse. As soon as the cracks became larger, there was an explosion of incredible force, as if someone had destroyed the ceiling. This blow was dealt to all the opponents standing in front of the lady at once. Every single monster present was destroyed, as the force of the blow was much stronger than their armor. Looking at the side of the explosion, the girl could not believe her eyes, as she did not expect that she would be saved in such a way. A guy appeared in front of the lady and began to repeat that he hadn't hit the floor with his fist for a long time. Experiencing some minor discomfort, the young man also reported that his back now hurts due to the strong blow. Upon seeing this guy, Cecilia immediately realized that he was an iron-ranked warrior and they had met last night. Turning his head, the protagonist saw Cecilia, who bowed before the fallen warrior. The boy was really very surprised, as he did not expect to see a woman here. The young man laughed and recognized the girl as the very same arrogant daughter of the Rose family, and wanted to know why she was so depressed. The girl said that they had not been here long, and when they went deeper into the second level, they were attacked by powerful undead, and Merlin decided to tell them that in this labyrinth, no one would spare the daughter of the Rose family. The young man asked with great interest why the girl had come here, since she, even though she was a priestess, could not cope with such a number of undead. Realizing her mistake, Cecilia exclaimed that she just wanted to prove to her father that she was strong. Hearing this answer, the boy immediately laughed because it was funny. He found it funny because Cecilia's power was meant only for her, and there was no need to prove to anyone that you were really strong. But in this case, the lady still proved that she was a fool. Now all her people died for such a stupid reason. But if she was a demon, she would be considered incompetent and people would start to rebel on their own. Acknowledging her mistake, Cecilia lowered her head and began to cry. After all, it was the girl's fault that absolutely all the warriors who had fought so bravely earlier died. Even the strongest warrior named Kyle died, and now it became completely unclear why this whole undertaking was needed. The protagonist still understood that effort was the main condition, but effort alone was clearly not enough. The boy turned around and started to leave, because he was not interested in talking about life with such a noble lady as she. Suddenly, unexpectedly, the same skeleton with 2 heads burst out from under the rubble of the labyrinth, and he was very angry. The formidable enemy rushed to kill the young man because he understood that he was his main opponent. The frightened girl shouted at the guy to be careful because he was being attacked. This whole situation was very funny to Merlin, as he began to think that he was born with a trick because it was somehow unfair to others, since anyone who challenged him failed. Taking out his blade, the boy delivered an incredibly sharp blow, with which it was possible to destroy all enemies. This blow landed directly on the main enemy, who was scattered into small pieces. The young man did not understand at all how the already dead scoundrel could try to fight him. It was really funny. In fact, the undead really irritated him because no matter how many of them he killed, they couldn't prolong his life. As Cecilia continued to watch the guy, she was simply shocked because from the simple movement, there was a huge force emanating, and it was clear that this guy was not an iron-ranked adventurer. Looking at her knight, the girl understood that if she did not ask for help, then Kyle, and she would die here. Addressing the protagonist, the lady asked him not to leave and prayed that he would protect her and her partner. Turning to his mistress, the young man decided to find out why he should help her. As a token of gratitude for her help, Cecilia wanted to reward Merlin for saving them. The smart boy began to think that this noble lady was really rich, and for such help he could get no less than 5,000 gold coins from her. The hero smiled maliciously and exclaimed that he wanted to receive a reward and something else in return. This request greatly confused the girl, as she did not understand what reward she should be given for her salvation. Remembering her faithful warrior, the lady realized that he had sacrificed his life for her. Still confused, Cecilia realized that Kyle had agreed to these terms, and she had to do everything she could to save them. As Cecilia began to take off her dress, she blushed deeply and said that this reward should definitely satisfy Merlin. Unfortunately, this was not the reward the young man wanted. He only wanted 5,000 gold coins, but he got something completely different. Starting to get angry, the hero pulled out his sword and said that even Alice was better than Cecilia. These actions greatly embarrassed the lady, as she thought that she was about to be killed. In fact, at this moment the young man delivered many blows in order to perform one unusual trick. Using his magical powers, Merlin created a platform that brought the lady and Kyle to the hill. These undead won't be able to reach them that far, and this technique should protect the owner for a long time. In fact, this was not what Cecilia wanted at all, and she begged him to take her to safety, but the guy refused her because he had other things to do and he was not going to stay there. Having found the weapon, Merlin decided to throw it to the girl as well, so that she could defend herself. Now Cecilia had her magic staff again and could fight the undead. The smart guy said that the knight was still alive, and she was a priestess, so she should know what to do. Looking at her knight, Dame realized that she didn't need anything, but she couldn't lose Kyle. There were also enemies nearby who had already seen the girl on the hill. Feeling very afraid, the girl continued to ask for help, and the young man promised her to return after he finished all the work and save them. Looking around, the protagonist realized that there was one last level left, and he hoped that Alice was beaten so badly that she would not be able to fight, because then he would get all the gold coins. Meanwhile, Alice continued to watch Claude, and she was not surprised that he spoke like a person who lived in the last century. He even said that the 4 heroes of the previous kingdom were real masters, and thus praised himself. The battle between Claude and the king continued, the formidable warriors clashing in mortal combat. Looking at everything that was happening, Alice understood that she had nothing to do here because she thought that Claude was just the main criminal, but everything turned out to be much more complicated. That's why the girl must tell the guild leader about this when she returns. And now it's completely unclear whether she has time to retreat. The evil king noticed that Bernard had grown old because his movements had become slow and it was annoying. In an attempt to resist the king, Claude did everything possible to do so and tried to deliver the strongest blows. All this time the knight could not understand why the king still retained his arrogance. Swinging the giant sword with all his might, Claude wanted to deliver the strongest blow in order to kill the enemy in an instant. For the king, this blow was truly impressive, since he had never seen anyone pose such serious competition to him. During this fight, the Skeleton King realized that he needed to demonstrate his secret technique. This turn of events confused the man, as he did not expect that there would be any other secret technique here. Feeling great rage towards Claude, the king exclaimed that now he would never be able to dodge the blow. Immediately after these words, an attack by a giant bone hand followed, which literally slammed the warrior into the wall. From the force of the blow, the knight began to experience unbearable pain, since the enemy was indeed very strong. After that, the giant bone hand struck again, and Claude found himself on the floor. The enraged king was about to finish the battle he had started, as he was already a little tired of everything that was happening. In fact, the great bone warrior did not want to be underestimated, so he resorted to a secret technique. At this time, Claude began to think that the Bone King still had the same power as he did 400 years ago. And now you just need to overthrow the king from the throne with one attack, and take the key. With one blow, Claude was going to shatter the king's skull and extinguish the flame of his soul with his secret technique. These words angered the master, and he ordered that no speeches be made here, but first he wanted to finish off Claude so that he would not be cunning on the battlefield. Rising from his knees, the great warrior exclaimed that the king must accept his fate, for he would no longer be able to touch him. This technique involved Claude using a secret skill that allowed him to enter Stormtrooper mode. Continuing to watch the battle, Alice realized that this was no longer a human aura, and the anger was that of a saint-rank magical beast. It seemed as if at that moment the world's most powerful warriors had united to wage a major battle. Suddenly, magical energy appeared between the two opponents, and it turned out that they used it to break through the ceiling. A guy fell into the hole, and only his silhouette was visible. Seeing this, Claude was simply shocked because he wanted to understand what was going on. Only the Skeleton King saw this guy and decided to find out who he was. As it turned out, it was Merlin Lucifer, who was very glad that the battle was not over yet, as he arrived on time. Looking at the guy with the two-handed sword, the young man decided to ask him if Alice had been following him. The great warrior couldn't understand how this happened because he didn't understand why all the first and second level undead couldn't stop this iron formation. Alice was simply shocked because she did not understand what this guy was doing here, because he made his way through 2 levels of stones in this 3-level labyrinth and got to the 3rd level straight to the main boss. After some thought, Claude came to the conclusion that in order to keep the kingdom's rebirth a secret, he needed to kill all witnesses. Looking at this guy, the Skeleton King was also furious because he did not understand how some outsider dared to break into his eternal refuge. That's why he ordered his spirit army to turn this guy into dust. The main character continued to stand in place, as if he did not sense any danger at all. As it turned out, he stood in place for a reason, but because there was a magical aura around him that protected him. For the first time in his life, the skeleton was shocked by how strong an ordinary Iron Rank adventurer was. Claude also did not understand how this was possible, because he understood that this man was truly unusual. Trying to understand what happened, the skeleton realized that it was simply impossible to reach this guy with magic. The Great Knight exclaimed that such an enemy could not be underestimated. Only Alice understood that Merlin's anti-magic barrier was very useful, and because of this, the church suffered huge losses during their campaign. The young man could not understand what kind of enemy was in front of him, since he had not even touched him, and he was already attacking. Although the Skeleton King wanted to know what kind of enemy was in front of him, the boy replied that he did not need to know, but that there was a skeleton in front of him that was worth only 5,000 gold coins. The Skeleton King simply could not tolerate such insults, and could not even imagine that some child could insult him. Wanting his enemy dead, the strongest opponent wanted to make an incredibly powerful attack that would have left any person dead by now. But the Skeleton King still had no idea what kind of enemy was in front of him. Even Claude began to dodge the boulders that fell after such a strong attack. Looking at the battlefield, Claude came to the conclusion that the boy had died, as even he couldn't withstand a full attack from the Skeleton King, let alone him. But what happened next surprised absolutely everyone, because the main character could easily withstand such an attack, and for him, it was even very weak. Thus, even Alice came to the conclusion that Merlin's physical defense was not so bad. No one could understand how this was even possible, and the Skeleton King's jaw even dropped. According to the king, this was simply impossible, because there could be no man capable of withstanding the blow of a skeleton's hammer. The protagonist nevertheless admitted that the summoned creature was indeed quite interesting. But this creature was not supposed to continue to exist, and the guy simply took it and crushed it with one hand. With just one move, the giant skeleton was completely destroyed. This caused the Skeleton King to panic, as he now realized how weak he was compared to this guy. Pulling out his sword, Merlin finally exclaimed that the useless undead should immediately go to hell. With a sweeping blow, the boy delivered a super strong blow, and with its help the Skeleton King was defeated. At the last moment, the king shouted that his enemy was a monster that he could not defeat. The battle was over, and all that remained of the skeleton was the crown, lying on the floor. In fact, Alice thought that this enemy would give Merlin at least a little trouble, and she didn't think that he would kill him with one blow again. The brave warrior smiled because he felt victory and was proud of himself. Looking at Merlin, the Great Knight came to the conclusion that none of the 4 heroes could compare with this formidable monster. And if such a powerful force acts under the leadership of His Majesty, then they will be able to defeat absolutely any enemy. The boy was pleased with the outcome of the battle and thought that 5,000 gold coins were guaranteed to him. Now he needed to see if there was anything here that could be sold. At that very moment, the young man noticed a certain object lying on the floor. It was an unknown key that dropped after the Skeleton King's death. The knight in dark armor noticed that the young man had picked up the key and realized that the infernal core needed it to revive the former kingdom. It was impossible to allow the key to fall into the wrong hands. Coming closer, the knight turned to Sir Merlin to say something to him. Having asked politely, the warrior said that he needed this key. The young man did not understand why he needed to give up the key, because it was his trophy. In exchange, Clyde promised to give the protagonist 200,000 gold coins to buy this key. For the guy, this amount was simply impressive, since he understood that this fucking key was worth no more and no less than 200,000 gold coins. At that very moment, Alice screamed and asked Merlin not to give the key to the scoundrel. Turning his head, the knight immediately became embarrassed, as he realized that he had been watched the whole time. Starting to laugh, the guy said that Alice was really hypocritical, since she ended up here, abandoning them for the sake of a reward. Pointing her finger at Clyde, the girl shouted that she had found out the real truth about him. This warrior was not a living man. It was Bernard, one of the 4 heroes who died long ago. After some thought, Merlin realized that it was undead. And it's true, Bernard and the others were the former protectors of the kingdom. They were revived by magic and are planning to revive the former kingdom. Claude came here for this key because it contains some great secret, and this key cannot be given to a scoundrel. In fact, this attracted the protagonist even more, because he realized that this was a truly valuable treasure, and in this way he would be able to pay off all his debts. The Great Knight realized that Alice had been watching him all this time and now knew all his secrets. And in order to ensure the flawless execution of the plan, it was necessary to bury them here so that no one would survive. Grabbing his sword, the wily warrior rushed into battle, wanting to pounce on someone to destroy them. It turned out that at that moment Claude was about to attack Alice and swung his sword at her. Before the blade could touch the girl, someone stopped it. Fortunately, the protagonist reacted in time and realized that Claude could no longer hold back. Looking at this guy, the great warrior realized that he was very fast, even faster than Claude in Stormtrooper mode. Pointing his finger at Alice, the hero says that he must save her, since they pay the rent for the house in half. Continuing his attempts to attack, Claude exclaimed that if they gave him the key now, he would pretend that nothing had happened and they would go their separate ways. The hero realized that this key held a great secret, and he would be an idiot if he gave it away. And besides, since he had attacked them, Merlin was no longer going to hold back. And then the great warrior realized that there seemed to be no point in continuing the conversation. Unable to bear Claude's impudence, Alice struck him with all her might with a blade straight into the body. In great pain, the Dark Knight began to retreat, realizing that he could now be defeated. After the strike, Alice's sword began to smoke because it was holy. And since this holy sword works, it means the enemy is truly undead. As it turned out, Merlin didn't like all this, and he asked Alice not to attack their enemy. With a heavy sigh, the young man said that he could not accept help from anyone in the fight, and in any case, she should not interfere, since she should not put them up as partners. Alice really didn't understand him, because the previous Demon King actually had such a strange obligation. Fighting two against one is indeed unfair, but Claude will be able to find justification in a one-on-one duel and sincerely accept his defeat. Looking at his opponent, Claude understood that he had no chance of winning, and he was simply ready to sacrifice his life for the sake of the revival of the former kingdom. Realizing that the battle must continue, Claude removed his helmet for the first time. Seeing the face of his opponent, the young man was a little surprised, as he did not expect this. But Alice was shocked because she felt uneasy about Claude's appearance. Claude started laughing because if someone asked which of the four heroes had the strongest one-on-one fights, it would be him without a doubt. These words made the young man laugh, and he nevertheless decided to find out whether it made sense to hand over the former Slava. Ugly Claude shouted that there was no point in thinking that Merlin could defeat a true saint if he had any sword skills. And Merlin was just sorry that his opponent would not have the opportunity to talk about his regrets, because not everyone was as lucky as Alice. Meanwhile, Alice was thinking that she was probably unlucky in getting involved with Merlin. Raising his hand up, the enemy began to use magical abilities and activated the Stormtrooper mode. Sensing the enemy's aura, Alice came to the conclusion that she had indeed become stronger than she was before, and apparently Claude had recognized Merlin's strength and would fight him at full strength. For the main character, these attempts to be stronger seemed simply ridiculous, since he understood that now the enemy would die from one blow. The enemy continued to advance, and holding his sword in his hands, he said that he would kill Merlin in the name of the four heroes. Feeling intense anger towards the protagonist, the Dark Knight began his attack. Remaining in place, the young man waited for the enemy to approach him. Because the enemy had many open areas on his body, Claude planned to destroy the villain with just one blow. Turning around, Merlin Lucifer looked straight into the eyes of his enemy. This caused Claude to stop, and he immediately stopped his attack. Looking at his opponent, the boy wanted to know why he stopped and suddenly became scared. The undead simply could not explain their fear. Claude stood motionless and sighed heavily, because he could not continue the fight. Claude's senses were sharply heightened in Stormtrooper mode, and his instincts told him that the enemy was dangerous, and his strength was far beyond that of a saint. That is why the enemy admitted that he was indeed scared, but it amused him, because now he had an opponent who forced him to use all his strength. Thus, the knight realized that Sir Merlin would certainly be able to understand his current feelings. Laughing, the young man exclaimed that he understood how lonely it was to be invincible, and Claude must be happy to meet an opponent who was on his level. But, unfortunately, one nuance arose again because for Lucifer, Claude is definitely not the kind of opponent that he would like. With a sharp movement of his hand, the enemy pointed his sword straight at the main character. The angry boy shouted that then Lucifer should test him and admit that he was an equal opponent. After thinking for a while, the boy was surprised, as he did not expect the enemy to think that they were equal in strength. Using his magical abilities, Claude wanted to put all his power into one blow so as not to leave any regrets. The technique used was truly unusual, as it caused unusually intense pain to the one using it. Looking at everything that was happening, Alice instantly realized that this was the forbidden method of sacrificing a madman, so Claude exchanged his life for an instant hundredfold increase in his normal abilities. The girl's teacher had previously said that this technique was forbidden and lost in time, and she didn't think she would be able to see it today. This technique was truly impressive, and Merlin was very interested in fighting such an opponent. Now the forbidden technique had been used, and the Dark Knight had no choice but to continue the battle. Literally a second later, Claude seemed to disappear as he began his attack. The protagonist easily repelled the enemy's attack, although he felt that he had actually become stronger. Immediately after the first attack was blocked, there followed a multitude of unusually sharp attacks, which were much more difficult to dodge. The smart guy tried to attack with his legs, but the enemy was agile enough to dodge. The fight between the two super strong people continued, and it seemed that they were truly equal in strength. Gathering all his strength, Claude delivered a powerful blow with his sword, and it seemed like the protagonist might actually be harmed by it. Luckily, the young man managed to dodge and survived because he was strong enough to resist the villain. The enemy was so fast that he didn't even give the guy a chance to draw his sword to strike. Such skills and strength were impressive, as Merlin Lucifer would never have thought that he would face such an enemy. The battle continued, Claude dealt the final blow, and Lucifer continued to stand silently in place. The force of the impact was incredibly enormous, as the vibrations that arose during the impact caused even the stones to rise into the air. Not understanding what was happening, Alice simply watched everything that was happening because she wanted to understand what had happened. What she saw really shocked the girl, as she could never see such a fight again in her life. When the fog cleared, Claude was in shock, as he thought he had managed to harm Lucifer. Although the enemy was indeed fast, it was not as fast as the protagonist's sword. Turning his head, Claude decided to look at his enemy to see him one last time. Before his death, the great warrior saw the true form of his enemy, which he had previously carefully hidden. As Claude began to fall, he realized that he was getting old. Although he had handled such a sword before, he could not recognize it now. Losing his life force, the great warrior realized that the demon was much stronger than he thought, because it was the strongest monarch Lucifer. These words surprised the young man, as he did not expect to hear them from his enemy, because he was only known among demons and rarely traveled, so no one could know him. The young man laughed and thought that perhaps he had just heard it. Turning to Alice, Merlin wanted to know if everything was okay with her, but the girl was simply in a stupor and stood silently. To make the girl come to her senses a little, the boy came closer and decided to slap his hand right in front of her face. Winking at the girl, Lucifer expected her to thank him, but Alice didn't want to do that. The angry lady shouted that since this key held a secret, Merlin should not keep it for himself, but should give it to the country. Merlin couldn't stand Alice's behavior and hit her right on the forehead, because the girl acted like a fool, because if this key really leads to the treasure, then he won't just give it up. Approaching Alice, the young man began to repeat that since they knew each other, they could divide these treasures between themselves. The boy realized that this key really couldn't be useless, since it was Saint Rank who had been looking for it earlier. Lucifer began to insist that if Alice was so adamant, then he himself would find these treasures and take them for himself, so the girl immediately agreed to start searching together. A little later, the lady finally realized that perhaps Merlin had deceived her. In the hands of Lucifer, this key was truly valuable, as it could lead to untold treasures. The only problem was that the secret that hid this key had been found. Suddenly Alice remembered that she had a friend who knew about this. She was also an adventurer from Wrexham, and they could ask her. Suddenly a strange noise was heard nearby. The heroes immediately noticed this noise and did not understand how this was possible, because the sorcerer was already dead. But as it turned out, this had no effect on the army of the undead, and a large number of skeletons wanted to destroy the people who dared to break into their home. The confident young man said that these were the remaining troops that had been drawn here by the mana of this key, and he would deal with them himself. The girl did not want her partner to fight alone and declared that she would also participate in the fight. The protagonist's strength was truly impressive, as an incredibly powerful aura emanated from his body. A few minutes earlier, events took place near the entrance to the labyrinth. Near the entrance, there were already people standing who were going to enter the labyrinth and destroy the undead, sending them to hell. A large number of brave warriors wanted to do everything possible to ensure that their loved ones and relatives were not harmed. The undead were already waiting for the people who were about to break into the labyrinth for battle. Even Arnold took part in the fight and donned his uniform to fight the skeletons. In fact, it was completely unclear why Arnold went to fight in the labyrinth, because he had a large sum of money. But as the guy explained, yesterday many commanders said that his family had outstanding military merits, and therefore he cannot retreat. In that case, Hobbs could not understand why such a great family of military leaders had such a loser as Arnold. The experienced man realized that if they entered this cave, Merlin had probably already saved Alice, and they would soon return home. Coming closer, Arnold exclaimed to Hobbs that if he saved Alice, he would earn even more money, as he would like to make an alliance with her. Hobbs was happy to help, as he was the most loyal person Arnold had ever seen, and he was willing to sacrifice himself for his friends and sacrifice his friend for women. So all he had to do was wink, and he would be there to help. One of the warriors began to announce that the battle had finally begun and all knights and adventurers needed to get ready. The adventurers rushed into battle and were going to destroy all the skeletons that would stand in their way. But Hobbs started to run away, although Arnold stopped him because they needed to go and fight. The evil undead tried to destroy all people who dared to enter their territory. The battle was really difficult, because in addition to the usual skeletons with swords, there were also mutants who turned out to be much stronger. Feeling intense fear and looking at their opponents, the men already began to think that they were going to die. The giant skeleton was already very close to Arnold and his escape partner and literally almost trampled them. Trying to protect themselves from the blow, a group of guys fell to the floor and covered their bodies with their hands. What happened next is simply impossible to explain, since the skeletons simply disappeared. All the undead present on the battlefield turned to dust and evaporated literally before the eyes of all the warriors. The proud warriors were glad that the battle was finally over and were proud of their actions during the battle. After the battle ended, events in the city continued to occur some time later. The joyful man congratulated the soldiers on the end of the battle and gave them 5,000 gold coins as a reward for solving the problem. Alice declined the award, saying she didn't deserve it. Pointing her finger at Merlin, the girl convinced everyone that it was he who instantly killed 2 holy orders with one swing. Looking at the rank of such a strong guy, the man knew that this was a weak iron rank adventurer who had no mana or aura, and no one would believe it. It was rare indeed to find an adventurer who would refuse a reward and give it to others, but Alice did not like it, because no one believed her. Addressing his subordinate, the man said that the investigation was complete and that this report needed to be sent immediately. The report stated that the 2 saint ranks of the previous kingdom, Enchanter Yang and Claude, one of the 4 heroes, fought to the death when they both weakened and were on the verge of death. Alice, a gold rank adventurer, dealt a finishing blow to them. Merlin, an iron rank adventurer, witnessed the whole thing. Several hours later, the events in Arnold's carriage continued. The heroes decided to tell the whole story to Arnold, and he couldn't believe that Claude was such a person. The guild leader should definitely be surprised. Someone also said that the forces of the previous kingdom had not yet died out, so the queen would definitely send the Redbud Knights to scout out. The Redbud Knights are the royal family's personal bodyguards. Arnold heard that they consist of 12 experts, each with the strength of an army. They operate in secret and serve only the queen. In fact, Arnold was also worried that he didn't think that a person like Mr. Claude would be around him, and now he was scared. Suddenly, the hero exclaimed that he knew that he was once the great demon king of the first palace. This caused Hobbs to start laughing out loud, and said that perhaps friend Merlin had just had too much to drink because he had talked too much today. Although, in fact, the man was often afraid of demons because they often fought with the church army. The drunk man was afraid that they wouldn't be able to stop them if they attacked here. The early church informed all people that demons would sooner or later invade human territory. In fact, Merlin Lucifer decided to explain that demons will not attack first if they're not interfered with. It is the church that always organizes campaigns against demons. Demons have never organized campaigns against people. After some thought, Hobbes came to the conclusion that this was indeed the case. That is why these church extremists only know how to provoke demons. By the way, Hobbes wanted to understand why the demons do not migrate south and unite with the kingdom like other races, because this is where the Inhumans gather. The heroes nevertheless decided to enlighten their friend, as they understood that he did not have enough education. The evolution of the world is divided into 4 eras. When the age of people was approaching, the king of the elves gathered all the races except the human one to move to the south and create a new kingdom, but the demons refused. Previously, there were only 4 eras. The first was the age of gods, the second was the age of elves, the third was the age of demons, and the fourth was the age of people. Demons, on the other hand, are a particularly independent race. They will not cooperate with anyone or serve others. But the main reason is that under the palaces of the 7 demon kings, there are some secrets that cannot be spoken about, so they cannot leave. The man was shocked by such knowledge and praised the young man, since he really knew the history of demons well. Arnold's heart was touched as he realized that Merlin had clearly won and had most likely already made Miss Alice fall in love with him. But the guy in love was still not going to give up and wanted to continue the fight for Alice next time. The girl was very confused by this, because she understood that Albert would never be able to compete with Lucifer. Suddenly, the young man remembered that he had forgotten something very important. It turned out that he had forgotten about Cecilia, who remained in the labyrinth and waited for help. Sometime later, the events continued near the giant volcano. Not far from the volcano, there was a huge gate through which someone entered inside. Inside the gate, there was a certain room where the undead discussed how Bernard would not be able to bring the key until he died. Bowing before his majesty, the servants tried to calm him down and said that they would definitely find all the keys. When the ruler approached Caroline, he had instructed her to investigate Bernard's death and the location of the key, so he wanted to know what progress she had made. Bowing her head, the girl explained that it was said that Bernard and the sorcerer had fought and were weakened, and then a gold-ranked adventurer had finished them off. The Lord was furious and didn't understand how this could happen, but as it turned out, the key was now in the hands of a gold-ranked adventurer. Realizing that the plan could be exposed, the Grand Master knew that they needed to figure it out as quickly as possible. That's why he ordered the twins Zoe and Joey to stay here, guarding the sanctuary. They needed to stop anyone who wanted to stop them. The brothers agreed with the bishop and said that they would do everything possible to prevent the enemy from approaching the shrine. Caroline was to go to the town of Wrexham and take the key from this adventurer by any means necessary. The obedient girl happily agreed and said that she would definitely return the key that carried the revival of the great kingdom. Events continued 2 days later in the guild building. The guild lady was very glad that Alice had finally returned, and she had heard that the girl had done well in Denbighshire and had become popular. This really surprised Alice, as she realized that news really did travel fast. The news said that Alice was one of the strongest warriors, capable of taking down 2 saint-ranked enemies, but Merlin insisted that she just finish them off. Meanwhile, the elder approached and congratulated the travelers on the successful completion of their mission. The older man also said that he had already heard about Claude, who had betrayed his team, so that he could already begin to help the capital in investigating this matter. And the capital, in turn, sent the Knights of the Red Bud to help. These events made the guild worker happy, because she understood that in this way it would be possible to investigate the case and understand why Claude did this. Coming closer to the reception desk, the young man winked at the girl and said that he wanted to get his money. The good-natured girl agreed to give him the money and said that he had earned 6,000 gold coins for this mission, and after deducting 70% for debts, he had 1,800 gold coins left. This money made the boy very happy, because he realized that in this way he had already become rich. But suddenly the hero realized that something was wrong here, because there was too little money left. As it turned out, all this money was accounted for together with Alice's money, and thus they together paid off Merlin's debt. According to the documents the master provided to headquarters, he and Alice were married, so their savings would be added together. Feeling very angry, Alice did not understand why the manager did this, because it was not agreed with them. In fact, the master was cunning, because in order to register Mr. Merlin, who had neither mana nor aura, he only had to resort to a loophole in the registration documents and register him as a person related to Miss Alice. Miss Alice also stated that she vouched for Mr. Merlin and was responsible for him. Suddenly, nearby, someone dropped a large bag of roses that they wanted to give to someone. Albert began to cry and pray to the girl that he would be worthy of being her partner. Within seconds, Albert was already lying on the floor because Alice couldn't stand this kind of behavior on his part. Approaching Miss Lygia, Merlin wanted to know if they could call off their marriage, since it was very unfriendly towards him, and Alice also didn't want anything to do with the guy. Upon hearing this request, Lygia agreed, but asked to be given a divorce certificate. But as it turned out, they cannot dissolve the marriage until they have a divorce certificate. Then they will have to get married and then get divorced, and only then they can do this procedure. Pointing her finger at Merlin, Alice exclaimed that no one would marry that idiot, and that it would be better to die. Handing over the documents, the worker explained that the certificate indicated the fact of the adventurer's marriage, and this document had already been sent to headquarters yesterday. The document states that Alicia Claudia and Merlin Lucifer were married. Because of an ordinary piece of paper, Alice literally fell into depression because she realized that she could no longer live her old life. The girl at the reception began to mock Alice, saying that they were already the 1,000th couple of adventurers in their guild, and wished them happiness and prosperity, but this did not suit the heroine at all, and she did not want to marry Merlin. After thinking for a moment, the young man realized that in this case he would probably be worse off, since for a long time his debt was only a few tens of thousands, and Alice's debt was several tens of millions, and now they were summed up and placed on his shoulders, which is why luck turned away from him. Suddenly the lady realized that she already had a huge debt, so these several tens of thousands of gold were nothing. The food amazed Merlin, and if it weren't for him, this would not have happened. Wanting a divorce, Merlin immediately filed the divorce papers and placed them on the table. Trying to leave, the young man said that he was leaving and no longer wanted to be an adventurer, wishing Alice good luck in paying off her debt. Suddenly, Lygia also said that the guild had rules that pairs of adventurers had to complete a quest together, otherwise they wouldn't approve of them. This statement really shocked the couple, as they did not expect that they would not be able to complete other tasks alone. The rule was really stupid, and the main character and his partner started to resent it because it was unnecessary. But there was nothing that could be done about it. A couple of years ago, there were a few adventure couples where the wife went on a mission with another man and cheated on her husband. There was a lot of noise about it, so the headquarters had to create this new rule. Meanwhile, someone decided to approach Miss Alice again with a new proposal. It was Albert, who was incredibly in love with the girl and wanted to enter into an alliance with her, and was even ready to sell his house to help her pay off the debt. Of course, Alice was very grateful for such help and offer, but she refused. Although kindness was pleasant, she did not need such pity. Having heard the refusal, the young man simply fell into a stupor, as he did not expect that even in such a situation he would be refused. Reflecting on everything that was happening, Alice realized that Albert was treating her as if he was buying her, and in return he would pay back all her debts. The boy decided to stop the girl and said that she had forgotten something very important. This angered the lady, for the young man demanded that she give her the reward for Denbighshire. The protagonist understood that this was their common reward and wanted to take a share, so it wasn't even extortion. Thinking about these words, Alice remembered that they had agreed to pay for the house together. Although they share the rent for the house, she will sleep in the bedroom, and he will sleep on the couch, and will move silently around the house. She will use the bathroom first, and they will also take turns cooking and mopping the floor. Nevertheless, the boy agreed to all these conditions and eventually received the reward he deserved. Looking at the reward, he saw that only 1 gold coin had been received. This angered Merlin, as he had tried so hard, but only ended up with 1 coin. Looking at the boy, Hobbs welcomed him to the Henpecked Husbands Club. After some time, the events in the rented house continued. The main character decided to knock on the door to be let into the house. Dissatisfied, Alice opened the door a little and decided to find out why the guy had come. As it turned out, he returned home and ordered the girl not to forget that he was also paying for this house, and he had the right to use half of the house. The disgruntled girl said that the young man could come inside, as it would be bad if the neighbors saw a rogue wandering in front of her door. Feeling confused, Merlin now wanted to show with all his might that he was not a fraud, but could be decent and correct. Thrifty Alice cooked dinner and decided to find out what they would do with their shared debts. Having started eating, the hero insisted that they leave everything as it was because they would not be able to pay off the debts anyway, so they would live with them. Alice stood up from the table and exclaimed that they still had a chance. She could earn tens of thousands of gold coins if she took a rank quest, and when she reached the mithril rank, she could take an SS rank quest, and there they would give at least 100,000 gold. Unfortunately, the protagonist was pessimistic and said that this was not something to count on since Alice had not even reached the mithril rank. As it turned out, Alice had dreamed of becoming a saint again her whole life, but it was obvious that she might not succeed, since many people had died trying to achieve such a high rank. During this conversation, the guy still insisted that they leave this topic for now, and in any case, he didn't think there would be too many SS rank quests, but as it turned out, there were also SS rank quests that required paying at least 1,000,000 gold coins. The negatively minded young man did not believe that he would be able to take on such difficult tasks, and they would have to wait millions of years. In fact, Alice remembered that the guild leader had previously told her that the previous SSS rank quest was 10 years ago, and for this task, they were given a reward of 2,000,000 gold coins. Laughing, the girl shouted that they actually gave 20,000,000 gold coins as a reward if they took on such a task. Otherwise, they would not have to worry about their lives, and they would say goodbye to their debts. Having heard the information about such a reward, the main character was simply shocked and realized that he really wanted to find such a task. Although he wanted to live his life without doing anything, but it would be difficult for him to live a happy life if he did not remove the curse from his heart, if money is not taken into account. The purpose of him becoming an adventurer with Alice is to meet strong enemies. He would have nothing to lose if I could not take on a CCC rank mission. Moreover, if he uses this money and wins the bet on the horse race, he will be able to live 7 lives without worrying about anything. Sometime later, the young man decided to ask Alice if the SSS rank tasks were really difficult. These kinds of quests were indeed very difficult. An ordinary adventurer would not be able to take on this quest. Even a mithril rank could only be a support. Only an amethyst rank could complete it. From the guild leader's story, the girl learned that the SSS ranked quest from 10 years ago was about a giant monster in the North Sea, whose awakening had disrupted several important sea routes. There were many saint-ranked experts participating in the quest, but they were all either defeated, eaten by that monster, or died in the sea. In the end, they had to turn to the church and send a hero to help. This hero was Alicia Claudia Senpai, and also a legendary spear hero. After thinking for a bit, the boy remembered that it was this hero who had fought demons before. Earlier, Alice heard from the church that the spear hero successfully completed the campaign against Lucifer II, the protagonist's mother. The smart guy still decided to find out from Alice what she knew about the spear hero, because perhaps in this way he would be able to remove the curse from his heart if he fought such a strong opponent. After thinking about it, the girl admitted that she hadn't heard much, but she knew that in the church, Senpai was very strong and revered as a legend. He was one of the 10 legendary heroes. But this was very surprising because in this way Lucifer knew that there were 10 more similar heroes who were probably still alive. Since they were equal to the spear hero, their strength should be about the same, and they were worth killing. Unfortunately, Alice didn't suspect this. The bishop was drunk and was talking nonsense about all the legendary heroes having disappeared somewhere. If there was a single hero here, he would have pinned Lucifer III to the ground and made him call him daddy. Thinking about all that was said, the young man began to think that these heroes had mysteriously disappeared, but with them he had a chance to lift the curse of the heart. And in connection with this, the boy decided to figure out how a hero like me went against a giant monster in the north that had gone out to sea. Alice believed that the giant North Sea monster had been maimed and sank back into the depths of the ocean. Hearing this, Merlin realized that the hero had simply wounded the monster, and if he could kill this scoundrel from the North Sea, it meant that he would be stronger than the spear hero, but it would be a little more difficult to do so, since he was in the depths of the sea. Lying on the bed, the young man thought about how they didn't need to put in much effort for an SSS rank quest to appear, so all they could do was lie there and wait. But this was not true, because Alice believed that they had to pay off a certain amount of debt every month, and were required to work hard every month, waiting for the CCC title to appear.